Table of contents. Unexpected visitor. Getting settled. Further introductions. Season of the Cider. Night of Nightmares. White Wonders. Exchanging volleys. Family time. Interrogation. Secrets and shames. Quiet interludes. Awkward explanations. Compliments of the season. The shadow. A knife in the dark. Bloodshed. The show must go on. Royal welcome. Poetry and pageantry. The fires of friendship. Giving and forgiving. Gifts and galas. August assemblage. In the presence of power. Homeward bound. Unexpected visitor. Chapter 1, Unexpected visitor. No pony really noticed the stallion on the train. If they had, they might have noted that he was keeping an inordinate distance from his fellow ponies. They might have noted his slightly huddled posture, as though he was specifically cringing away to put as much distance between himself and any pony else as possible. They might also have noted his bedraggled condition, looking like 100 miles of bad road. However, this stallion had gone out of his way to be exceptionally skilled at going unnoticed. For though he kept as far away from his fellow passengers as he possibly could, he kept as still and calm as possible. His gaze was fixed pointedly out the window, for if it roamed around, he could accidentally catch the eyes of someone else. Catching some pony's eye was a good way to get noticed. Being seen sharply looking away after catching some pony's eye was an even better way. Though the stallion's thoughts were barreling along, much like the train he was currently riding on, his mouth remained shut and motionless. Muttering to yourself was also a good way to get noticed. As it was, he did his best to simply blend into the scenery, to look so bland and uninteresting that no pony would even think of bestowing the slightest iota of attention upon him. After all, he'd had enough attention to last a lifetime, which made it all the more ironic that he was on his way to receive some very specific attention. I must be an idiot for agreeing to this, thought Flaxseed as he continued to stare out the window, his eyes tracing the countryside rushing by. Some pony actually found out about me, learned where I lived, managed to make contact with me, and I'm actually coming to her. I might as well slit my own throat and be done with it. After all, there was only one reason that any pony would try and track him down. And the ponies that did track him down had only one thing on their minds. For Flaxseed, it had been nothing short of stunning that the Grey Pegasus courier hadn't attacked him on sight, much less after he'd. Flaxseed snapped his eyes shut and shook his head vigorously. Getting anxious would only make things worse now. They came out too easily these days when he got anxious. It was partly his own fault. Once he got on a worrying train of thought, it almost always immediately led him into a downward spiral of anger and fear, until he had talked himself into a corner where he felt genuinely afraid for his life. Then they showed. Even ponies who knew nothing of the lore and superstition surrounding his condition marked him as a freak. It was simply better to not deal with ponies at all. Then why am I on my way to meet this Twilight Sparkle? He'd mostly told the Grey Pegasus that he'd come to Ponyville as a means of getting her out of his apartment. That would buy him enough time to move somewhere else before that Twilight mare could get impatient and check up on him again. That was his usual procedure. But then he had seen the newspaper article, on the front page of the Equestrian Times no less. It was a picture of a young colt who apparently had the same condition that Flaxseed had. He was standing there, staring unashamedly into the camera, his eyes fully visible. As Flaxseed read the article, he'd been presented with another picture of the colt contentedly curled up in the arms of the Pegasus mare who had adopted him. The colt lived in Ponyville. He had been hunted as well, had to deal with threats to his life even now. And yet he had boldly come forward and announced his existence and location to all of Equestria. Flaxseed thought it a ridiculously foolish move, but at the same time, he couldn't help but put a little more stock in the things the Grey Pegasus had told him. Maybe going to Ponyville wouldn't be signing his death warrant. Yeah, and maybe the past few years of my life have just been a bad dream, he thought wryly. Still, he had made his decision. Ultimately, there was nothing left but to accept the consequences. Besides, it wouldn't be the first time I chewed my way out of a trap. Rarity hummed a pleasant tune as she made her way back to the boutique, her groceries floating along in a few bags drifting in the current of her magic. After beholding a finished project that you had spent days, or even weeks, working on in all its full glory, there was nothing quite so satisfying as a successful shopping expedition, even if it was little more than a grocery run. With this latest run, she had more than enough for meals for the next few days. Her cash inflow had been a bit tight after suspending her business with ponies in Canterlot, but Rarity was still feeling optimistic. Fancy Pants had promised that he would do his best to make things better, so that she could sell her work, safe in the assumption that it wasn't part of some larger ploy to manipulate her and her friends. She still remembered Twilight's stories about Steel Flint's party and the mares there, who had worn many of Rarity's more outdated designs in an attempt to catch Twilight's attention. The alabaster mare shuddered at the thought of such important mares wearing outfits so hideously out of vogue. Still, Rarity hoped against hope that such a problem would soon be a thing of the past. She had even heard some more promising news recently. Apparently, Parliament had voted to once again start issuing royal warrants, with full support from Princess Celestia. With the dresses she had made for the princesses for various occasions, Rarity was sure that she was more than qualified for one. To make matters even better, so was Applejack. After all, Sweet Appleacre's apples had been a staple of the royal table since the farm's establishment. If she and Applejack managed to secure royal warrants for their respective businesses, it would grant them a measure of protection that would discourage any future attempts to undermine their financial stability. Still, it wouldn't be until the spring parliament sessions that the requirements for eligibility and the means of issuing the warrants themselves would be hammered out. So they would have to remain cautious a little longer, but Rarity found herself feeling hopeful. However, if every cloud has its silver lining, then it also stood to reason that, wherever there was silver lining, there was a fairly intimidating cloud. The fact of the matter was, while the future looked hopeful, the present was more than a little troublesome. It had only been a day or so since Don returned from his recent journey to Diamond Mountain, Canterlot, and back again. His sudden departure had, of course, nearly driven Fluttershy up the wall in anxiety. While they all knew that Don's skills would probably see him through this crisis, that didn't stop his mother and poor Scootaloo from worrying themselves sick about when he would come back, or what state he would come back in. Fortunately, Don had returned free of injuries this time. And, of course, there were Rarity's problems with her own sister. Poor Sweetie Belle had been decidedly unhappy as of late. The fact that her two closest friends had found their cutie marks before her had driven the poor dear to distress. To complicate the problem, while Rarity, along with many others, including no less a mare than Sapphire Shores herself, thought Sweetie Belle's angelic voice to be the root of her cutie mark, Sweetie Belle was not in agreement. The young unicorn filly still refused the notion of singing in front of an audience and didn't seem to think that singing was her calling in life. However, no pony had any idea as to what else it might be that Sweetie could do to find her cutie mark. Fortunately, Sweetie had consolation in the form of Rumble, the dark gray Pegasus colt who had once pined after Scootaloo. However, upon being rejected, Rumble and Sweetie had grown quite close and ended up going to the Harvest Festival together. It was fairly clear to any pony who looked at them now that Rumble and Sweetie were each other's special sumponies. Even more importantly, Rumble was the model of a gentle colt, being kind and attentive to Sweetie, always doing his best to comfort her and never once expressing any frustration with Sweetie's continually deteriorating temperament. More than once, Rarity had walked into the boutique's kitchen to see Rumble gently holding Sweetie Belle in his arms as she sniffled into his shoulder. It would have been absolutely adorable if it weren't so distressing that Sweetie was getting so torn up about this cutie mark business. Rarity was so wrapped up in her thoughts that she almost failed to notice the blonde coat of a pony directly in front of her. Before she realized it, she had nearly walked straight into the unicorn stallion making his way down the road from the train station. "Oh," she exclaimed, "I'm terribly sorry. I wasn't watching where I was going." The stallion acknowledged her with little more than a mumble before continuing on his way. Irritated that her apology had been brushed off like that, Rarity turned to watch him go, a reprimand on her lips but still held within her mouth because it wasn't polite to shout at a pony when you were the one who nearly bumped into him, even if his response had been rather rude. However, her frustration died a whimpering death on her lips as she got a good look at the stallion that she had nearly barreled into. That frustration was quickly replaced with shock. He's so shabby. The horror. If any pony could be called a fixer-upper, then it would definitely be this stallion. His golden coat, which would have probably shined under the afternoon sun, had it been clean, was stained with dirt and filth accumulated after who knew how many days since a bath. His mane was black but shot through with random streaks of gray, as was his tail. Both were tangled and knotted, having clearly never seen the business end of a brush for weeks. His saddlebags were worn and misshapen from being stuffed past capacity. On the whole, this was clearly a stallion who had seen better days. Rarity was so shocked by his state of uncleanliness that she scarcely noticed the image of an open ledger that decorated his flanks. "This is hideous. I cannot allow such a crime against fabulosity to persist. I must take him to my boutique at once. Such a pony should not see the light of day until he has had a bath and a proper grooming session." Rarity lifted her hoof, ready to call out to the stallion, but hesitated. This wouldn't be the first time she had dragged an unfamiliar pony to her boutique in order to help with his appearance, and the previous occasions had been mixed bags. Once, she had dragged a beige earth pony in so that she could work on his traveling cloak, only to find out that said pony was, in fact, a member of the Celestial Order of Knights, one of the most powerful and fearsome warriors in all of Equestria. Said stallion was now running tea house right next to the library and was Twilight Sparkle's colt friend to boot. The second time had been decidedly less pleasant for Rarity, when she found that the young stallion she had dragged into her shop was a psychopathic mercenary with wings forged from pure mithril. That had been a decidedly harrowing experience for her, as she had been forced to create a new traveling cloak for the cream-colored colt. Well, forced was a poor choice of word. Perlin Bluestreak had asked very politely and had refused to threaten her if she declined. Still, that hadn't made the experience any more pleasant. But was she really prepared to risk bringing an unknown pony back into her home and workspace simply because of his lack of attention to his own grooming? She couldn't say that she was, certainly not if it meant risking bringing another mad pony into her abode. Besides, she and her friends had to be extra cautious now. Ever since Dawn had been featured in a front-page article in the Equestrian Times, some of the ponies visiting Ponyville had come with the intention of ending the poor colt's life. In fact, barely more than a day after Dawn had left on his trip to Diamond Mountain, a small mob of ponies had arrived and had been in the process of making their way to Fluttershy's cottage. Rarity shuddered to think what might have happened had Red River and Stormfront, the two mercenaries hired to help keep the peace in just such a situation, not apprehended the group. Rarity was once again lost in her own thoughts, too lost to notice that she had been staring at the unkempt stallion for longer than was polite, too lost to notice that the stallion had realized that she was staring at him. "What do you want?" he growled. I'm sorry," stammered Rarity, a bit nervous now. She hadn't meant to stare at him after all, much less be caught at it. Furthermore, his attitude could not be called pleasant. "I meant nothing by it. You're just what?" asked the stallion, turning to regard her, his body tensing. Rarity was a bit surprised. Though the stallion's tone was aggressive, his posture was anything but. From the way he shuffled from one leg to the other and leaned away from her, it seemed he was more likely to run, rather than attack. Though he seemed angry, it seemed, even more, that he was actually afraid of her. "Oh hey with it," Rarity thought in frustration. She couldn't keep it to herself any longer. "You're just so filthy," she exclaimed, though her volume hardly rose above a normal speaking tone. "When was the last time you had a bath, darling? Your coat is hideous and your mane and tail are in need of a serious grooming." "That's none of your business," snapped the stallion. "I'm just here to see some pony, then I'll be leaving. Just stay out of my way and don't bother me." Rarity gulped. More than ever, she was certain that she didn't want to provoke this stallion any further. "Oh, of course. I'll just leave you be then." She began to back away. The stallion's almond-colored eyes were running back and forth as though he were frantically looking for something. A second later, his horn lit up. Rarity heard something snap off to one side of them. Turning to look, she saw a large tree branch suspended in the stallion's magic as he swung it at her hard. With a shriek, Rarity lunged out of the way, barely avoiding the clumsy swing as it slammed the branch into the ground hard enough to crack it in two. "What do you think you're doing, you brute?" she screamed at the stallion as he levitated the branch up in front of him, keeping the jagged, broken end pointed at her like a spear. "Stay away from me," snarled the stallion. "Get out of here and leave me alone." If his outburst had been intended to allow him to move about the town unmolested, it was backfiring horribly, as the stallion's actions were drawing more and more attention by the moment. Unfortunately for him, many of the ponies currently watching were either friends, acquaintances, or at least customers of hers, while he was a completely unfamiliar face. "Unbelievable. I was leaving," snapped Rarity, still not taking her eyes off the branch. It trembled and wobbled unsteadily in the grip of the stallion's magic, a sign that his self-control was wavering. It was clear that this pony was frightened to the point of irrationality. Deciding that confrontation was hardly a good idea, Rarity continued to slowly back away. If she followed through with what she said she was doing, then perhaps the stallion would calm down to the point that he would no longer attack her. It's certainly worth a try in any case. However, the stallion's condition seemed to be deteriorating by the second. His stick was wavering drunkenly between them. Then she saw it. One moment, the stallion's eyes were a pleasant, almond color. The next, they were a deep blood red. His pupils shrank and elongated vertically, becoming cat-like slits. A startled gasp escaped Rarity, unable to believe her eyes. Are those? There seemed to be little question. Though the color was different, the eyes of the stallion in front of her now bore an uncanny resemblance to Dawn's eyes, the eyes of nightmare. Oh, my word, gasped Rarity. She had grown used to seeing Dawn's eyes, but to see a pair of completely normal eyes suddenly morph into that strange other form was startling and unnerving. The fact that the stallion with those eyes was behaving erratically and had even gone so far as to attack her only made things worse. What? Exclaimed the stallion, looking around frantically to now see that several ponies, attracted by his antics, staring at him in astonishment. When he realized what they must be seeing, he simply turned back to Rarity and snarled, "This was your plan, wasn't it? You wanted to expose me." "Absolutely not," declared Rarity imperiously. "I had no idea of your condition. There is no need to behave so uncouthly. Now that I've seen your eyes, I can understand the situation a bit better. You're here to see Twilight, aren't you? I can show you where she is, so please calm down." "The hay with that," snarled the stallion. "I'm getting out of here. This whole thing's a setup. I won't be tricked again." Rarity sighed. While she knew that this stallion was probably supposed to see Twilight and was probably a necessary participant in her research so that she could isolate the true cause of the eyes of nightmare, trying to force this pony into the library would most likely do more harm than good. It would be better to simply give him his space. If that meant that he ended up not going to Twilight, then so be it. It was still better than risking ponies getting hurt. "If that's what you want, then I won't stop you," said Rarity, carefully stepping back and off to the side, leaving the road behind her open for the gold-colored unicorn to pass through. "No pony here wants to hurt you. We'll just let you be." The stallion's body was trembling, his uncanny gaze flashing from pony to pony, as though he expected them to jump him at any moment. It was clear that he didn't believe a word coming out of her mouth. He appeared to be certain that Rarity and every pony else would attack the moment his back was turned. Rarity found herself swallowing nervously and trying to back further away, in case he began lashing out. However, it came faster than she anticipated. The stallion's hold on the tree branch suddenly firmed up and he whipped it around, sending the branch hurtling straight at Rarity's head. Rarity could only watch in horror as it spun through the air towards her face with enough speed that she wouldn't have been surprised if it cracked her skull. At the last second, the branch split in two, the two halves spinning off on separate courses that took them to either side of her head, leaving a stunned mare, standing there, utterly flummoxed by her good luck. "That's enough." The tone was calm, self-assured, lacking any trace of anger, frustration, or fear. Still, it seemed to cut through all the tension in the air and make it vanish into nothingness. The crowd around Rarity and the strange stallion parted as a familiar beige-colored stallion made his way towards them. His eyes were closed, but he moved with the assuredness of a pony who had no need for them. He approached with a smooth, even gait that made him seem to flow like water, rather than walk. "Oh, thank goodness," muttered Rarity under her breath. "You're a lifesaver, Arkenstone." The light brown earth pony's lips curled up in a smile at her words before he turned his attention to the visiting stallion. "Calm yourself. You are among friends." "Yeah, right," snarled the other stallion, backing away. "I've heard that before." Arkenstone briefly turned his attention to the watching crowd. "Every pony else needs to leave and go about their business. There's nothing for you to do here." Though most ponies only knew him as the eccentric stallion who ran the tea shop by the library, the authority in his voice seemed to compel them to obedience. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to break up. "Now then," said Arkenstone, turning his attention back to the visitor, "is that better?" The gold-colored unicorn didn't seem to know what to say. His eyes flickered, trying to trace the various paths ponies took as they dispersed, as though he still expected a sudden ambush. "Easy now," said Arkenstone, smiling warmly at the visitor. "You're among friends. You have nothing to fear." The stallion's mouth worked, as though he wanted to protest but couldn't find the words. His fear and anger seemed to slide over Arkenstone like water around a rock in the river, the feelings finding no purchase or hold. Slowly, his trembles began to ease. "Now then, perhaps some introductions should help," said Arkenstone. "I am Arkenstone, the proprietor of Ponyville's Tea House." How bobbed his head politely. "And over here is Miss Rarity, the owner of Carousel Boutique." "Charmed," said Rarity, dipping her head in a similar manner. She was still more than a little agitated by the unknown stallion's erratic behavior, but understood well enough that now was not the time to express it. "May I ask your name?" inquired Arkenstone politely. "F. Flaxseed," stammered the stallion, his voice having fallen almost to a whisper. "I see," said Arkenstone, still smiling politely and calmly. "I assume then that you are one of the ponies that Twilight Sparkle contacted regarding a certain eye condition." "Why, you know about that?" asked Flaxseed, his nervousness redoubling. "Well, yes," said Arkenstone. "She is my filly friend after all, so she's told me a great deal about her research." Then it's true," said Flaxseed. "There really is some pony else here like me." "Ah, you mean Don," said Arkenstone. "Yes, though his condition is slightly different than yours. Perhaps you would like to meet him." "Is it that easy?" asked Flaxseed, his tone still somewhat defensive. Arkenstone nodded. "As a matter of fact, he works for me. He's at my tea house right now, which happens to be adjacent to the library, which would be your destination, since you're here to see Twilight. Why don't we introduce you two?" Flaxseed gulped and hesitated. Ultimately, however, he nodded. Arkenstone turned his muzzle towards Rarity. "I can take it from here. Perhaps you'd like to drop by the library later to check up on things." Rarity nodded in agreement, remembering her groceries, which needed tending to. "Of course." Arkenstone nodded back at her and set off towards the library, Flaxseed following haltingly in his wake. Rarity watched them go, her mind still reeling, trying to process the situation. Now that she had seen his eyes, Rarity had a better understanding of the situation. This stallion had clearly been on the receiving end of unkind attentions because of his eyes in the past. It was clear that whatever he had experienced had driven him into an unstable paranoia, where he was just as likely to attack as he was to run. He was so concerned with his own survival that he'd never spared a thought towards his appearance. In spite of how close she had come to having her skull split open, Rarity couldn't bring herself to feel anything but sympathy for the poor stallion. Flaxseed stared. He didn't care that it was rude. He didn't care that it was calling a lot of attention to him. He didn't even care that the pony he was staring at had noticed and was returning the favor. Flaxseed just couldn't bring himself to wrench his eyes away from the ebony colt standing before him. "You're staring," commented Arkenstone wryly, off to the side. "As am I," said Dawn. "Perhaps you could introduce us." "Of course," said Arkenstone. He gestured to the colt. "This is Don Lightwing. He is actually the son of Miss Fluttershy, who recently adopted him. As you can see, his condition is a bit more prominent and visible than yours." "They really do look like Nightmare Moon's eyes," whispered Flaxseed. "I'm surprised that yours would be a different color," commented Dawn. "I hadn't realized this condition varied like that." He had gotten a very good look at Flaxseed's eyes. The moment Flaxseed had seen Dawn, he had been so shocked that his eyes transformed automatically. "I actually knew about that already," said Twilight Sparkle as she walked in the tea house door. Arkenstone had sent Apple Bloom along to the library to let her know the moment he arrived. The filly had complied with commendable alacrity. "The eyes of Nightmare are actually known to come in a variety of colors and almost never a pony's original eye color," she continued, barely aware of the fact that Flaxseed had transferred his attention to her and was now sidling away, slowly working himself over to one of the walls. The author of the cult solar text that first described the condition actually went so far as to fabricate a wide variety of demons that could be classified according to the color of the manifested eyes. The highest ranked demons had eyes like Dawn's, with color that matched Nightmare Moon's. "Interesting," said Dawn. Twilight nodded. "It's a shame that I keep having to reference the cult solar's texts on the subject, but they are the first written source to actually describe the condition, and ludicrous demonological speculation aside, they do serve as a fairly accurate description of symptoms of the condition and the roots of its manifestation. At least, that's what my research has shown so far." "That's reassuring, I suppose," mused Dawn, tipping his head slightly. Said Twilight, turning her attention to Flaxseed. "You must be the stallion Ditzy told me about." "The gray mare with funny eyes?" asked Flaxseed by way of confirmation. "The same," said Twilight, "though I'd ask you to be more polite about her eyes. She has a condition that she can't help any more than you can help yours." "Sorry," said Flaxseed, his ears going back at her remonstration. Twilight sighed before giving the stallion a friendly smile. "Sorry, Ditzy's an important friend of mine and she really went out on a limb tracking you and the other ponies I researched down so that I could ask you here to Ponyville." She lifted a hoof, possibly in an attempt to pat Flaxseed's shoulder reassuringly. However, before she could reach out, Arkenstone restrained her foreleg with his own. She looked at her colt friend in confusion as Arkenstone shook his head before gesturing slightly towards Flaxseed. Now Twilight could see that he had flinched away from her slightly. She said, realizing the visiting stallion was clearly uncomfortable around all these unknown ponies. "Perhaps, since he is here, you should go ahead with your tests," suggested Arkenstone politely. "That is what you invited him here for, correct?" "Yes," said Twilight before turning her attention to Flaxseed. "Is that all right with you?" Once again, Flaxseed's gaze flicked nervously about. I guess. "How about I come with you," suggested Dawn. "If I'm there as well, you'll have nothing to fear." Flaxseed looked back down at the colt and gulped nervously, wondering just how he was so calm and composed. If anything, Dawn's situation should have been worse than his own, what with his eyes always seeming to be locked in that state. And yet, he moved amongst these ponies without worry or concern. "Are you sure?" asked Flaxseed. Dawn nodded. "Everything will be all right. Let's just get Twilight Sparkle's tests out of the way. I can attest that some of them are a little uncomfortable, but nothing painful." "If you say so," said Flaxseed. "Well, the sooner we get started, the sooner we finish," said Twilight, "so let's head back to the library." "Sure," said Flaxseed with a tired sigh. "Let's get this over with." He was getting a little tired of jumping at every shadow by this point. Part of him was still waiting for the other horseshoe to drop. However, staying afraid of everything was proving very tiring. The fact that Dawn was here, in this town, was encouraging enough that Flaxseed was willing to lower his guard a little. With that, Twilight led Flaxseed and Dawn out of the tea house and into the library, where her tests could begin. Rarity knocked politely at the door to the library before opening it. While the library was technically a public building, the fact that it was also Twilight's home meant, at the very least, she should observe proper decorum before going inside. She wasn't sure what she expected to find when she opened the door. It had taken her a while to get back to her boutique and get the groceries put away. Then, she had seen to tidying the place up somewhat before deciding to drop by the library and see if the gold-colored stallion had actually submitted to Twilight's tests. Flaxseed had proven to be extremely nervous and excitable. Worse, he was prone to violence when he felt threatened, which was apparently quite frequently. She wondered just how he would handle some of the tests that Twilight had planned for him. Already, her mind was conjuring an image of a terrified Flaxseed wildly swinging a chair in his magic, desperately trying to drive Twilight back. "But I need to be thorough," she would shout. "I sincerely doubt that a colonoscopy is going to tell you anything about my eyes." He'd shout back. However, much to her relief, when she stepped into the library, she found that the place was quiet, deserted almost. There were no signs of violence, no indicator that Twilight had been forced to defend herself from one of Flaxseed's outbursts. Glancing about the main room, she suddenly noticed Spike moving from shelf to shelf with a feather duster in hand. "Hello, Spike," she said as she stepped further in. "Did that stallion ever show up here?" "You mean the guy that Twilight wanted to run her tests on?" asked Spike by way of clarification. When Rarity nodded, he grinned. "Yeah, they went right down to the lab. Dawn's there too. I think he's trying to help keep the other guy calm." "That would make sense," said Rarity thoughtfully. "I'm sure that meeting Dawn would probably do wonders for that poor stallion's sense of security." "I don't know how long Twilight was planning on taking, but they've been down there for a while," said Spike before turning back to his work. "I think it's okay to go down there if you want to see them," he added. "I think I will," said Rarity before she made her way towards the door leading to the basement. Slowly, she nudged the door open before poking her head through to take a look around. One could never be certain what to expect when one took a peek into Twilight's laboratory when she was in her science zone, as Rarity called it. The first thing she noticed was how quiet it was. There was only the faint beeping of some kind of machinery, presumably one of Twilight's analytical devices. Once Rarity was certain that there was nothing on the verge of blowing up, she stepped all the way through the door and shut it quietly behind her. Now she had a clear view of what was going on down below. Flaxseed was suspended in some kind of machine so that his legs and front body were immobilized. A helmet, shaped like an overturned bowl, rested on his head. Wires snaked out of the helmet and into a blocky machine, which spat out a seemingly endless sheet of paper. Twilight was currently minding the machine, her eyes reading over whatever data the device was providing her. All right, she said, after a moment, this is good, though it's kinda weird to get baseline data after the actual test. I'm sorry, said Flaxseed, sounding genuinely apologetic. You don't need to apologize, said Twilight, not even looking up from her readouts. What's important is that we got clear data from when you're in a normal state and from when the eyes are active. That's exactly what I was looking for. She frowned a little, though, for a baseline, you have awfully high stress levels. I can't help it, said Flax, looking down, his eyes running over the floor. In other words, you've frequently been afraid for your life, said Don, slowly stepping into Flax's view, a kind smile on his face. You're in an unfamiliar situation, with unfamiliar ponies, whom you've been placing a lot of trust in. It's understandable that you're so tense. I think we're just about done for the day, said Twilight. I'd like to run this test at least one more time, hopefully when you've managed to calm down some more. Deciding that this was her chance to make her presence known, Rarity coughed to draw some attention to herself. Excuse me, she said in her most lilting tone, waving at the trio from up above. Oh, said Twilight, smiling as she looked up. Hi Rarity. When did you get here? Just a moment ago, darling, said Rarity as she began to make her descent. She noticed that Flaxseed was studiously avoiding eye contact with her as Don helped him out of Twilight's apparatus. She also noticed a faint blush on the stallion's cheeks. She realized that he was probably embarrassed about his earlier outburst and the fact that he'd nearly hurt her badly. Ah, said Twilight before turning to Flaxseed. Flaxseed, this is Rarity, one of my good friends. Yes, said Flaxseed, averting his eyes from Twilight as well. We met. Twilight looked from Flax to Rarity and back again, a bit confused by his behavior. Pay it no mind, Twilight, said Rarity. We had a slight misunderstanding. That was all. Is everything going all right here? Pretty much, said Twilight, quickly latching onto Rarity's question. Rarity was only too happy to shift the topic of conversation away from the altercation she and the stallion had had earlier, if only for his sake. I've put him through quite a few of the same tests I've conducted on Don. But I feel that his emotional state has affected the results somewhat. I'd like to run them again at a later time, if that's at all possible. How much later are we talking about? Asked Rarity. Twilight shrugged. However long it takes him to feel comfortable in Ponyville. His nervousness and high levels of stress are the main factors skewing my results. But there's a problem with that. Quote. Namely how long he can afford to spend in Ponyville, guessed Rarity, getting her friend's point. After all, Flaxseed had come quite a long way to submit himself to Twilight's battery of tests. It wasn't really fair to ask that he stay for any period longer than he felt that he could before his obligations at home called him back. So how long do you have until you have to return home? Asked Rarity, turning her attention back to Flaxseed. I'm certain you have plenty of other claims to your time. Not really, confessed Flaxseed, looking down again. I don't really have a home right now. What? Gasped Rarity. What do you mean? What about where Ditsy found you? Asked Twilight, equally shocked. I moved out as soon as she was gone, replied Flaxseed. I couldn't really believe anything she told me about what you wanted. I thought that, if you'd already figured out where I lived, you'd be coming for me before long. So I packed up what I could and left. You did that, exclaimed Rarity, but what about your job, your friends? I didn't have either, snapped Flaxseed, a slight note of frustration and anger in his voice. It's been years since I was able to hold down a job longer than a few months. I don't bother trying to make friends with any pony anymore. Either they think I'm a freak when they find out about my eyes or I have to move when. His voice trailed off, but the other three ponies in the room immediately understood what he was getting at. I'm so sorry, said Twilight, her voice almost a whisper. I had no idea you had it so difficult. But what changed your mind about coming to see me? Well, it was the article, said Flaxseed, when I saw that picture of this kid. He jerked a hoof at Dawn. I thought that maybe there was some truth to what that gray mare had been saying. So I decided to give Ponyville a try. So, said Rarity, in other words, you currently have no home, no occupation, and no expectations for your future. Is that right? Flaxseed gave her a shaky nod. That about sums it up. I see, said Rarity, but there is one advantage to this. If you have nothing pressing demanding your return to wherever, then you are free to stay in Ponyville as long as you need to. But I don't have anywhere to stay, protested Flaxseed. I have enough for maybe a night at the inn, but that's as far as it goes. I've got no job, no income. Oh pish tosh darling, said Rarity imperiously, there is absolutely no need for you to worry about those things. A job will come in time, but in the meantime, I will be happy to have you as a guest in my home. What? Exclaimed Twilight. What? Repeated Flaxseed, more than a little shocked that the mare he had nearly brained with a tree branch was willing to open her home to him. Dawn said nothing, merely looking back and forth between the participants of the conversation, feeling a slight hint of déjà vu, given the similarities between Flaxseed's situation and his own. Rarity, are you sure about this? Asked Twilight, I mean, right out of the blue. Oh, it's nothing, Twilight, said Rarity with a giggle. I will be more than able to support a guest in my home. More importantly, it will allow Mr. Flaxseed to be available for your tests for as long as you need. Most importantly of all, right now, Ponyville may very well be the safest place in Equestria for ponies with his condition. Twilight blinked, having a little trouble trying to fault Rarity's judgment. However, she couldn't really find any objections to make, nor did she want to make any objections. Having spent the past few hours dealing with Flaxseed and observing just how scarred and traumatized he had been by his previous experiences, she couldn't fault Rarity's desire to provide him with a place of safety and comfort, surrounded by ponies they could count on to not try and hurt him. The only real concern she had was how jumpy the poor stallion was. Without Dawn present to act as a source of reassurance, Twilight would have been amazed if she'd been able to get Flax through even half the tests he had planned for him. It was clear that, even more than he was a pony who had a piece of the puzzle that would lead to the answers they sought regarding the Eyes of Nightmare, Flaxseed was also a stallion that they needed to help. There was certainly no chance now that she or any of their other friends could bring themselves to simply send the stallion on his way into an uncertain future once they had what they needed. Are you sure about this? Asked Flaxseed, fixing Rarity with a disbelieving look. Rarity nodded and gave the gold-colored stallion her most sincere smile. My dear, I honestly extend you an invitation to stay with me and my sister at our home. I'm sure that you will be quite comfortable there and, more importantly, quite safe. She raised a hoof tentatively. Flaxseed flinched back away from the movement. However, Rarity refused to lower the proffered limb and instead held it steady in front of her. It took a few long seconds for Flaxseed to grasp what she was doing before he reached out with his own hoof and brought it to hers. The two shook slowly before Rarity lowered hers and Flaxseed followed suit. All right, I guess, said Flaxseed, thank you for offering me a place to stay. Excellent, said Rarity with a wide smile, then, if you are done with the experiments today, why don't I go ahead and show you to your new home then? Flaxseed directed a questioning look to Twilight, who simply smiled. I've gotten all the data I need for the day, she said, feel free to drop by any time. The library is always open to you. I can also probably help you with finding a job later. I will help as best I can, added Dawn. He came a bit closer to Flaxseed, giving the stallion an encouraging smile. You needn't fear anything from any pony here. But what about those cult jerks? Asked Flaxseed, aren't they coming after you here, especially after you plastered your face up for the whole of Equestria to see? Well, yes, admitted Dawn a bit sheepishly, that was somewhat deliberate on our part as it allows us to capture members of the cult Solar and learn more about the organization as a whole. But keep in mind that they are coming after me. I sincerely doubt that they know about you. Think of me as a lightning rod. I will draw them away from you by drawing their wrath onto myself. Are you crazy? Asked the shocked stallion, you're just a kid. One who is more than capable of defending himself, replied Dawn assuredly, just don't worry. You're safe and among friends here. Flaxseed gulped and nodded. I've been hearing that a lot lately, if you say so. Well, now that we've taken care of that, let's go back to my boutique and get you settled, declared Rarity, come along. She turned and began to walk up the stairs to the ground floor of the library. Flaxseed nodded dumbly and followed in her wake. Author's notes. Thank you for your patience in awaiting this 7th installment of the Savage Skies series. I apologize for taking so long to get this out. A lot of stuff was going on and it was a fair bit of work getting so many chapters ready for posting. In any case, this chapter introduces Flaxseed, who serves as a demonstration of the way that the Eyes of Nightmare are supposed to act. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't claim any accuracy regarding his behavior, but I did try to imagine how somebody in his situation might react. This story will also be Rarity's time to shine, as she has stepped forward to take care of the guy. Next chapter, Flaxseed moves in. Dawn and Fluttershy move out. Getting settled. Chapter 2, Getting Settled. Now then, said Rarity, as she led Flaxseed past the Carousel Boutique's showroom and back into the building's living quarters, go ahead and leave your things in the kitchen. I need to go prepare the guest room for you. In the meantime, she gave the stallion a critical look, carefully assessing his sullied state. You should help yourself to the amenities in the bathroom. You are in serious need of some grooming. Yeah, you mentioned that before, said Flaxseed in a sullen tone. Well, it happens to be true, replied Rarity, turning her nose upwards. There is no denying the fact that you are currently quite filthy. How long has it been since you last had a bath or even a shower that didn't simply involve you wandering outside in a rainstorm? Well, I haven't had much opportunity, admitted Flaxseed reluctantly. When you bounced around from place to place getting uprooted at a moment's notice and were unable to hold down a job for more than a few months at most, it was hard to afford housing and pay for amenities like running water. Furthermore, he had been on the move the past few days with no time to settle down or even seek out a convenient lake or stream for bathing. The seasons weren't helping either, as taking a dip in a lake or stream during the late fall was like sending hypothermia a monogrammed invitation. But now you do, said Rarity, lowering her nose again so she could look Flaxseed straight in the eye. You have a place to stay and that place has convenient facilities. I simply insist you take advantage of them. You should take a bath and get yourself clean in. She smiled and raised a hoof, stopping as Flaxseed flinched back from her, prompting her to lower it. You should make it a nice long soak. You need to relax, dear. I can tell how tense you are. You have nothing to worry about while you're staying with me and my sister. Take a good, long, hot soak and let your cares slip away. Then you'll be able to sleep easy in a comfortable bed. She gave Flaxseed a pleading look. Please. Flaxseed let out a sigh. There was no way he would say no to that face. All right, you win, he said. Good, declared Rarity. The bathroom is upstairs, second door on your left. I'll take care of getting your room ready in the meantime. Flaxseed nodded and headed up the stairs, following Rarity's directions. She checked to make sure that the stallion had left his saddlebags on the kitchen table before following him up the stairs. As she passed the door to the bathroom while heading towards the guest room, she heard the water running and smiled to herself before continuing on to the guest room. She made sure that everything was clean before laying out a fresh set of linens for the bed. For a mare of her talents, it was fool's play to make sure that everything was ready. A few minutes later, she was down in the kitchen, working on dinner for 3. Rarity, I'm home, called Sweetie Belle as she came in the door. Welcome back, dear, said Rarity, turning to look at her sister. However, she was surprised to see who had accompanied Sweetie home. Arkenstone. Hello, said Arkenstone with a small smile as he followed Sweetie into the kitchen. I decided to walk your sister home from the tea house. That was very kind of you, said Rarity, but I assume that isn't your primary reason for being here. Arkenstone nodded. Dawn told me about your decision to offer Flaxseed a place to stay. I wanted to share some advice to you. What advice? Asked Rarity as she took a seat at the table. You too, Sweetie Belle, said Arkenstone to the filly before she could leave the adults to their conversation. You need to hear this as well. You're going to be sharing your home with this stallion too, so these are things you need to keep in mind as well. Okay, said the filly a little uncertainly as she took a seat at the table as well. So what is it about Flaxseed that you wanted to talk about? Asked Rarity. I'm sure you noticed that Flaxseed is a stallion of some interesting foibles, said Arkenstone wryly. No, replied Rarity sarcastically, I hadn't realized it all. Exactly, said Arkenstone, he is a traumatized stallion, some pony who is used to having to hide himself away, who has grown afraid of when others approach him unexpectedly. It is easy for him to feel threatened and when he feels threatened, he lashes out, often violently. I don't understand, said Rarity, didn't Dawn have many of the same problems? In a sense, replied Arkenstone, but Dawn was sufficiently well trained that he was able to maintain his self-control most of the time. And when Stormfront and Red River thought that said self-control was weakening, they were forced to take drastic measures to avoid it. Sweetie Belle shivered, remembering the fight between Dawn and the two mercenary stallions. It had very nearly ended in her friend's death. Arkenstone continued, Flaxseed is a different matter. He is nowhere near as potentially dangerous as Dawn was. The main issue is that, where the two of you are concerned, he is dangerous enough and he has less control. However, I have some advice which will help you avoid any mishaps. And what, pray tell, is that? Asked Rarity. First, since he reacts negatively and violently to surprises and unexpected occurrences, you must avoid those at all costs. If you are entering a room that he is already occupying, make sure that you announce your presence clearly. If he's distracted, make sure you secure some manner of acknowledgement before approaching him. It will be best if you move carefully and deliberately. Avoid sudden movements as much as you can. Rarity nodded. That made some sense at least. Flaxseed was clearly going to be jumpy at the best of times. It was good to know the things she could do to avoid making him jump. Second, continued Arkenstone, do not approach him while he's asleep. If you need to approach him, you need to make sure that he is awake first. I know it may seem impolite, but ponies in Flaxseed's position are very much aware of how vulnerable they are when asleep. He will most likely try to attack you if you come near him while he's sleeping, possibly even lash out uncontrollably. I see, said Rarity, nodding again. Finally, make sure that you get his explicit permission before you try initiating any kind of physical contact. Make sure that he can see what you're doing and, again, make sure that you move slowly and deliberately. So no surprise hugs from behind. Rarity and Sweetie nodded wordlessly. Rarity had known that having a guest, particularly one like Flaxseed, would require some adjustment on their part, but she'd never figured how much of an adjustment it would be into things that she and Sweetie Belle likely did without much thought. They would have to think very carefully about how they were behaving themselves around their guest if they wanted to be sure that he would feel safe and secure. Interjected Sweetie, speaking of surprises. Isn't there a pony we should be worrying about? Rarity turned her gaze to Arkenstone, whose ears went flat. You mean Pinkie Pie, right? Sweetie Belle nodded. She'll get really excited when she finds out there's a new pony staying here. And you know how much she likes surprise parties. I'll see if I can talk to her, said Arkenstone. I haven't interacted with her much, but I think I can keep her in one place long enough to listen to reason. Rarity nodded, though her expression was rather dubious. I wish you luck in your endeavor. I think you'll need it. With a hollow chuckle, Arkenstone left to visit Sugarcube Corner, leaving Rarity and Sweetie alone in the kitchen. The two sisters shared a look. Well then, shall we finish working on dinner? Asked Rarity. Sure, said Sweetie. Now that she was starting to get the hang of her magic, Sweetie was becoming a bit more reliable when it came to domestic chores, like cooking. Well, her cooking still had a ways to go, but she no longer reduced the final product of her efforts to a charred black paste and the kitchen was still intact after she used it. They both stood to get to work. Out of the corner of her eye, Rarity noticed the shadow of a stallion standing in the doorway. Is there something else you needed to talk about? She cut herself off when she realized that it wasn't Arkenstone standing at the door. Flaxseed was there, looking at them with an unreadable expression on his face. Oh, it's you, said Rarity, not sure if she should feel unnerved or relieved. I thought you'd be in the bath longer. Come right in, have a seat, dinner will be ready shortly. Wordlessly, Flaxseed did as he was told, sitting himself at the table. Rarity had to admit that the stallion was a much better sight after he'd cleaned himself up. His mane and tail were combed out, a fair difference from their original knotted and tangled state. The gray streaks were more visible now. Rarity wondered if they were part of his natural color or if the continued stresses he had been subjected to had been causing him to go gray early. She sincerely hoped that it was the former. Just as she suspected, now that he'd cleaned the dust and grime out of his coat, his fur practically shined beneath the kitchen lights. Rarity almost wished she could just haul the stallion out of the boutique and get a look at him beneath the light of the sun. However, two things stopped her. The first was that it was evening, which wouldn't allow her to get the full benefit of the sun's illumination. The second was that she remembered Arkenstone's warning about treating Flaxseed carefully and knew that he probably wouldn't take to being mare-handled well. For a few minutes, Rarity and Sweetie worked in silence. The silence was broken when Flaxseed raised his head and stared at Rarity. I heard you talking with that stallion about me. Rarity froze slightly and gulped. Oh, you heard that. Flaxseed looked down at the table. I guess I can't blame you. I'm a basket case. It'd probably be safer if I didn't stay. Don't be ridiculous, said Rarity, spinning around rapidly, her sudden movement making Flaxseed flinch before she remembered Arkenstone's advice. With a sigh, she walked carefully to the table and sat down across from him. I understand that this is going to be a difficult adjustment for all of us. But it's the right thing to do. Lifting a hoof, she rested it on the table and slowly slid it across towards Flaxseed. It took the stallion a moment before he realized what Rarity was trying to do. Hesitantly, he raised his own hoof and did the same, sliding it across the table until their hooves met. Gently, Rarity curled her fetlock around his own, interlocking their forelegs, giving his a squeeze. You deserve this, said Rarity, with a smile. You deserve a place where you can be at ease, where you don't have to worry about ponies turning on you over something as silly as a superstition over your eyes. I want this town and this home to be that place for you, a place where you can rest and recover, where you don't have to spend every waking minute looking over your shoulder, where you don't have to sleep so lightly that you wake up at the slightest provocation, fearing for your life. So even if it is a little tricky for us at first, it's still worth our while to make the effort. Please, stay. Slowly, the corners of Flaxseed's mouth turned upwards and he began to smile. Finally, he returned Rarity's gesture and gently squeezed her foreleg back. Thank you, he said softly. You're welcome, said Rarity. She let go of his leg and turned back to preparing dinner. By the way, she said, I thought you'd be in the bath longer. You would probably benefit from a nice soak. Maybe, said Flaxseed ruefully, but by the time I finished cleaning myself off the bath water had turned gray and I didn't think it would be a good idea to soak in that. Rarity shuddered at the thought of just how much filth had to have been on Flaxseed's body to turn the water's color, as well as the thought of soaking in such water. She certainly couldn't fault Flaxseed for his decision. It was also very polite of him to not simply drain and refill the tub, which would have used more water. Oh well, she said, perhaps next time. Perhaps, agreed Flaxseed. Dinner was a pleasant affair. Flaxseed wasn't much for conversation, and Rarity suspected that many of the things they could have potentially talked about would have simply turned the conversation towards the more unpleasant experiences in the stallion's life. Instead, she talked to Sweetie about her day, how things were going at the tea house, how things were going with Rumble. Fortunately, Flaxseed's presence was a sufficient distraction that Philly forgot that she was currently distraught over her lack of cutie mark. For the night, at least. The night had been a rare experience for Flaxseed. He was able to eat his fill of some delicious food cooked for his sake by other ponies. After brushing his teeth and seeing to other needs, the stallion retired to his room, where he found himself looking over a queen-size bed that had been made up with soft sheets and a warm down comforter. Flaxseed stared at the bed, feeling slightly overcome by the feeling of it all. Part of him wanted to climb on top of the bed and start jumping, just like a foal, and experiment with how bouncy it was. However, he realized that such behavior wasn't appropriate for a guest. Flaxseed was pulling up the covers and preparing to climb in when he heard a light knocking on his door. He turned and used his magic to open it, finding Sweetie Belle standing there. What is it? Asked Flaxseed. Sweetie scuffed the floor a bit nervously. Rarity and Arkenstone were saying that you might have some trouble sleeping, so. She lit her own horn and lifted an item into view. It was a fair-sized stuffed brown rabbit with long ears. This is Flopsy. I used to cuddle with him when I needed help getting to sleep. I thought he might help you. Flaxseed used his magic to take the stuffed animal from Sweetie, floating it over so he could get a better look at it. The rabbit was clearly well loved, but any damage from wear and tear had been repaired so well that it might as well not have happened at all. It was clean, as Flaxseed had come to expect from anything Rarity permitted in her home. He looked over at Sweetie Belle, who was watching him intently with a hopeful expression. Thank you, he said, smiling at the filly. I think this might be exactly what I need. Sweetie burst into an exuberant grin. You're welcome, she said in her most cheerful tone. Good night, Mr. Flaxseed. Good night, said Flaxseed, closing the door as the filly rushed off to her own room. For a long moment, Flaxseed simply stared at the rabbit. Already, a warm feeling was gathering in the pit of his stomach as the stallion wondered at his good fortune to have found such generous and caring ponies. More importantly, they knew the truth about him and didn't care one bit. Since he'd been forced to move out of his parents' home, he'd never felt so welcome, so safe, or so cared for. Maybe I really can be safe here, he thought. However, the uncertainty that had dogged him throughout his life was still there in the back of his mind, like an itch he couldn't scratch. Well, one last thing, thought Flaxseed, reaching out with his magic. The latch turned on the door, locking it. He then followed it with a spell that had saved his life several times in the past, a locking spell that secured the door even further, also serving as a barrier that would keep another unicorn from using her magic to manipulate the lock from the other side of the door. The barrier also blocked the keyhole on the other side, ensuring that no pony could get through without at least causing enough of a ruckus that Flaxseed would be awake and ready by the time they managed to work around his spells. No matter how nice these ponies had been to him, Flaxseed didn't feel that he could truly trust them. However, as he climbed into bed, he took one last look at the rabbit. With a resigned sigh, he wrapped his forelegs around it and hugged it to his barrel. No, he thought, I can't trust them just yet. He hugged the rabbit tighter. But I'd really like to. Those were his final thoughts as he drifted off into one of the soundest, most untroubled sleeps he had in a long time. There we go, said Fluttershy as she settled a dust cover over the last chair in the room. Turning, she looked around until her eyes found Dawn. Is everything ready? Dawn looked over his shoulder and nodded at her. The two of them had been preparing to move out of the cottage and into Caramel's home for the season. Already, the place seemed strangely empty without Fluttershy's usual menagerie of critters. Most had already moved into their dens with their winter stores or left on the southward migrations. The last remaining non-pony resident of the cottage was a determined Angel who followed Dawn around, using gestures and other body language to guide the young colt through the various tasks that needed to be completed before he and Fluttershy could leave. Before long, the little rabbit would be joining the rest of his kin in a snug den for the season. Of course, moving out of the house for a season was not as simple as it sounded. The icebox needed to be cleared of any food that would spoil over the coming months, along with the pantry. The furniture would need to be covered, pipes drained of water, and a host of other tasks that were needed to prepare the house for a period of being uninhabited. But this was it. It was their final day. Already, 2 pairs of loaded saddlebags waited at the door, having been loaded with the necessities that they would have to bring with them to Caramel's house. Once they finished the last of their chores and saw Angel into his den, the two of them would head into Ponyville and to Caramel's house. All right, said Fluttershy, giving one last look around. Everything seems to be in order. She regarded her rabbit. Angel, it's time for you to go to bed. The rabbit looked as though he wanted to argue, if only for the sake of arguing, but was stopped by a wide yawn. Closing his mouth, Angel gave Fluttershy a resigned look and bounced towards the cottage door. At the threshold, he turned and gave Dawn a stern look. The colt merely nodded in response to the rabbit's wordless instruction. Looking somewhat reassured, Angel bounced out the door and was gone. Fluttershy couldn't help but giggle as she watched the interplay between her beloved pet and her son. Let's go, she said, hoisting her own saddlebags as Dawn did the same next to her. The two of them set off at a light canter down the path. The sun was already dropping past the horizon as they made their way into town. The air was getting chilly as the season progressed. Fluttershy shivered and pulled her scarf tighter around her. Dawn seemed unfazed by the cold though. It was to be expected, given that he'd once spent an entire year in the everfree forest, including the winter season, without so much as a single thread to keep himself warm. His training helped him to endure the late autumn chill with nary a shiver. Their journey carried them past warmly lit houses where other families were already inside, enjoying warm meals and basking in each other's companionship. Before long, their eyes found their destination, a house that looked much warmer to their eyes than any other, not in the least because a certain stallion was waiting for them at the door with a smile. Welcome back, said Caramel as he ushered them inside, shutting the door behind them. He led the pair into the living room so that they could warm up beside the fire. Did you guys eat already? Fluttershy nodded. Yes, we made an early dinner. We had to use up the last of our food after all. Okay, said Caramel with a chuckle. He and Fluttershy curled up on a set of cushions in front of the fireplace, settling Dawn between them. I'm glad I didn't make anything for you then. I thought that's what you might have been doing. I'm sorry, said Fluttershy, giving him a sheepish smile. We should have told you so that you knew for certain. It's not a big deal. I could whip something up fairly quickly, said Caramel. It's no onion soup, but it's not too hard to come up with something Dawn would like. You shouldn't worry about me, replied Dawn. By now my body can probably handle most foods. It's simply a matter of preference. You needn't take too much trouble on my account. Caramel chuckled. Seeing as the list of foods you have an aversion to tends to consist of stuff most foals would love to eat to the exclusion of all else against the better advice of their parents, it's not that bad. You could be a lot worse as far as picky eaters are concerned. That's right, agreed Fluttershy with a lilting giggle. You'll probably spoil me for my next foal, seeing as you don't bother me constantly about sweets. Which is rather ironic considering my potential father is a candy maker, quipped Dawn, who smirked as the cheeks of both his mother and her colt friend exploded with bright red color. For a moment the two adults lay flummoxed by the colt's words. Caramel gave Fluttershy a stunned look, which she returned with a coy smile. Looking down, Fluttershy watched her son. Do you really like Caramel? Yes, replied Dawn, nuzzling against his mother's shoulder. And you'd be okay with us, that is, all of us living together. Fluttershy gulped, her cheeks not able to get any redder, though not for lack of trying. I certainly am, replied Dawn, though, knowing Angel, he might have some objections. Does that mean you're going to call me Dad from now on? Asked Caramel. Dawn hummed for a second. Well, we're already living together, giving the family a trial run as it were. I don't see why I can't do that too, Dad. Caramel sucked in his breath sharply, suddenly being addressed like that shocking him. He turned to give Fluttershy a wide-eyed stare. The yellow mare couldn't help but giggle at the stallion's stunned expression. Seized by a sudden impulse, she leaned in and gave him a peck on the lips. I think I could get used to this, she said as she pulled back, giggling again at the now blissfully vacant expression occupying Caramel's face. So could I, said Dawn, laying his head on his forelegs, snuggling down between the two adults and basking in their warmth. With a happy smile, Fluttershy laid her head across her son's. At the same time, she extended a wing and draped it over Caramel's back, humming with pleasure as Caramel laid his head over hers. There they stayed, late into the night, basking in the fire's warmth. So your room is right here, said Caramel, gesturing to a door at the top of the stairs. Dawn nodded and took his saddlebags inside. Meanwhile, Caramel was leading Fluttershy down the hall to the next room in line. Yours is right here, he said, pushing the door open and holding it to Fluttershy. Caramel was surprised to see that Fluttershy didn't budge after he'd shown her room. Is something wrong? He asked. Fluttershy ducked her head slightly, causing her mane to fall over one eye as her cheeks began to color. Well, I was wondering, if I could, maybe share why your room. Caramel wasn't sure what to say as his cheeks blushed to match Fluttershy's. He would have been lying if he'd ever said he hadn't considered the possibility. He'd spent many a minute dreaming of spending winter nights in his bed, Fluttershy snuggled up against him and wrapped in his arms. He would have been lying if he'd ever said that his daydreams hadn't occasionally taken on a more racy quality. However, what worked in fantasy didn't often work in real life. Caramel was too much of a gentlecolt to consider anything that might be construed as taking advantage of Fluttershy. As it was, the tan stallion was amazed by her boldness and her willingness to ask. Sure, they had shared a bed that one night that Dawn had been in Cloudsdale, but they hadn't since then. If you don't want to, that's okay, said Fluttershy, averting her eyes. Swallowing hard, Caramel stepped forward and used his forehoof to tilt Fluttershy's head up so that her eyes could meet his. Are you sure about this? He asked, is this what you really want? Fluttershy's eyes widened and she smiled gleefully. Yes, she exclaimed, I really do want to stay with you. Caramel gulped again. If you're sure, I don't want you to feel like you have to do anything if you're not ready. Well, I'm not ready for anything like. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Sex. But, her volume began to rise again. But I really do want to stay with you through the night, if you'll let me. Caramel tilted her chin up a little further and brought his lips to hers in a kiss. They held the kiss a moment before Caramel pulled away. As he did, Fluttershy turned her head so that she could rub her cheek up against his hoof. Nothing could make me happier, said Caramel. He led Fluttershy to the door right across the hall from the room he'd originally set aside for her. He led Fluttershy into his bedroom, where she could set down her things. Fortunately, being the master bedroom meant that Caramel's room had its own adjoining bathroom, which allowed Dawn to freely use the bathroom in the hall. It took the pair of them a few minutes to get ready to bed. Caramel climbed in, Fluttershy following suit. The stallion pulled the covers up over the two of them before wrapping his arms around Fluttershy and pulling her tight against him. The yellow mare sighed happily as she nuzzled in under the stallion's neck, her wings extending to wrap around him. Glancing down at her and the content expression on her face, Caramel's body filled with incredible warmth as he realized just how right this felt. If I could wake up to this every single day, I'd die a happy stallion, he thought. Fluttershy. Fluttershy tilted her head up so that her teal eyes could meet Caramel's own gaze. The slight smile on her face and the look of hopeful expectation nearly made Caramel's heart seize up. He knew exactly what to say. Ever since they had begun dating, those words rose to the back of his throat whenever he held her, whenever he met her eyes, whenever he kissed her. The words lingered there, always trying to force their way out of his mouth. But he'd always held them in check for a number of reasons. It was too soon, they weren't ready. But here and now, in his own house, in his own bedroom, with her in his arms, Caramel had never felt more ready or more determined. Fluttershy, I love you. Fluttershy's eyes widened and her mouth opened in a slight O of surprise as his words hit her. For a moment, Caramel was worried that maybe he'd pushed things too far. But then, to his relief and everlasting happiness, the look of astonishment faded from Fluttershy's face and was replaced by the most radiant smile he'd ever seen her wear. She pushed against him, rolling Caramel onto his back as she laid down on top of his chest, sliding up slightly so she could bring her lips to his with an unbridled passion he hadn't seen in her since that evening ride of the Ferris wheel. Caramel returned the kiss with equal vigor as he pulled Fluttershy tighter against him. When they finally parted, Fluttershy stared down at Caramel, still wearing that same exultant smile. I love you too, she said. She laid her head down, tucking it under his neck once again, letting out a cat-like purr as she nuzzled up against her stallion. Caramel couldn't resist the urge to lean down and gently nibble one of her ears, making Fluttershy giggle lightly. "Good night," he whispered into the ear he'd just nibbled. "Good night," Fluttershy whispered back. The two of them drifted off to sleep, holding one another tightly. Rarity hummed a cheerful tune as she laid out a plate of pancakes and eggs for her younger sister. Sweetie Belle was trying her hardest to stifle a yawn as she came down the stairs. "Good morning, sweetie," said Rarity as the filly took her seat at the table. "Morning, sis," said Sweetie, finally finding her focus. She quickly levitated her fork and began to dig into her breakfast. "I saw what you did last night," commented Rarity as she loaded up her own plate. Sweetie's fork froze halfway up to her mouth. "You did?" "Yes," replied Rarity, taking her own seat at the table, "and I must say, I am very proud of you. That was very generous and kind. I'm sure that Mr. Flaxseed appreciates your gesture." Sweetie gave her elder sister a delighted smile. "Thanks." She looked around. "Is he up yet?" "No, I don't believe so," said Rarity. "I haven't checked in his room. However, the lock charm he placed on the door is still there, which at least means that he's inside. I wasn't about to try and disturb him just to check." "What if he snuck out?" asked Sweetie. "I doubt that," said Rarity, "or, at least, I hope he didn't. I believe he's still in the room. Most lock charms expire very quickly when the pony who cast the spell leaves the room, even if her egress is through somewhere besides the door she locked. There are versions that can last beyond that, but they are much higher level spells and more difficult to learn." "So, he's still asleep then?" asked Sweetie. "I believe so," replied Rarity, "and I intend to let him keep sleeping. After everything he's been through, I certainly believe that our guest has earned at least one lie-in, if not more. I'm happy to let him sleep as long as he wants to today." "But what about when he wakes up?" asked Sweetie. "Simple, I'll make his breakfast when that happens," replied Rarity. "I have no plans to go anywhere today, so I'll be working here. I can make him breakfast when he comes down." She certainly had plenty of work to keep herself occupied with. With Nightmare Night fast approaching, she had plenty of orders for various costumes, not to mention the commission she also had from Sapphire Shores. As it was, she'd planned to work through the day anyway. The two of them continued eating. By the time the sisters had finished, Flaxseed still hadn't come down the stairs. Rarity saw Sweetie off to work at the tea house. Before she started her own work, Rarity went upstairs and checked the door to Flax's room. It was still locked and warded. She had no idea if the stallion on the other side was asleep or not, but decided that it was better not to invade his privacy. He would come down when he was good and ready, at least she hoped he would. Rarity lost herself in her work. Fabric flew, scissors snipped, needles jabbed, pulling thread, and the sewing machine ran in a near constant drone as the alabaster mare worked her way through outfit after outfit. Fortunately, Nightmare Night costumes didn't require nearly the same level of skill or precision that her typical commissions required, although they did sometimes require some extra creativity on her part depending on what features her customers wanted on their customers. As a result, Rarity was able to finish several outfits in short order. Though she was engrossed in her work, Rarity still kept an ear out, which helped her pick up the sound of some pony softly making his way down the stairs. She began to set down her implements, shutting off the sewing machine so that she could make her way back to the kitchen, where she found Flaxseed, looking around, seeming slightly dazed. Rarity was about to step forward when she remembered Arkenstone's advice from the previous day. "Good morning," she said from her position at the door. "Did you sleep well?" Flax jumped with a startled yelp at the sound of her voice, whirling around to face her. It took the gold-colored stallion a few seconds to get himself back under control when he saw that Rarity hadn't made a single move towards him. Sorry," he said. "It's fine, dear," said Rarity, finally making her way into the kitchen, casually moving past Flax so that she could reach the counter and work on the stallion's brunch, seeing as it was nearly noon. "So, did you sleep well?" "Why yes," said Flaxseed, settling himself at the table and taking a deep breath as he tried to calm himself down all the way. "That was the best sleep I've had in ages." "I'm very glad to hear that," said Rarity, smiling as she made a short stack of pancakes for the stallion while scrambling some eggs. She set the dish in front of him and waited politely, watching Flaxseed as he ate. "Do you have any plans for the day?" asked Rarity, folding her hooves so that she could rest her chin on top of them. Not really," admitted Flaxseed. He was used to taking things a day at a time. Making plans ahead of time usually didn't work out very well because any plans he did make were frequently disrupted. "I see," said Rarity. "I was wondering about that. You'd probably be bored out of your mind if you tried to spend the entire day in here." That's true," agreed Flaxseed, wondering what she was getting at. "That's why I was thinking that perhaps we should take a walk around town," said Rarity. "I would very much like to introduce you to my dear friends. They are all very nice ponies whom I think you would get along very well with." Flaxseed's ears perked up. "Of course," said Rarity. "I'm not about to leave you to wander about an unfamiliar town filled with ponies you've never seen before on your own. At the very least, I should accompany you. It's much easier when you're in the company of a pony that you're familiar with." Flaxseed mulled over her words for a moment. "I guess you have a point," he admitted. The pessimist in him still suspected that she was simply offering to show him around so that she could keep an eye on him, which, ironically enough, was also what his more optimistic thoughts were suggesting. After all, she probably simply wanted to keep him at ease so that he wouldn't panic if something unexpected happened. "I can tell that you don't quite trust me," said Rarity, using her magic to whisk away Flaxseed's empty plate, "and I understand. You don't have to trust me completely, but I would still very much like to help you feel more at home here in Ponyville. I think that you'll like the ponies we're going to meet today." Flaxseed gulped but nodded resolutely. "I hope so," he said. "That's the spirit," said Rarity as she finished cleaning the dishes. She'd made considerable progress through the morning, so there was certainly no reason she couldn't set some time aside to take a stroll through Ponyville with her new friend. After closing and locking the boutique behind her, Rarity and Flaxseed set off down the street. Rarity already had her first destination in mind. It would probably be the most stressful of the encounters she had planned for Flaxseed today, but it was best to get it out of the way as soon as possible. So she led Flaxseed toward the building that looked like a life-size gingerbread house. Flaxseed gazed up at the building in awe. As he did so, his nose twitched at the various smells emerging from within. To be frank, the entire place smelled heavenly. Even though he'd just enjoyed a hearty breakfast, Flaxseed's stomach began to rumble, tantalized by the sweet aroma wafting out from the building. From the amused look on Rarity's face, she hurt his stomach too. My, she said playfully with a merry twinkle in her eye, ponies are going to think I don't feed you properly if your stomach keeps growling like that. Flaxseed couldn't help but blush and rub the back of his head. Sorry. It's all right, dear. I must admit, I'm no slouch in the kitchen, but I can't hold a candle to Pinkie Pie even if almost all she ever makes is sweets. Is that your friend that you wanted to introduce to me? She is, replied Rarity. I'll have to warn you in advance, this could be a little difficult for you. Pinkie Pie is a bright, beautiful, wonderful pony who dedicates almost every waking moments to making others smile and enjoy themselves. That said, she can be a little insensitive, even at the best of times. I'm kinda used to insensitive, replied Flaxseed. I've lived in Manhattan. True, agreed Rarity. The problem is that you aren't fully in control of your reflexes, that if you're caught by surprise or startled, you can do things that might be dangerous. Flaxseed lowered his head. It's all right, said Rarity, resisting the urge to pat Flaxseed on the shoulder, Arkenstone's instructions always at the back of her mind. The problem is that Pinkie is extremely energetic, highly unpredictable at the best of times, and she happens to specialize in startling and surprising others. Some pony can specialize in that? Asked Flaxseed. Rarity nodded. Her favorite parties are surprise parties and she is one of Ponyville's premier pranksters. She'll never do anything malicious, but her surprises are probably more than would be healthy for you right now. Then why are you introducing me to her? Asked Flaxseed, his ears going back. The more he heard, the less he wanted to do with the mare that Rarity was describing. Rarity sighed, because Pinkie, for all her faults, is a dear friend of mine, who would like nothing more than to make your life brighter and happier. And I believe that she truly can, if she can rein her impulses in. The problem is, the longer I take to introduce you to her, the more likely she is to pop out of nowhere and scare the color out of your coat. I know that Arkenstone went to talk to her last time. I can only hope that he has succeeded in convincing her to relax a little. Flaxseed gulped and looked at the sugar cube corner again. The building looked much more foreboding now. However, he decided to place his trust in Rarity. She had yet to steer him wrong, even though he'd only known her for all of a day now. Well then, here we go, said Rarity, heading up to the door and pushing it open. Flaxseed followed her inside, his eyes nervously tracing around the shop. The building was pleasantly warm compared to the chill of the outdoors. Several tables dotted the interior room, many of them occupied by ponies in pairs or larger groups. They were nibbling pastries or taking sips of warm drinks. Hardly any of them bothered to look up when the bell over the door tinkled. The few that did quickly returned to their previous conversations, hardly expressing any interest in the two new arrivals. The only exception was the pink mare who waited behind the register. As soon as Rarity had stepped through the door, the pink mare's eyes began to glitter and she burst into a positively radiant grin, her teeth seeming to reflect every iota of ambient light within the bakery, practically a source of illumination in and of themselves. This must be Pinkie Pie then, thought Flaxseed. Her parents certainly knew what they were talking about when they named her that. Hi Rarity, chirped Pinkie, beginning to hop in place. How's your day been? Simply marvelous, Pinkie, said Rarity demurely before stepping slightly to the side so that Flax was no longer behind her. By the way, I've come to introduce you to a new friend of mine. This is Flaxseed. He will be our guest for the foreseeable future. As soon as those words left her mouth, she began to steel herself against the inevitable. Please be gentle. To Rarity's shock, Pinkie's wide grin softened into a Gedler smile as she turned her attention to Flax. Hi there. Her tone had softened as well and she was speaking more quietly. Hi, said Flaxseed, not knowing what else to say. It's nice to meet you, said Pinkie, the corners of her mouth twitching rather violently. It was clear that she was fighting like mad to keep from going into another ear-splitting grin. I love meeting new ponies. I'm friends with every pony in Ponyville, so I'm sure that we'll be really great friends too. Yeah, sure. Flaxseed glanced sidelong at Rarity, only to see that the alabaster mare was gaping unashamedly at Pinkie Pie. It was clear to the stallion that Rarity was even more astonished by Pinkie's behavior than he was. Flaxseed had to admit that, while he was glad that Pinkie wasn't acting nearly as erratically as Rarity had warned him about, it was just as obvious to him as it was to Rarity that Pinkie was behaving seriously out of character, and he'd known her for all of a few seconds. Everything about her gave him the impression of a kettle being on the verge of boiling over. Rarity began looking back and forth between Flaxseed and Pinkie. It was clear that Pinkie's restraint was hanging by a thread and not even Celestia knew what would happen once that thread snapped. Oh, I have an idea. Want to try something? Suggested Pinkie eagerly. Since you're a first-time customer, it's on the house. That'd be great, said Flax, relaxing a little. His stomach was still growling from the delicious smells wafting around the shop. The array of treats behind the counter was also making his mouth water. Before Flaxseed could make his decision, Pinkie's body went rigid and her eyes widened to the point he was sure they would simply pop out of her head and start rolling across the store. I've got it, she exclaimed. I'll be right back. Flaxseed blinked and his jaw dropped. Before he'd closed his eyes, she'd still been at the counter. When they opened again, she'd vanished. The only sign that she hadn't simply teleported out was the back and forth flapping motion of the doors leading to the kitchen. A second later, Flax's ears picked up some surprised shouts coming from the kitchen, accompanied by what sounded like the laughter of infant ponies. Shortly after that, Pinkie Pie came exploding out of the kitchen, effortlessly jumping the counter and skidding to a stop in front of Flaxseed and Rarity. The suddenness of her appearance had set the stallion to backpedaling, his eyes frantically searching for the door that he'd come through. As he did, Rarity saw a flare of red from those eyes. Seeing that Flaxseed was on the verge of bolting, Rarity swallowed and hoped that what she was about to do wasn't going to get her clocked, seeing as it was going against Arkenstone's instructions. Moving as slowly and carefully as she could, she raised a hoof and, very gently, rested it on the panicky stallion's shoulder. Flaxseed's gaze immediately jumped to her as she felt his muscles tensing under her hoof. Even though she was sure she was about to be hit, Rarity still mustered an encouraging smile. It's all right, she cajoled. Pinkie isn't going to hurt you. You're safe. Flaxseed looked at her, his frightened expression softening as his eyes met hers. Slowly, he began to relax. Seeing that she'd managed to calm him down, Rarity let out a relieved sigh before turning to regard Pinkie, doing her best to keep from glaring at the other mare. However, her anger evaporated when she saw that Pinkie was all too aware of the effect her actions had on Flaxseed. Pinky's ears laid flat against her skull and her eyes were watering. She looked as though she wanted to apologize, but her mouth was currently blocked by the handles of pink and blue gift bag she'd been carrying. Rarity politely took the bag with her magic so that Pinky could speak. I'm so sorry, said Pinky, slowly backing away from Flaxseed, looking more like a puppy that had been kicked than a pony at the moment. I didn't mean to scare you. I just get so excited whenever I get to meet new ponies. Flaxseed took a deep breath and gave Pinky a shaky smile. It's okay, he said, I've just been through a lot and I get worked up pretty easily. Rarity nodded in agreement, though this was already a sizable improvement over yesterday, when the stallion had been willing to attack her even though she'd been going out of her way to not appear threatening. Can we be friends? Asked Pinky, her tone still nervous and a little sad. Flaxseed couldn't stop his smile from widening as his heart warmed at the sight of her. Yeah, he said, we can. The reversal of Pinky's mood was nearly instantaneous as she grinned exultantly. Yay, she squealed, bouncing up and down excitedly, I'm so happy. I love making new friends. Rarity let out the breath she didn't even realize she had been holding. It looked as though things were going to be alright. Author's notes. There's not a whole lot to say about this chapter. I just wanted to give an idea of the adjustments that Rarity and Sweetie Belle would have to make in order to allow Flaxseed to stay with them. Aside from that, this chapter was mostly about warm fuzzies. Next chapter, Flaxseed makes some friends. Further introductions. Chapter 3, Further introductions. Pinkie Pie led Rarity and Flaxseed to one of the few empty tables remaining in the bakery. The three of them settled down and Rarity opened the bag and began to levitate out the contents. Oh my, she exclaimed, Pinkie, I had no idea you still had any of these left. The bag had been filled with several of Pinkie Pie's special creations that she usually reserved for extremely special occasions, such as the fundraiser she'd thrown to raise money to fix Scootaloo's home when the orange filly had smashed one of the walls. There were crystalberry scones, gelded cream eclairs, along with a few others, including her infamous brownies. Actually, I still had some ingredients left over from when I made those big batches for the bake sale, explained Pinkie. I wasn't sure what to do with them. But last night, I had a wormy feeling in my tummy and that's my Pinkie sense telling me that some pony really needed a special treat to help them feel really good, so I decided to make some smaller batches and I didn't even realize it was Flaxseed until you and him came in the door and started talking because Flaxseed looks like he could really use some nice treats. Pinkie stopped and sucked in a large breath. While Rarity was nodding in polite agreement, Flaxseed was simply staring at the pink mare, his mind reeling, partly from the strain of trying to follow her rapid-fire manner of speaking and partly from attempting to follow the logic of what he'd actually managed to pick up from the avalanche of words that had spilled from Pinkie's mouth. Pinkie sense, what the hey is that? Rarity sighed and slowly slid a hoof across the table, making sure that Flax could see the motion. She gently patted him on one foreleg. It's all right, dear. Trust me when I say that it's just Pinkie Pie being Pinkie Pie. She levitated a scone to Flaxseed. Go ahead and try them, they're simply divine. Somewhat reluctantly, Flaxseed did as he was told. As he got his first taste of Pinkie's baking, Flaxseed's eyes widened. A few minutes later, there was nothing left of Pinkie Pie's treats but a few scattered crumbs. Flaxseed leaned back, smacking his lips. Rarity hadn't been kidding about Pinkie's food. These had to have been some of the best baked goods he'd ever tasted. They completely outmatched anything he'd ever tried before. He was sure that, in a big city like Manhattan, Pinkie could have charged a small fortune for her products. It was very nice of her to share so freely. The stallion came to the conclusion that, while a bit outside of his comfort zone, Pinkie Pie was a perfectly nice mare and one he wouldn't mind getting to know better once he'd gotten used to her antics. But, he thought, seeing her grinning widely as she bounced up and down, it's gonna take a while to get used to her. Rarity looked on with a pleased smile, glad that things had gone so well. While there had been a few wrinkles in introducing the jumpy stallion to Pinkie, the party pony had at least not managed to ruin her first impression. Well, with the most difficult one of the bunch out of the way, at least we can be sure that all the other meetings I have planned will run smoothly. After bidding farewell to Pinkie Pie, Rarity led Flaxseed through town to their next destination. Now then, she said as they walked, I think that this next pony will be much easier for you. She's the gentlest, least frightening pony I've ever known. So long as you don't get on her bad side, which was an exceptionally difficult task to say the least. Rarity was glad that Fluttershy had already told her about when she and Dawn were moving into Caramel's house. She would have hated to lead Flaxseed all the way out of Ponyville only to find an empty cottage and have to backtrack into town. It also had the advantage of shortening the trip, as it was just a few minutes until they reached Caramel's rather unassuming home. Hoping that the timid Pegasus was in, Rarity knocked softly on the door. She was soon rewarded by a cheerful, albeit slightly nervous, hello, as the door opened and Fluttershy peeked out. She relaxed when she saw Rarity waiting there, though she still mostly hid behind the door from the unfamiliar stallion. Flaxseed, this is Fluttershy, said Rarity, gesturing to the Pegasus. She also happens to be Dawn's mother. Fluttershy, this is Flaxseed. He's my guest for the time being and he actually happens to be one of the ponies with the same condition as Dawn. Fluttershy's eyes widened. Oh, really? She began to inch around the door to get a better look at Flaxseed, who simply didn't know what to make of the unassuming mare. Fortunately, he didn't find her threatening in the slightest. Rarity coughed and Fluttershy, realizing that she was simply letting her visitors stand on the doorstep, gasped and stepped back so that she could open the door all the way. Oh, where are my manners? Come in. In a few minutes, they were seated around the table in Caramel's kitchen as Fluttershy made them some tea. As she worked, she answered a curious Flaxseed's questions about Dawn and about living with the colt. He doesn't scare you at all? Asked Flaxseed, wondering how the mare could have gotten used to Dawn's eyes so easily, especially as his never seemed to revert to the eyes of a normal pony. Well, I was surprised the first time I saw his eyes, said Fluttershy, her voice barely above a whisper, but he had just saved my life and he looked so sad and lonely. She smiled fondly. Dawn is actually such a kind and gentle boy and he's always trying to help others. She sighed, but there are times I'm afraid for him. Rarity nodded in agreement. I have to admit, all else aside, Dawn has a gift for making you fret. Why? Asked Flaxseed. Well, said Fluttershy, he's gone off twice now on very dangerous trips. The first time, he went to Cloudsdale and just a couple days ago, he went to Diamond Mountain because some Viscountess had taken a mare hostage. Huh. It's complicated, replied Rarity, there's a bit of a story behind it. She related the tale of the government agent who came down to evaluate Fluttershy's fitness to be a mother and how a member of the nobility had been manipulating things behind the scenes. Wow, said Flaxseed when the story was finished, so he really is strong. Fluttershy nodded. Very much so. In fact, he's more than capable of completely leveling the town if he wanted to. Flaxseed gave her an incredulous look. And you're still not scared of him? Rarity giggled at Flaxseed's expression. Fluttershy, darling, I see Caramel and Dawn are out. Oh yes, replied Fluttershy, they're both at their jobs. They should be back in time for dinner. It must be so much nicer to have them this winter, said Rarity. I always worried about you, living in that cottage by yourself, with all of your animal friends gone for the season. It's wonderful that you found some pony to spend it with. Fluttershy giggled and nodded eagerly. It's also nice because now it's easier to visit every pony, she added. Rarity nodded in agreement. One of the major problems they had with Fluttershy's cottage being outside of Ponyville was that during the winter months, the journey to and from the cottage became cold and difficult. What made for a pleasant stroll in the spring and summer turned into a chilly slog during the winter. To make matters worse, because her cottage was so far off the beaten track, it was also out of the way for the ponies who shoveled the streets and kept them clear during winter. The winding path to Fluttershy's cottage was the last to be cleared, if it ever got cleared at all, often accumulating a thick layer over the course of multiple snowfalls. It was slightly easier for Fluttershy to come and go, seeing as she was a Pegasus and could simply fly over it all. However, she wasn't any more fond of the cold than most ponies. Pegasi were a little more resilient to the cold, which came with them usually living at higher altitudes. But just as she preferred living on the ground, Fluttershy was less acclimated to chilly weather than the rest of her winged brethren. I certainly hope we'll get to see more of you this year, said Rarity. This makes it so much easier for us to make our weekly spa appointments. Fluttershy giggled. As Rarity eyed the yellow mare, who already seemed very much at home in this house, her smile turned sly. And how are you enjoying your stay so far, I trust your host has been a perfect gentlecolt. Seemingly oblivious to Rarity's teasing tone, Fluttershy let out a blissful sigh. Oh, it's been wonderful, she said. It's such a nice house. Dawn loves it here. Caramel's so warm and it's so nice to snuggle up to him in the morning and eat. Fluttershy's voice trailed off into an inarticulate squeak as she realized what she'd just said. She opened her mouth to correct herself, but any words she was going to say died on her tongue the instant she saw the grinning, predatory look on Rarity's face. Oh, what's this now? Have you two been sleeping together? Rarity's grin threatened to become a passable imitation of Pinkie Pie's as she began leaning in. This is so exciting. You have to tell me everything. I want details. Fluttershy squeaked, shrinking back from Rarity's manic expression. Rarity, we shouldn't really be talking about this end now. She pointed to Rarity's side. Looking over, Rarity realized that, in her excitement over trying to wheedle out the details of Fluttershy's love life, she had completely forgotten about Flaxseed. The stallion was currently sitting back, simply staring at Rarity as she and Fluttershy prepared to lose themselves in girl talk. I'm so sorry, said Rarity quickly, I just got so excited for Fluttershy. Please forgive me. It's no problem, replied Flaxseed, with the feeling that he'd just dodged a bullet. He had to admit he'd been feeling very comfortable. Compared to Pinkie Pie, there was absolutely nothing frightening or upsetting with Fluttershy, and whenever the yellow mare smiled, Flax felt his heart seize up just a little. She's adorable. It's a darn shame she already has a colt friend. So this is your colt friend's house then? Fluttershy nodded with a happy hum. Caramel's out at the candy shop right now, but he's invited me and Dawn to stay with him for the season. That's nice, said Flax, envying the absent Dawn for his luck at finding such a wonderful pony to stay with, and he's okay with your son's eyes. Again, Fluttershy nodded, her smile widening. He's even started to call Caramel Dad now. Rarity's eyes widened. You mean to say he's doing that now? Oh Fluttershy, I'm so happy for you. This is the best possible thing. Fluttershy couldn't help but giggle at Rarity's enthusiasm. Yes, everything's going well for us. What about you, Mr. Flaxseed? How do you like Ponyville so far? It's really nice, said Flaxseed. It's been a while since I've been this relaxed. It was true. While visiting Pinkie Pie had been a bit harrowing at first, he had to admit that he couldn't bring himself to dislike her, especially not since she was such a fantastic baker and so willing to reach out to an unfamiliar pony like him. And now, sitting in the kitchen with Rarity and Fluttershy, he'd never felt more at ease. That's good to hear, said Fluttershy, giving Flaxseed a smile that nearly made him melt. You're always welcome here. So please don't hesitate to come see us. I know that Dawn certainly appreciates having some pony around who's shared his experiences. Flaxseed nodded. The fact that Dawn was here, the fact that the colt existed at all, was the only thing that kept the gold-colored stallion from suspecting that this was all some elaborate setup to get him to let his guard down. They made polite conversation a little while longer. Fluttershy asked Rarity about her work. Rarity answered by talking about the nightmare night costumes she'd been working on, while asking about what Dawn wanted his costume to be. The whole back and forth was very soothing to listen to. Flaxseed was simply content to sit back and listen to the two mares gossip while he enjoyed his tea. After bidding a fond, albeit reluctant farewell to Fluttershy, Rarity and Flaxseed set off to visit the fashionista's next friend. Rarity led Flaxseed through the roads, heading towards Ponyville's market district. As they approached, the number of ponies out and about began to increase. Flaxseed looked around nervously, feeling more than a little exposed. It's all right, dear, said Rarity consolingly as she sidled a little closer to the stallion. I'm right here. You've got nothing to worry about. Flax nodded, but gulped nervously as they began to make their way down the streets. They stepped around a corner and Rarity saw their destination clearly. On one side of the street was a cart loaded down with baskets and bushels of apples, supplemented by various apple-based treats, tarts, dumplings, pies, and so on. However, Rarity was disappointed to not see her friend at the apple cart. Instead, the apple family's stall was being manned by a relaxed Red River, the Azure Stallion smiling politely as he conducted various transactions with his customers. There was a decent line in front of the stall, indicating that he was doing a brisk business and many ponies were probably walking away with more than they probably intended on buying. Rarity couldn't help but admire the layout of everything and was sorely tempted to do some shopping herself. She reined in the impulse but remained deeply impressed with Red's skill at arranging his goods. She dearly wished she could get Red to apply his skills to the Carousel Boutique's showroom. Good afternoon, said Rarity, bypassing the line and approaching the Azure Stallion directly. Ah, Ms. Rarity, it's so good to see you, said Red as he made change for his latest customer. He looked over Flaxseed, and this is Flaxseed. He's in town to help Twilight with her studies. Rarity gave Red a meaningful look which Red was easily able to interpret. Oh, I see, said the Azure Stallion. He looked over at Flaxseed, who was shifting nervously. Welcome to Ponyville. I'm sorry we can't talk more, but as you can see, I'm a bit swamped right now. Turning back to Rarity, he said, I presume you're looking for Applejack. That's correct, said Rarity. Well, she and the rest of the family are back at the farm, setting up for cider season. It sounds like this is going to be the best year for cider yet, so they're getting prepared for all the sales. I see, said Rarity, thank you for telling me. We'll see you later then. I'm sure, replied Red with a friendly nod. He turned back to his line of customers as Rarity led Flaxseed away from the market stall. Why did you tell him about me? Asked Flaxseed. I know that's what you were referring to when you introduced me. But he wasn't one of the ponies you meant for me to meet, was he? No, he wasn't, replied Rarity. However, Red River is a pony who needs to know about such things. You see, while he works for the Apple family, that's not the real reason he's in town. And the real reason is? Asked Flaxseed nervously. He's one of 2 mercenaries that were hired by Twilight's brother. They were assigned here to help keep the town safe from any problems that might follow Dawn in. Should anything like that occur, you would be under their protection as well. Oh, was all Flaxseed could say, amazed that they had gone to such lengths simply for the sake of a single colt. He let his eyes wander, taking in the scenery as they left the town proper, and the streets and buildings gave way to rolling hills populated by row upon row of trees. He was sure that, most of the years, said trees presented a beautiful sight with their greenery. But right now, they were devoid of either leaves or fruit. Their path took them along a fence which led up to a gate. From the gate, Flaxseed could see a path winding on, meandering up to a picturesque farmhouse situated by a large, red barn. A group of ponies were working by the gate. A pale yellow filly was working with the help of a massive red stallion to set up a large millstone that was linked to what looked like a treadmill. Nearby, an orange mare wearing a worn-looking Stetson was lifting barrels out of a cart and setting them down into a pile on one side of the large mechanism. Standing nearby was an aged, green mare, who was calmly directing the work. Good afternoon, Applejack, said Rarity cheerfully as she cantered up to the gate. It looks like the cider season setup is going smoothly. Smooth as can be, agreed the orange mare, taking a brief respite from her work and trotting over to the fence. Granny's making some changes. She's ordered a whole bunch, them spices from Arkenstone so that we can whip up some batches, mulled cider. That's sure to be a hit with every pony. And what about the quantity? Asked Rarity. Will you have enough for every pony this year? Applejack nodded, her expression getting a little stern. Up, we're putting a cap on it too so Pinkie Pie won't buy it all up. I'm gonna be darned if I'll let Rainbow go her last cider season in Ponyville without getting any. Her emerald eyes turned towards Flaxseed. Who's our friend? This is Flaxseed, said Rarity, gesturing to the gold-coated stallion, who nodded politely to Applejack. He's come to Ponyville to be examined by Twilight. Applejack's eyes widened and she gave Flaxseed a shocked look that made the stallion take an uneasy step backwards. You mean he's one, them? Rarity nodded. The very same. He's experienced no shortage of harassment because of it. See, said Applejack, tilting her hat back, her eyes darting around. Flaxseed shifted nervously. Applejack's reaction to what Rarity had told her worried him a fair bit. However, as he looked closer, he noticed the uneasy expression on Applejack's face. At first he thought that it might have been because she was wary of him. But he soon realized that Applejack's expression was one of guilt. Well, I've got to get back to work and all, said Applejack, stepping back from the fence. Lots to do and all that. Have yourselves a nice day. She turned and trotted away from the fence as fast as she could without being rude, casting a forlorn look over her shoulder as she went. Well, that could have gone better, observed Rarity. She began to lead Flaxseed down the path back to town. What was that all about? Asked Flaxseed, glancing at the working farm ponies as they left. Again, that's a bit of a complicated story, said Rarity. You see, Applejack's father was a member of the cult Solar. You probably know them as the Order of Celestial Light. Flaxseed shivered as he remembered some of the ponies that had pursued him from town to town. At times, the members of the order seemed to be everywhere. They were friendly and welcoming enough until, inevitably, something happened to bring Flaxseed's condition to the surface. Sometimes they turned on him immediately, running him out of town, screaming threats and insults at the top of their lungs. But even worse were those who put on a friendly face, who pretended that his condition didn't matter to them. They would try to get him to lower his guard or lead him into some secluded spot and then. Rarity observed the expressions passing over Flaxseed's face and carefully edged closer to the stallion, gently pressing against his side. Flaxseed started and looked over at her, but Rarity only gave him a friendly smile, prompting the stallion to relax somewhat. Anyway, continued Rarity, though she was never initiated into the order itself, her father raised her on the group's philosophies, including telling her stories about the Eyes of Nightmare. When Fluttershy first took Dawn in and Applejack found out about him, Rarity looked away. She attacked him, twice. The first time, she was trying to drive him out of Ponyville. The second time, she was going to. Rarity gulped, the implication of her words settling in. Anyway, she continued, the second time, she managed to buck Dawn in the side, breaking his wing and some of his ribs, putting the poor boy in the hospital. Flaxseed paled and began to shake. It's all right, said Rarity. Dawn made a full recovery, otherwise he wouldn't have been at the tea house for you to meet him yesterday. In any case, after that, Princess Celestia herself came down and had a few words with Applejack. She and Dawn managed to overcome their issues. She knows better than to believe the cult Solar's tripe now. Are you sure? Asked Flaxseed. If there was one thing he had learned, it was that fanatics did not part from their delusions easily, if at all. Rarity nodded. I most certainly am. Some other members of her family are apparently part of the cult, but she tried to keep them from finding out about Dawn when they came to town. So have no worries. You can trust Applejack. Then why was she so upset? She likely feels guilty about what she put Dawn through. I'm afraid that learning you have the same condition maybe brought those feelings of guilt back to the surface. When I mentioned how you had been harassed because of it, I think she remembered how she had hounded Dawn when she first learned about him. Rarity sighed. It might be unpleasant for her, but I still needed to introduce you. If you say so, said Flaxseed. Was there any pony else you wanted me to meet? There is one more, said Rarity, but she's hard to track down at this time of day. She's Ponyville's weather manager, you see, for now at least. What do you mean by for now? Asked Flaxseed, glancing sidelong at his companion. She means that come spring, this weather manager's gonna be off on her first tour as the newest member of the Wonderbolts. Gah, Flaxseed jumped nearly his own height at the sound of a pony speaking right into his ear. Rainbow Dash would have broken down laughing. However, the first guffaws had barely left her mouth when Flaxseed's magic wrenched a rock out of the ground and hurled it straight at her head. The cerulean mare dodged the throw with a startled yelp. She turned to glare at the gold-coated stallion and admonish him for trying to hurt her, but was cut off again when she saw Flaxseed frantically pulling another, larger rock from the ground. Flaxseed, cried Rarity, please stop. Unable to think of what else to do, she seized the small boulder in her magic, doing her best to keep Flaxseed from launching it at Rainbow, who was beating her wings to gain some distance. However, Flaxseed's panic was making his magic surge and he yanked the stone out from Rarity's magical grip, launching it at Rainbow Dash in the same instant. Rainbow easily dodged the large projectile, which wasn't even moving as fast as the first one. Hey, knock it off. You could kill some pony doing that. Stay away from me, screamed Flaxseed, backpedaling frantically, his eyes already searching for the next piece of ammunition. At the same time, Rainbow noted that their color and shape had changed. What the hey? It took a few seconds for comprehension to dawn on her, but when it did, Rainbow's jaw dropped. Oh. If anything, the look of shocked recognition Rainbow was wearing only served to further aggravate Flaxseed as his magic tore a tree stump from the ground. Soon, that too was rushing through the air at Rainbow. Rarity was shouting, desperately trying to break through Flaxseed's panic, but he was too carried away to even hear her. While he didn't stand a chance of hitting Rainbow with anything he might throw, certainly not when he didn't have the sense to use his magic to guide the trajectories of his projectiles, there was still the chance that some pony else might be hurt. Rarity thanked her lucky stars that they were still outside Ponyville proper, or there would be plenty of bystanders around to end up on the receiving end of Flaxseed's wild attacks. As it was though, the last thing Rarity wanted was for some random passerby to get tagged by one of the stallion's shots. However, in his panicked state, Flaxseed was too irrational to respond to most attempts to get through to him. He wasn't so much as trying to listen to her desperate pleas. The only other means of getting Flaxseed to stop could involve hurting him, which was the last thing she wanted to do. There was one thing Rarity could try. It had worked in Sugarcube Corner when Pinkie Pie had set Flaxseed up, it might work now. However, Flaxseed was in a much worse state than before, so the chance that he would simply snap and attack Rarity instead was all too real. Still, she thought, I have to try. Tensing, she leapt toward Flaxseed and threw her arms around his shoulders, hugging him tightly, just as he was about to tear up a section of Sweet Apple Acres fence for his latest projectile. Even as she held him, Rarity could hear the crack and snap of wood. She didn't have much time. She was certain that she would be the target of Flaxseed's next attack. She needed to calm him now. Rather than shout, Rarity instead placed her mouth as close to his ear as she could get it. Shush darling, calm down, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, it's all right. You're safe. Nothing's going to hurt you. The fence rail parted from one of its posts with a loud snap. Wood crackled as Flaxseed's magic tried to twist it free of the other one. Everything's fine, Rarity said, repeating her assurances like a mantra, desperately trying to keep her voice calm and in control, though she was desperately afraid for herself, Rainbow, and the stallion in her care. Please calm down. Nothing's going to hurt you. In spite of her fears, Rarity began to feel Flaxseed's muscles relax beneath her forelegs. The cracking noise of wood breaking was fading as well as Flaxseed's magical grip on the fence rail began to slacken. Rarity began to gently rub her hooves across Flaxseed's barrel and along his spine, whispering more assurances into his ear, keeping her voice level, calm, and soothing. Finally, she heard what she had been waiting for. Rarity. Yes, I'm here, said Rarity, continuing to rub the stallion's back, everything is going to be just fine. Finally, the fence rail broke, not because Flaxseed had pulled it off the fence entirely, but because his magic had released it, resulting in the length of wood breaking under its own weight. The stallion's body relaxed completely and he slumped in Rarity's grip. Rarity was nearly dragged down by Flaxseed as his body went limp, but managed to catch him with her magic and keep him from dropping unceremoniously to the ground. The stallion had passed out completely. I'm so sorry, exclaimed Rainbow, not lifting her head off the ground as she held herself prostrated in front of Rarity. Rainbow's wings were spread but held flat against the ground. That's enough grumbling, said Rarity curtly, doing her best to rein in her temper. In all honesty, she wanted to scold Rainbow Dash as though the cerulean mare were a misbehaving filly that should have known better. The problem was Rainbow hadn't known any better. She'd had no idea who Flaxseed was, much less anything about his situation. What she had done couldn't even have really been called a prank by ponies who had been less traumatized. The most her acts might have elicited would have been little more than a jump and a startled yelp. But Flaxseed's condition and his experiences had made all the difference. His nerves were a box of bone-dry tinder and Rainbow's actions had been like a spark. The results had been dramatic and nearly disastrous. Rainbow, snapped Rarity, her sharp tone finally cutting through the Pegasus dramatics, that's enough. Sorry, squeaked Rainbow. I accept your apology, said Rarity, now I need you to calm down. Flaxseed could wake up any moment now and the last thing we need is for you to set off another panic attack. Okay, said Rainbow. Thank you, said Rarity with a sigh as she turned her attention back to the stallion. She'd situated Flaxseed so that he was resting up against her. His chin was resting on top of one of her forelegs whilst her other reached up so she could gently stroke his mane with her hoof. It had been several minutes since the stallion had collapsed. Rarity had carried him to a nearby tree so that they could rest beneath it, though the tree didn't supply much shade, seeing as its leaves were gone and shade would have only made the late autumn day all the colder. Thus, she was resting on the side facing the sun, taking solace in the feeling of the tree's bark against her fur. Slowly, Flaxseed began to stir. He's coming to. Rainbow, said Rarity gently, I need you to back up. I said I was sorry, protested Rainbow. I know, said Rarity, but he may panic again if you're too close. So back up and give him some space and we'll introduce you properly this time. Okay, said Rainbow, a little bit reluctantly. She inched backwards as Flaxseed's eyes slowly fluttered open. Wah, he rasped, raising his head. Are you feeling better? Asked Rarity softly, trying to keep from startling the stallion. She lowered the hoof that had been stroking his mane as well. Our Rarity. Yes. Flaxseed let out a shuddering sigh and relaxed against her, prompting Rarity to smile as she resumed stroking his mane. I'm so very sorry about that, darling, she said. I understand she frightened you, but please forgive Rainbow Dash. She didn't know any better. Flaxseed looked around and his gaze lit on the cerulean Pegasus, who averted her eyes guiltily. Rarity felt Flaxseed tense up against her, but when Rainbow failed to do anything threatening, Flaxseed relaxed again. I'm so sorry, said Rainbow, not budging from her spot. I didn't realize. It's all right, said Flaxseed after a moment's pause. Rarity huffed lightly. Well, this wasn't the smoothest of introductions, but this is my dear friend, Rainbow Dash. It's, nice to meet you, said Rainbow more than a little awkwardly. Likewise, said Flaxseed. He still felt uncomfortable. What Rainbow did had brought back too many memories of previous experiences where ponies had surprised him. Still, she was genuinely sorry. Taking a moment to fight down the flashbacks of his past, Flaxseed began to recall what Rainbow had said to him right as she dropped in. So, you're gonna be a Wonderbolt. Rainbow's melancholy faded and she drew herself up into a sitting position, puffing out her chest dramatically. Not gonna, she said proudly, already am. I even made my debut flight. Really? Asked Flaxseed, leaning forward. Indeed, agreed Rarity, tittering at the stallion's enthusiasm. We were there for her induction and she actually flew as a member during the Harvest Festival. Yeah, it was pretty awesome if I do say so myself, said Rainbow, puffing up even more than she had before. That is amazing, said Flaxseed. I once got to see a Wonderbolts show when I was a little colt. It was incredible. I've never thought I'd actually get to meet one. Rainbow laughed. Well then, you've been missing out 'cause the Wonderbolts are even more awesome now than when you were a kid. I'll try and score you some free tickets so you can see for yourself. You mean like tickets, for an actual show? Asked Flaxseed, twitching strangely. Yeah, said Rainbow, tilting her head to one side as she regarded the stallion curiously. What kind of show did you think I was talking about? Nothing, said Flaxseed, lowering his head slightly. Really, you don't need to trouble yourself. Rainbow's eyebrows went up. You'd turn down free Wonderbolts tickets. That's enough, said Rarity quickly, jumping in before the conversation could progress any further. She had an inkling of the reason behind Flaxseed's reluctance and certainly didn't want to make the stallion any more uncomfortable than he already was. It's starting to get late and Flaxseed and I should be returning to the boutique. I'll talk to you later, Rainbow Dash. Rarity gave Rainbow a pointed look that practically screamed at her to shelve the conversation for the time being. Okay, said Rainbow. I guess I should really be getting back to work anyway. We're moving in some additional cloud cover and to lower the temperature a little more. Make sure you dress warmly when you go out later, okay? Rarity nodded. Thank you for the warning, Rainbow. The cerulean Pegasus nodded and spread her wings. With a single beat, she shot into the sky in a rainbow streak, not even bothering to stand up before she took off. Wow, said Flaxseed, watching her go. I can see why she's a Wonderbolt. Indeed, agreed Rarity. I'm sorry about that part at the end there. Even before she joined, Rainbow was a very serious fan of the Wonderbolts. Sometimes she forgets that not everyone is as serious about them as she is and that some ponies have their reasons for not wanting to attend a show. Flaxseed averted his eyes, looking a little ashamed. To be honest, I'd love to see another show but... I think I understand, said Rarity as she began to lead the way back to the boutique. It's the crowds, isn't it? You've frequently been on edge around other ponies, so the idea of being surrounded by them is rather intimidating. Yeah, said Flaxseed, his ears drooping. Don't worry dear, said Rarity, gently brushing up against him. She moved slowly and carefully so that Flaxseed would have time to react. The stallion flinched but didn't try to pull away from the contact. My friends and I will all do our best to help you. Just remember, you have nothing to fear from any of us. All right, said Flaxseed, giving her a half-hearted smile of his own. Rarity could see that the gold-colored stallion still held some reservations about staying with her and in Ponyville in general. It wasn't too hard to understand why. After all, being at ease around other ponies could easily be equated to lowering one's guard. Flaxseed had probably dealt with such problems before. Ponies who had pretended to be his friends or pretended to want to help him, only to attack him when he was vulnerable. Yes, they still had a ways to go before he could fully recover from the trauma he'd experienced. But still, she thought as his soft coat rubbed against hers, even a little progress is still progress. With that encouraging thought in mind, Rarity led the way home. Author's notes. Apologies for the delay in updates. Yesterday was my sister's wedding and all the commotion that came with it. I was a little too wrapped up in that to worry about updates for the moment. To make things even more difficult, Fimfix server can't decide whether it wants to talk to me or not and I keep getting booted off the site at random intervals, so things might be spotty until Nighty and the other mods finish working out all the bugs from the last update. This chapter was largely covering the remaining members of the main 6 meeting with Flaxseed, as well as showcasing how seriously he's been traumatized by his previous experiences and how extreme his responses to a perceived threat can be. For the Apple family's Cider season, I ended up tangling up the timeline a little, so this might be a bit out of sync with how it works in the show, in terms of timing, but I decided that the Apple family basically jumps Cider season around to different times of the year every year in order to work with different batches and cultivars of apples. More on that next time. Next chapter, Dawn discovers Cider. Season of the Cider. Chapter 4, Season of the Cider. So Dawn, what do you want to go is for Nightmare Night? Asked Scootaloo eagerly. Dawn shrugged before taking a bite out of his apple. I have no idea, he admitted. I've never had to think about anything like this before. The two of them were enjoying a lunch break at the tea house. They'd gone out the back and leaned against the wall, munching their food as they watched the Pegasi moving clouds into position. It was less than a week until Nightmare Night. Once the night ended, the first snow of winter would begin to fall and it would fall from the clouds that the weather team were positioning at this moment. By placing them into position throughout the week, they slowly closed off the sunlight, lowering the ambient temperature and cooling the air to better facilitate snowfall and accumulation. After all, no pony wanted to spend the day after the first snowstorm of the season wading through a brown slurry of half-melted snow. Thus, with the final night of autumn approaching, some ponies had already purchased costumes from the seasonal shops that opened up around this time of year, while others had gone to Rarity to order more elaborate ensembles. Most of Dawn and Scootaloo's friends had already made their choices of costumes. Sweetie Belle and Rumble were apparently going to be dressing as a princess in her night, the revelation of which had made Scootaloo gag. Apple Bloom was apparently making her own clockwork pony costume from various gears and machinery she'd scrounged up, whilst Spike was going as the mysterious masked phantom, apparently a character from one of his favorite comic books. Scootaloo, on the other hoof, was keeping her costume a secret for the time being, apparently wanting to surprise Dawn with whatever she ended up going as. You'd better hurry, said Scootaloo, you don't have very long. Dawn frowned. I just have no idea of what kind of costume to wear. Perhaps you ought to pick something. Scootaloo tapped her chin before turning to get a good look at Dawn's face. You know, since your eyes already look like one, maybe you should go as a dragon. That might be fun, admitted Dawn, mulling the matter over. It would probably be a simple matter to clothe himself with some sort of fake dragon skin, maybe a few prop horns attached to the back of his head, and a cardboard row of spines over his mane. Still, completing the effect would require fashioning some sort of cover for his wings to give them a suitably leathery appearance, which Dawn didn't relish. Covering his wings like that made him uncomfortable, since it would also cut off his feathers from contact with the air. Scootaloo was still looking at him, also thinking about how to pull off a good dragon costume when her eye widened. I've got it, she exclaimed. How about we dress you up as one of Princess Luna's night guards? Night guards? Asked Dawn. Scootaloo nodded rapidly. Yeah, when Princess Luna comes down for Nightmare Night, she always comes with her guards. Usually, they just look like regular Pegasi, but for Nightmare Night they dress up with bat wings and have eyes like yours. Really? Asked Dawn. Scootaloo grinned. Yeah, Twilight says that it's an illusion Princess Luna does. Maybe Twilight can do the same thing for you. Then all we have to do is get one of those Royal Guard costumes from the costume shop and paint it up like a night guard's and we'll have a costume for you easy. That sounds doable, said Dawn, pausing to munch on the savory potato scone from a batch that Caramel had baked for the colt the previous day. The tan stallion had accrued a variety of recipes over the course of his life and was not adverse in using the more savory ones for Dawn's meals. Let's talk to Twilight after work then, said Scootaloo, she'd probably love to help us. I'd absolutely love to help you, said Twilight Sparkle gleefully. Scootaloo gave Dawn an I told you so look, even though Dawn had neither expressed nor felt any doubt. However, he decided it was best to simply concede and nodded in response. So you'll enchant Dawn so he looks like one of those bat ponies that fly Princess Luna around? Asked the orange filly. Sure, said Twilight, I could even give Dawn the same enchantment that they have. It's actually really fascinating. She was clearly winding up to go into lecture mode, which took the wind out of Scootaloo's sails somewhat. The enchantment is actually laid into the armor itself, continued Twilight, oblivious to Scootaloo's growing reluctance to stay where she was. It's a simple modification of the basic enchantment used to make all the members of the Royal Guard and the Night Guard look alike. So you can't use it on me? Asked Dawn, wondering what Twilight was getting at. Well, I could, said Twilight, but an illusion spell like that won't have much staying power. When affected by the magic of someone else, a pony's natural magic will repel foreign magic that's laid over them over time. The more powerful a spell is, the longer it takes for it to be repelled. But spells have their own lifespans, which are further shortened by the repulsion effect. It's the same for charms and compulsions. It would have to be refreshed and reinforced frequently if we wanted to maintain it for any serious period of time. That's why the spell is laid on the armor instead. The armor possesses no native magic of its own, so there's nothing to repel the spell and shorten its lifespan. In fact, a spell's staying power can be enhanced that way. How so? Asked Dawn, getting a little interested in spite of himself. Twilight grinned eagerly at him. I thought you'd like this part. You see, it actually works using principles derived from Earth Pony magic. It does, asked Dawn, thinking back to his conversation with Arkenstone the other day. Twilight nodded. While each of the three tribes has its own distinct form of magic, we can actually borrow and apply principles and concepts between the magics of different tribes. You see, Earth Pony magic relies on physical mediums. Magic is transmitted through actual substance. Earth Ponies use the earth itself as the medium for their magic when they're cultivating the land and enhancing its potential for growth. When they draw magic into themselves to enhance their strength and stamina, they're actually using their own bodies as a medium. Technically, they can use any object or substance as a medium if they refine their skills enough. Arkenstone, for example, has refined his skills to the point that he can actually use individual particles as a medium for his magic. And how does this apply to the illusion spell for the guards? Asked Dawn as Scootaloo looked on in horror at the sight of her colt friend getting into an egghead discussion with Twilight Sparkle. Because unicorns found that they could improve a spell's staying power if it was embedded in a physical object, replied Twilight proudly. In other words, the guard's armor is used as a medium for the illusion spell. So, in a sense, you could say that the entire school of enchanting, the embedding of spells and magics in physical objects, is based on Earth Pony magic. That's interesting, said Dawn sincerely. Since his conversation with Arkenstone, he'd been thinking about the ways the ponies of different tribes modified their magic by applying principles from other tribes. He remembered Willow's fog, which had apparently applied the principles of unicorn magic to her own Pegasus magic to produce something unique that couldn't arise from the magic of a single tribe on its own. So then, I would need to get the costume first and then have you enchanted with the illusion spell, Dawn continued. Twilight nodded. That's right. As far as I know, the costume shop only sells regular Royal Guard armor, so we'll have to paint it up. Dawn and Scootaloo exchanged looks. We'd figured that already. The tricky part is doing it right, said Twilight, searching out a book on one of her shelves before pulling it out. It was a text on the guard. Opening the book, Twilight laid it out where the two foals could see, showing them an illustration of the Night Guard's armor, including a piece-by-piece breakdown. The armor design for the Night Guard was actually a fair bit different from that of the regular Royal Guard. If you want to be accurate, you'll have to do more than just repaint a Royal Guard costume. It's just a Nightmare Night costume, Scootaloo pointed out. I don't think it needs to be completely accurate. What? Gasped Twilight, seemingly shocked that Scootaloo and Dawn wouldn't be interested in accuracy. Of course it does. After all, Princess Luna is going to be visiting Ponyville again this year, so doing anything less would be disrespectful. I'm not so sure of that, said Dawn under his breath. While he'd never met the Lunar Princess, he somehow doubted that a foal would earn her wrath simply be wearing an imperfect rendition of her guard's armor. However, he figured that it was better to simply mollify Twilight. Does that mean you'd help us to change the costume so that it's more accurate? He asked. Absolutely, squealed Twilight. Go ahead and get the costume from the shop and bring it back here and we'll get started right away. The two foals quickly scampered out the door. Why the hey did you agree to that? Demanded Scootaloo as they headed down to the road to the seasonal costume shop that had opened earlier that month. Because if we didn't do it, she'd probably get irritated and then act sulky whenever she sees me in costume, replied Dawn, and since she's the one who will be modifying the costume, it's not as though we'll be taking on all that much extra work. If you say so, said Scootaloo. Fortunately, the costume shop was well stocked with Royal Guard costumes. Plenty of young colts and a few fillies loved to dress up as guards for Nightmare Night. Dawn and Scootaloo quickly returned to the library with their new acquisition so that Twilight could get started on modifying it. There was even less for Dawn and Scootaloo to do than they thought, though that seemed to be because only Twilight seemed to be fully invested in the accuracy of the final product. By the time she pulled out the calipers and started filling her blackboard with notes on all the minute changes she'd have to make, the two foals had found themselves walled out of the process entirely. So, as Twilight worked, they picked out some books of their own and did some light reading to pass the time. After about 2 hours of work, a loud, "It's done," roused the foals from their reading so that they could see the fruit of Twilight's labors. Dawn had to admit that he was impressed. Twilight had carefully painted the plastic armor a midnight blue color with silver highlights. The blue plume from the helmet had been swapped out for a black, spiny sail, much like the kind found on the necks of some dragons. The blue star on the petrel had been swapped out for an image of a bluish-green eye with a vertical slit for a pupil. It's odd, Dawn noted, that Princess Luna would have the image of her other self's eyes emblazoned on the armor of her guard. I would think she'd want to put that part of her behind herself. Maybe, admitted Twilight, but it certainly does give her guard's armor an intimidating quality. The Night Guard is an active branch of guard organization, and intimidation is an effective means of subduing criminals. Dawn figured there was probably more to it than that. However, he got the impression that it would be best to simply ask Princess Luna herself if she was going to be attending Nightmare Night in Pony. All right then, said Twilight, now for the enchantment. Her horn began to glow, casting a violet shroud over the armor. After a few minutes, the light from her horn faded, leaving the armor looking no different than it had before. Okay, try it on, she said with a nod to Dawn. Dawn began pulling the armor on piece by piece. It wasn't all that difficult, though fitting the back parts around his wings got a little bit tricky. When he slipped the helm and the accompanying crinier on and buckled them into place, his ears caught a gasp from Scootaloo. At the same moment, Dawn felt a strange tingle as the foreign enchantment washed over his body, presumably changing his appearance. He turned to look at Scootaloo, who was gaping at him. How do I look? You look awesome, Scootaloo yelled, her wings buzzing with excitement. That's got to be the coolest Nightmare Night costume I've ever seen. You really need to get a look at yourself. Dawn turned to look for the bathroom, but instead found himself facing a mirror that Twilight had conjured. His eyes widened in surprise and he took a reflexive step back from the unfamiliar pony that stared back at him from the mirror. His normally ebony coat had been replaced by a lighter gray, closer to Rumble's in color. His mane was hidden beneath the plates of the crinier, but the silver of his tail had changed to stripes of midnight blue and a lighter shade of blue. Finally, his ears looked a little bit longer, with furry tufts at the end. Only his eyes remained unaffected by the spell, looking back at him with the same shape and color. I figured I'd leave your eyes alone, commented Twilight, that way Luna doesn't mistake you for one of her guards. So this is what her guards look like, said Dawn, slowly reaching towards his own reflection in the mirror. On Nightmare Night, at least, said Twilight with an indulgent smile, Luna told me once that she changed their glamour because she'd heard about the costume tradition before she'd heard more details about the holiday and wanted to participate in that, at least. Cool, so Dawn's costume is all settled, said Scootaloo, I can't wait for every pony to see how cool you look. Dawn chuckled. Thank you, he said, pulling off the helmet and crinier. As he did, there was a snap, almost like a spark of static electricity. A second later, the slight sag in Scootaloo's posture and the disappointed awe she let out told him that the glamour had been released. The enchantments on the armor for the Royal Guard and the Night Guard are a bit more advanced, said Twilight as she helped Dawn get his armor off. They can actually remove pieces of their armor without the glamour failing. But this is just a costume, so I didn't think we needed to do anything that fancy. That's not the attitude you had when you were obsessing over accuracy, Dawn pointed out wryly, prompting an embarrassed blush from Twilight. Anyway, said Twilight, desperately trying to steer the subject away from her more embarrassing quirks, the two of you should be getting home. Your mothers are probably starting to get worried about you being out so late and you've got to get up for cider season tomorrow. Ack, shouted Scootaloo, going rigid, she's right. Sweet Appleacre's cider season had been pushed back a few days this year, thanks in part to Granny Smith's decision to change things up a little. It would officially begin the next day and continue running up through Nightmare Night. Ponyville was practically buzzing in excitement. We should be going home, said Dawn, agreeing with Scootaloo and Twilight. He'd noted that the sunlight coming in through the windows had changed angle and color, indicating that it was setting. Twilight helped Dawn pack up his costume and walked the two foals to the door of her library. She watched them head off down the street, smiling fondly. Come on Everypony. Hurry up, time's wasting, bellowed Rainbow Dash as she stormed in through Caramel's front door. She froze when she came to the living room and saw both Dawn and Scootaloo staring up at her from the floor, where they'd been standing quietly. The two of them had been engaging in a meditation session before breakfast, which was the primary form of their morning training as winter approached. Night was stretching longer with each passing day. They'd already passed the autumnal equinox, meaning that the nights were longer than the days. For Dawn and Scootaloo, that presented additional difficulties. The mornings were too cold now to allow for any lengthy amount of training outside. Also, the shortening amount of daylight also meant that they had less time to spend at the quarry. Dawn had been curtailing their training slightly, stepping it down so that he and Scootaloo didn't have to spend as much time outside, as well as focusing more on forms of training that could be practiced indoors, meditation in particular. Scootaloo might have chafed at the idea of spending so much time standing still, but she had to admit she preferred it to trying to train outside in the bone-chilling morning air, cold enough that even Pegasi like them didn't want to brave it without at least a scarf. Geez, good morning to you too, Rainbow, growled Caramel as he ambled out of the kitchen, mug of coffee and hoof. He gave Rainbow a surly glare. Come on, protested Rainbow, it's cider season and you haven't even finished getting up. Fluttershy isn't even awake yet, replied Caramel, and I'd appreciate it if you let her sleep in. Though, his eyes rolled upward towards the ceiling, where the faintest taps of Fluttershy's ever so light hoof steps could be just barely heard from the room above them. Quote. I guess it's a little bit late for that. He gave Rainbow another glare before sighing and heading back into the kitchen. A moment later, the rattle of pans echoed from within. Rainbow, for her part, simply stood there, shifting anxiously as she waited for Fluttershy to come down. Scootaloo and Dawn had gone back to practicing their meditation, facing each other with their wings half spread and their eyes closed, their magic stirring a faint breeze through the house. After a few minutes, Fluttershy slowly climbed down the stairs, blinking tiredness from her eyes. Good morning, everypony, she said in a sleepy voice. She trotted over and exchanged nuzzles with Dawn and Scootaloo. Lifting her head, she turned to smile at Rainbow. Good morning. Her greeting was broken by a wide yawn. Quote. Rainbow dash, you must be here for cider season. Duh, scoffed Rainbow, her excitement and impatience making her short, even with her most sensitive friend. Of course I am. We need to get going pronto. I'm gonna be darned if I let Pinkie Pie get ahead of me this time. Fluttershy sighed, shaking her head slowly. Rainbow, she admonished, you know better. Applejack isn't opening until 10. We have plenty of time. I guess, since you're here already, you can join us for breakfast. But before Rainbow could finish her protest, she flinched when she felt Fluttershy's hoof lightly poke her side, the slight agitation eliciting a loud grumble from the cerulean mare's empty stomach. Rainbow whirled to face her friend, only to see an uncharacteristically sly smile on Fluttershy's face. You came without having any, didn't you? Observed Fluttershy wryly. Fluttershy merely giggled and turned to trot into the kitchen. Breakfast first, she said, flashing Rainbow a teasing look over her shoulder. With that, she went into the kitchen, leaving a stunned Rainbow dash in her wake. What the? Rainbow didn't know what to make of what happened. She'd never seen Fluttershy's playful side emerge quite like that. What was more, she was actually teasing Rainbow, not a mean-spirited teasing, but a fun teasing between friends. But Fluttershy had almost never indulged even in the latter kind. Watching her go, Rainbow could almost scarcely believe that this was the same timid, polite, and ridiculously unassuming Fluttershy that she'd known for most of her life. The new Fluttershy was more confident, more playful, and more assertive, easily brushing off even Rainbow's most enthusiastic insistences. Who are you and what have you done with Fluttershy? Deciding to follow the yellow mare into the kitchen, Rainbow saw Fluttershy and Caramel standing together at the stove, their heads turned and their lips pressed together. They held the kiss for a few seconds longer before Fluttershy finally pulled away. Best morning greeting ever, said Caramel before turning back to preparing breakfast. I agree, said Fluttershy with a giggle as she fluttered up to the cupboards and began to withdraw some plates and utensils so that she could set the breakfast table. In the living room, Scootaloo and Dawn finished their meditation. However, Scootaloo had also been distracted by the change that Fluttershy had apparently gone through. Wow, your mom's different from how she used to be. I suppose, admitted Dawn. Of course, he'd long known the core of strength that laid behind Fluttershy's soft and timid exterior. He'd seen it emerge often enough whenever she got angry on his behalf or upset with something that he had done. He knew that her friends were well aware of that strength as well. After all, Fluttershy had once scolded a dragon into submission for their sake. However, the process that had begun with her taking him in appeared to have progressed further after moving in with Caramel. That hidden core of strength was now lying closer to the surface, infusing her actions with more confidence and assuredness than she'd ever shown before. It was also beginning to show in other ways. Fluttershy was more confident and composed when she was out in public now as well. Though she was still timid and retiring around unfamiliar ponies, that aspect of her personality had faded considerably, especially whenever she was in the company of her friends and loved ones. As such, when she went out, she walked with much greater confidence and poise, which had been earning her a number of stares of appreciation from various stallions, along with a few mares, as they were reminded exactly why Fluttershy had once been a model for photo finish. When she was willing to let it show, Fluttershy had a natural grace and beauty that could catch the eye of every pony in her vicinity in a way that made even Rarity more than a little envious. I think Dad may be a good influence on her, Dawn added softly. Scootaloo blinked and turned to look at Dawn again. Since when have you been calling Caramel Dad? Dawn shrugged. Since we're giving living together as a family a sort of trial run, I figured I'd go all the way. And you're okay with that? Dawn smiled, ducking his head slightly so that a small portion of his mane fell across his face. Well, it doesn't feel wrong. Scootaloo stared at him a little longer before she broke out into a mischievous grin. Wow, she said, reaching out to lightly punch Dawn's shoulder, you're turning into a total softie. Dawn lifted his head to smirk back at her. Before Scootaloo could say anything else, he darted forward and planted a kiss on her lips. Do you really mind? He asked after pulling away. Scootaloo had to take a second to shake her head to clear it. No, not really. I guess. Dawn's smile widened. I didn't think so. Geez, I thought you girls were gonna take forever, groaned Rainbow Dash as she and the others made their way up the path to Sweet Apple Acres. Though breakfast had been delicious, Rainbow was envious that Fluttershy had found a cold friend who was such a good cook. She'd been agitated by how all the other participants had been taking their time. As it was, she was also chafing about having to walk with the group towards Sweet Apple Acres. She could have taken to the air and flown ahead at any second. But abandoning them so she could get there first felt wrong. And I remember telling you that there's no reason to hurry, said Fluttershy. Granny Smith and Applejack have changed the rules this year. They aren't allowing ponies to camp out on the path and they're shooing away any pony who tries to line up at the gate until right before they open. She also told me that they're putting a limit on how much Pinkie can buy in one go so she doesn't take it all before you have any. She leaned in and whispered lightly into Rainbow's ear. And they're saving a few barrels of some very special cider just for you. Rainbow's eyes widened and she gaped at her friend. What, really? Fluttershy nodded. Really? Cool. So just as I said, there's no reason to rush. We can take our time. Fluttershy continued to walk ahead, leaving a surprised Rainbow behind. Rainbow had to break into a trot to catch up to the group. By the time they arrived at Sweet Apple Acres, it was nearly time for Applejack to open the cider stall. Big Macintosh was already turning the cider press while Apple Bloom fed the carefully selected apples in. Red River was filling barrels and moving them to the large stack. Applejack had selected a few of the barrels and was emptying them into a large cauldron over a fire. To every pony's surprise, Spike was there as well, a piece of parchment in one hand and a quill in the other as the little dragon scribbled down notes and checklists, having apparently helped with organizing the whole affair. Meanwhile, Granny Smith was carefully measuring out quantities of different spices before adding them to the bubbling cauldron. The scent wafting out of it made Rainbow drool. "Ooh, they're doing mulled cider this year," said Caramel, looking very excited in spite of himself. "It smells delicious," observed Fluttershy. The procedure for cider season had changed in the years since Flim and Flam had tried to steal the Apple family's business out from under them with their bizarre cider-making contraption. Instead of only starting to make cider just as they were beginning to sell it, Applejack and her family had instead started making it ahead of time. They also increased the portion of their crop that went to cider sales, both to provide more for the inhabitants of Ponyville and to market their cider to interested parties outside of town. More importantly, they'd also begun work on fermenting and distilling products for sale, making hard ciders and other apple-based liquors for marketing at bars both in Ponyville and abroad. While the apples had always made liquor in small batches for their own consumption, they had only recently begun to start distilling commercially. The little stand where cider was actually sold was backed by a shelf lined with bottles and small casks. Off in the open field to one side of the gate was a pavilion that had been set up the previous night. It was filled with tables and benches, as well as a few charcoal heaters to keep the place warm, where ponies could take their mugs of cider and enjoy them in comfort, away from the day's chill. "Wow, this year's cider season is gonna be awesome," said Rainbow, smacking her lips in excitement. Already, several ponies were in the area around the gate milling about, though none of them had tried to form a line yet. Already, Rainbow could see Pinkie Pie and Mayweather, the stripe-maned mare, carefully keeping Pinkie's enthusiasm in check as she babbled excitedly about how much cider she wanted to drink, only to be chided by Mayweather for wanting to hog so much for herself. To Rainbow's shock, Mayweather's admonishment actually seemed to work and Pinkie calmed down a little. In the meantime, Applejack trotted up to the stand and rapped a hoof sharply against the counter, getting every pony's attention. "Alright y'all, we're gonna get started here real shortly, so I'm gonna need y'all to start forming that line, now." Before any pony could even so much as think about it, Rainbow vanished in a varicolored streak, zipping straight up to the counter and standing at attention, grinning like a foal who'd just been hoofed the entire cookie jar. Her obvious excitement earned a chuckle from Applejack. "I kinda figured y'all be first in line," she said, tilting her hat up and grinning at Rainbow. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," replied Rainbow, fighting tooth and hoof to keep her tongue from lolling out of her mouth. Applejack chuckled again and reached under the counter to pull out a wooden tankard, which she slammed down on the unpolished wood surface. When she spoke next, she was shouting to make sure that every pony could hear her. "Rules are simple this year. Y'all can only buy one mug at a time. When y'all finish, if y'all want more, y'all have to get to the back o' the line and wait for another one. We're also selling by the barrel, again, only one at a time right now. Straight ciders 3 bits, mulled ciders 5 bits. Every pony got that." There was a chorus of shouts of agreement from the ponies lined up. Applejack nodded and quickly swiped up the 5 bits that Rainbow dropped on the counter. She hoofed the mug over to Granny Smith, who placed a strainer on top and ladled cider from the cauldron into it before depositing the spices that had been caught in the strainer back into the cauldron. Placing the mug back in the counter, she slid it back to Rainbow, who picked it up and stepped away. Don, Scootaloo, Fluttershy, and Caramel all watched from their places in line as Rainbow began to down her cider. It was obvious that the cerulean mare wanted to chug it down as fast as she could in order to get back in line for more. However, the beverage was too hot to drink quickly, forcing Rainbow to slow down to keep from burning her tongue and throat. Each time she pulled the mug away, her face was decorated by a blissful grin. "Looks like it's got the official Rainbow Dash stamp of approval," commented Caramel Riley, earning a giggle from Fluttershy before she gently smacked him in the back of the head with her wing. After a few minutes, Dawn and the others had their own mugs and had made their way to the pavilion, where they relaxed at one of the tables, sampling the cider. Like Rainbow, they'd gone ahead and purchased mugs of the spiced cider. Rainbow had already finished her mug and had rushed to the back of the line to wait her turn for her next one. Not only was the mulled cider delicious, but its warmth was especially appreciated in the chilly weather. "This is awesome," sighed Scootaloo happily as she paused from her drinking to swipe her foreleg across her muzzle. However, the movement was caught by Fluttershy, who produced a napkin from seemingly nowhere and gently dabbed the filly's muzzle to get the cider residue off. "And it's gonna get better," said Caramel, "watch." He pointed back towards the gate where they could see Granny Smith heating another cauldron. "What's she doing?" asked Don curiously. As they were watching, Big Macintosh helped Granny by levering up the first cauldron so that the remaining cider within was poured through a strainer that Granny held over the second cauldron. Once the what was left of the first cauldron's worth of cider had been transferred, she took the used spices and threw them into a compost bin. They then added several barrels of fresh cider to fill the cauldron to the top. It was then set onto the fire in place of the first cauldron and heated until the cider within was just below the boiling point. Granny then went and retrieved helpings of fresh spices and added them to the second cauldron while Big Macintosh moved the first out of the way. "See," said Caramel, wrapping one foreleg around Don's shoulders as he directed the colt's attention with his free hoof. "When they're about to run out, they strain the cider and transfer it to another cauldron before filling it up with fresher cider and making a new batch. That means that each successive batch is going to have a stronger flavor than the last." "Are they going to do that all day?" asked Don, fascinated by the process. Caramel nodded. "That means that the last batches are probably going to have the most flavor," he said. "We'll want to stick around for that." Fluttershy and Scootaloo stifled giggles as they watched Caramel explaining the cider cooking process to the fascinated colt, looking exactly like father and son. "I guess they really do get along well," Scootaloo whispered to Fluttershy. Fluttershy smiled widely and nodded. "Uh-huh," she whispered back, prompting another round of giggling. They continued to nurse their mugs of cider. Much to their surprise, Don was the first to return to the line, waiting for his turn to purchase another mug. By then, the line had grown considerably from when the stand had first opened as more ponies arrived from town. However, thanks to the pavilion, where ponies could slowly savor their mugs and the relatively brisk pace with which the apples conducted their business, the line moved quickly and remained a manageable size. "How are you faring?" asked Rarity, giving Flaxseed a worried look. The stallion had gone slightly pale at the sight of the line and the crowd of ponies milling about around the gate and sitting at the pavilion. I'm not sure, said Flaxseed, his voice trembling from the idea of being in a crowd with so many ponies. If you want, you can join our friends at the pavilion and wait with them, suggested Rarity, gesturing to where she could see Fluttershy's group, along with Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie, seated at one of the tables, chatting happily as they paused to sip from large mugs of cider. I'll go ahead and get some cider for the both of us. But didn't your friend specify one mug at a time per pony? Asked Flaxseed nervously. I'm sure that Applejack will be willing to accommodate me if I explain, said Rarity. If not, then I'll go ahead and get a mug for you and get back in line for myself. You don't have to do that for me, protested Flaxseed, taking another look at the line. I can handle it. From the sound of his tone, it seemed more like he was trying to convince himself than he was trying to convince Rarity. Please don't push yourself into anything you're uncomfortable with, pleaded Rarity, giving Flaxseed a concerned look. We're here so that you can enjoy cider season. There's no need to strain yourself. Yeah, agreed Sweetie Belle, sidling up to Flaxseed's other side. We're here to have fun and drink lots of cider. Don't worry about doing anything too hard. Thanks, said Flaxseed, giving the white filly a relieved smile. In compliance with Arkenstone's instructions and much to Rarity's relief, Sweetie Belle had been on her best behavior lately, especially whenever Flaxseed was around. Furthermore, his presence seemed to help the filly forget about the drama in her own life, as her personal angst over her lack of cutie mark seemed rather petty in comparison to the stallion who had been through so much. Hey! The trio of unicorns turned their heads up to see a gray Pegasus colt swooping down towards them. Rumble landed a short distance away before trotting up to Sweetie Belle, who greeted the colt with a nuzzle. Flaxseed blinked in confusion as he watched the exchange. Who's this? Oh, I forgot, gasped Rarity. This dear colt is Rumble. He happens to be Sweetie Belle's special sumpony. Oh, said Flaxseed, turning his attention back to Rumble, who, having finished greeting Sweetie Belle, was now looking at the gold-colored stallion and smiling politely. It's nice to meet you, said Rumble. Sweetie, Dawn, and Arkenstone told me about you. Did they now? Mused Rarity, smiling at Rumble's polite and relaxed manner. Now that she thought about it, she realized that Rumble had deliberately landed at a distance so that Flaxseed could see him coming. It appeared that Arkenstone had warned the rest of Sweetie's friends about Flaxseed's rather precarious emotional state and that Rumble, at least, had taken that warning to heart. Flaxseed, in the meantime, was feeling a sense of relief. All the ponies he'd met in this town so far were treating him so gently. Part of him might have chafed at the fact that they handled him as though he might break under the slightest strain. But he'd spent so long living in constant fear and suspicion around other ponies that it was simply a relief to have the ponies he was currently with go so far out of their way to see that he was comfortable. There had been times when members of that cult solar group, as Rarity and her friends called it, had tried to butter him up and lower his guard by treating him nicely. But none of them had been willing to inconvenience themselves to this extent to win him over. Everything Rarity and her friends were doing was born out of simple concern for his comfort and well-being. Hi there, everypony. The group turned their heads to behold Twilight Sparkle and Arkenstone making their way to join them. Ah, Twilight, so good of you to join us, said Rarity, smiling as Twilight and her colt friend moved to join the group. Oh, you're here too, said Twilight when her eyes found Flaxseed. She gave him a cheery smile. Are you feeling more comfortable about Ponyville now? I guess so, admitted Flaxseed, looking around. The line of ponies certainly looked daunting, but surrounded by this group of friends who seemed to have his best interests at heart, Flaxseed couldn't help but feel reassured. I think I can take the line. Rarity bit her lip lightly and gave the gold-colored stallion a worried look. All right, she said, conceding, but if you feel that it's getting to you, let me know and we'll step aside. Slowly lifting a hoof, she pressed it very lightly against Flaxseed's shoulder, not applying any pressure until she was sure that he was willing to accept the contact. Please don't even think that you have to push yourself simply for our convenience. Flaxseed raised his own hoof and rested it on hers. Thank you, he said softly, almost feeling like breaking into tears. How long had it been since another pony had been willing to do so much for his sake? Well, we certainly don't have anything to fear from the group, observed Arkenstone, his ears and nose turning towards the line of ponies, unless you happen to have apple juice for blood. This earned a round of laughter from everyone as they joined the line. Sweetie Belle paused when she saw something. Her eyes widened when she saw a familiar ebony colt waiting a short distance ahead of them. Oh look, it's Dawn. Hi Dawn. She waved cheerily at Dawn, who turned to look at them. He smiled when he saw the group at the back of the line and willingly abandoned his own position to come back and join them. Flaxseed was amazed to see that the young colt had felt perfectly safe and at ease waiting in line by himself. His mother and his filly friend were currently at the pavilion, still finishing their latest mugs of cider while Dawn had gone on ahead to purchase more, having taken a particularly strong liking to the mulled cider Granny Smith brewed, which, in line with Caramel's predictions, was only getting better with every batch. How are you doing? Asked Dawn as he settled in next to Flaxseed. Okay, I guess, said Flaxseed, before lifting his eyes to survey the line again. How do you do it? Dawn smiled up at the stallion. I was afraid of being around other ponies, especially crowds too. But after Mom took me in, she and her friends helped me get used to going around town and being around other ponies. I even got to go to school, which is something I'd never done before. The ebony colt turned his attention and looked down the line, surveying all the ponies attending, easily remembering a time when he would have maintained his alertness to the extreme in the presence of so many other ponies. That was only a few months ago, but strangely, his previous paranoia seemed like a distant memory. You make it sound so easy, muttered Flaxseed. Dawn shrugged. I suppose it was, in a sense, at least easier for me than most ponies who've been through what we have. I've been trained in the martial arts and I spent a year of my life in the Everfree Forest, honing my skills and senses against the monsters there. I've learned how to sense the intentions of other ponies. When I realized that nearly every pony around me held absolutely no hostility towards me, it became easier to relax my guard and be at ease. In fact, it served to make the few instances where some pony did regard me with hostility easier to deal with because their ill intent stood out all the more. That gave Flaxseed pause. He'd never considered that Dawn would have actually had it easier than him in some ways. Given that the colt's eyes were always on display, he'd obviously encountered no shortage of hostility and violence directed at him. It had clearly been enough that the colt had felt that the Everfree Forest was apparently preferable to living in civilized communities. In a sense, my situation has the advantage of simplicity, mused Dawn, apparently oblivious to Flaxseed's line of thought but paralleling it anyway. Unlike you, I've never really had to worry about hiding the truth about my eyes because I simply can't. He gestured to his own blue-green orbs. As such, I've always been able to get an idea of how ponies felt about me and my eyes the moment they first saw me. It's hard to be caught off guard when your enemies betray themselves in the first meeting, no matter how hard they try to fake it later on. Flaxseed nodded, seeing the logic in Dawn's assessment. While the colt had been through his own trials, which were far worse than anything any pony his age should have had to endure, Dawn was clearly far better equipped than Flaxseed had ever been. As they spoke, the group slowly made their way to the front of the line. Applejack smiled warmly as she took Rarity and Sweetie Belle's orders. After taking bits from Rarity, Applejack turned her attention to Flaxseed. Her smile faltered somewhat at the sight of the stallion, but she managed to keep it up. Well, howdy there, she said. "Ah, see ya came back." Flaxseed nodded, Applejack's own unease rubbing off on him slightly. However, Dawn gently brushed a wing against the stallion's side and gave him an encouraging nod, bolstering Flaxseed's courage. "Well, Miss Rarity's been telling me how good your cider is and insisted I try some for myself." Applejack's smile became more genuine. "I'm glad ya could make it." She turned and shouted for a mug of mulled cider, which Granny Smith slid down the counter to her. Applejack quickly moved the mug over into Flaxseed's reach but held up a hoof when the stallion moved to deposit his bits on the counter. "Ah, don't need nothing from ya," she said, "the first one's on me. Welcome to Ponyville." Surprised by the gesture, Flaxseed looked around to Rarity and the others for direction. They all nodded in encouragement at him. Finally, Flaxseed took the mug of cider in his magic and smiled gratefully at Applejack. "Thank you. I'll be more than happy to take bits the next time ya come around," said Applejack with a friendly wink as she turned to take Rumble and Dawn's orders next. Rarity led Flaxseed to the pavilion, where they waited as the others came from the line and sat themselves down. Scootaloo had returned to the line herself, with Caramel and Fluttershy a few spaces behind her. But every pony else, including Pinkie and Rainbow, settled themselves at the table to enjoy some friendly conversation as the new arrivals savored their cider. "Well, dear," said Rarity, watching with a great deal of eagerness as Flaxseed examined the cloudy, amber beverage in the mug before him, "go ahead and give it a try." Flaxseed slowly lifted the mug to his lips and took a pull from it. The combination of sweet and spicy flavors exploded on the stallion's tongue. Flaxseed swallowed almost immediately, too excited by the new sensation to think about drawing it out. However, he quickly took another drink, this time swirling it about his mouth to allow the aroma to rise up to his nose and give him the full benefit of the cider's flavor. "How is it?" asked Rarity. Flaxseed lowered the mug, surprised to feel tears welling in his eyes. It wasn't just the cider itself but also the warmth of companionship from being around so many ponies who clearly cared and worried about him that left the stallion feeling a sense of satisfaction unlike anything he'd felt for a long time. "It's the best thing I've ever tasted," he said softly. Author's notes. I probably should have noted this in the previous chapter. When I am writing about cider, I am writing from the American perspective, namely that cider refers to, usually, unfiltered apple juice, while the term hard cider refers to cider that has been fermented into an alcoholic beverage. I am fully aware that most of the rest of the civilized world uses the term cider to refer to the fermented version. However, cider season, as depicted in the show, would seem to indicate that Equestria follows the American conventions for naming the beverages, unless the apples have mastered the art of fermentation in 10 seconds flat, or maybe they somehow get the apples to start fermenting while still on the tree. I wonder if that might even be possible. On another note, from a storytelling perspective, I'm really glad I killed off the changelings, as now significant changes resulting from character development is signified with lines like, "Who are you and what have you done with X?" No longer have to be greeted by the suspicious assertion that X is a changeling. I think that idea gets abused in a fair number of stories. Night of Nightmares. Chapter 5, Night of Nightmares. "Oh, I feel sick." Dawn groaned and slumped down on Fluttershy's back, his coat having taken on an unusual greenish tinge. "After all the cider you drank, I'm not surprised," commented Caramel. "What was that, 13 mugs?" 15, corrected Fluttershy. "Yeah, you should feel sick," scolded Caramel. "I can't believe you of all ponies would do something as crazy as chug down 15 mugs of cider." Rainbow Dash I could understand, but you. "Hey," protested Rainbow weakly from her position on Caramel's back. "Aw, come on," protested Scootaloo as she walked between the two adults. "A foal should stuff herself with her favorite food until she's sick at least once in her life. It's like tradition, ya know." "Excerpt exactly," said Rainbow, trying desperately not to lose her composure, not to mention the contents of her stomach. "That probably explains why you haven't grown up at all," sniped Caramel. "Hey, I've barely gotten any cider every year since Pinkie always hogs it all before I get the chance to have a single mug," complained Rainbow, "and this is my last cider season before joining the Wonderbolts. Of course I'm gonna go all out." Caramel raised an eyebrow at the mare draped over his back. "So you want your memory of your final pre-Wonderbolts cider season to be one of severe nausea?" You wouldn't get it," complained Rainbow. "Probably not," agreed Caramel. "Are you going to make it home?" Fluttershy asked Dawn. "We can stop somewhere if you need to. There are plenty of bushes around." I think I'll make it," replied Dawn, though there was a tone of uncertainty that made Fluttershy resolve to keep her wits about her in any case. As much as she loved Dawn, even she wouldn't take the colt throwing up while he was still on her back very well. In retrospect, the colt added, "You probably should have stopped me. I'm quite amazed that I couldn't stop myself." Fluttershy giggled. "I didn't want to stop you," she admitted in a quiet whisper so that none of the others could overhear her. "I've never seen you get that excited about anything before. It was so cute to see you acting almost exactly like any other foal your age would." "I appreciate the sentiment," muttered Dawn, "but my stomach would have preferred the restraint." "Well," said Fluttershy in a more normal tone, "I'm glad you've learned your lesson then. Next time, you'll know better. We wouldn't want you to start acting like Rainbow Dash when the next cider season comes around." "Hey, it's still going," Rainbow Dash pointed out. "We'll be swimming in cider all the way up through Nightmare Night." "You mean you're gonna go out and drink yourself sick every day?" asked Caramel. "Tonight's ride was a courtesy. But if you're gonna keep doing this, no more pony rides." "Fine," groused Rainbow, sulking slightly. "I think I've had enough cider for one season," said Dawn. I'm kinda confused on why you liked it so much, said Scootaloo. I mean, cider's pretty sweet. You don't like sweet things. Well, Don specifically dislikes things that are sweetened with regular sugar, replied Fluttershy. He doesn't mind the sugars you find in fruit or honey near as much, in moderation at least. She gave the colt a wry glance over her shoulder. I also like the spices, replied Don. It was something sweet that I could enjoy, with the flavors I usually get from Arkenstone's teas. It was the best of both worlds actually. Huh, mused Scootaloo. If that's the case, what are we gonna do with all your candy on Nightmare Night? What candy? Asked Don with a wary tone. Well, that's the entire point of trick-or-treating, Scootaloo pointed out. The entire point of Nightmare Night is to get a whole sack full of candy so that you can take it back and nosh on it till you're so hyped up on sugar you can't sleep. The filly went into a list of all the different candies she was looking forward to getting and how much she looked forward to stuffing her face with them. All the while, Don's complexion was slowly waxing greener and greener. Finally, Fluttershy felt his hoof tap her shoulder. Mom, he said, clearly barely able to speak, I need to get off. The group arrived back at Caramel's house with Don feeling slightly less sick and Scootaloo feeling somewhat contrite. However, there were no hard feelings as the filly exchanged a nuzzle with the limp colt, though they skipped any kisses this time for obvious reasons. Taking to the air, Scootaloo gave the group a final wave goodbye before winging her way back to her home. Caramel and Fluttershy trotted through the front door with their respective burdens. Caramel smiled wryly at Fluttershy. How about we go ahead and put the foals to bed? I heard that, growled Rainbow. I know you did, Caramel retorted. Fluttershy laughed lightly at the banter. That sounds like a good idea, she said, pointedly ignoring the sullen glare Rainbow was directing at her. They went upstairs, Caramel taking Rainbow to the guest room that Fluttershy was originally supposed to occupy. He said about making Rainbow as comfortable as possible, in spite of his earlier jibes. Meanwhile, Fluttershy carried Don to the bathroom, where she helped the woozy colt brush his teeth. She would have been tempted to skip it just this once, in favor of just letting him sleep. But she got the feeling that Don would prefer to sleep without the taste of what had happened earlier in his mouth. After Don's teeth had been brushed, Fluttershy carried him to his room and tucked him under the covers. I'm sorry about this, said Don. Fluttershy leaned over and planted a gentle kiss on the colt's forehead. Don't worry, she said, let me ask you one thing. Did you have fun today? The ebony colt's lips slowly curled upwards in a smile. Yes, I did. Then it's all right, we can go back for more tomorrow, if you want to. If it's all the same, I think I'll take a day off from Cider. That earned a giggle from the yellow mare. I can understand that, she said. Good night, Don. Good night, Mom. Turning out the lights, Fluttershy closed the door to Don's room, joining Caramel as he finished putting Rainbow Dash to bed. The two of them made their way downstairs to the living room. There, the two of them relaxed on the couch to enjoy the remainder of the evening in each other's company. Thank you for letting Rainbow stay the night, said Fluttershy as she leaned into Caramel's neck. Well, it's the least I could do, replied Caramel with a chuckle. It wasn't as though she was in any shape to fly back to her place. On the bright side, all she drank was the soft stuff, so it's not like she's gonna have a hangover tomorrow morning. Fluttershy nodded and sighed happily as she pressed up against his side. Today was wonderful, thank you. Shouldn't you be thanking the apples? Asked Caramel. It's their cider after all. I didn't mean that, replied Fluttershy. Well, the cider was good too. What I meant is being here with you, waking up in your arms, seeing you talking and laughing with Don, him eating your meals, all of it. It really feels like we're a family. I think that spending the winter here with you was a wonderful idea. You're welcome, said Caramel, leaning over and sharing a gentle kiss with his filly friend. We still have plenty of time left, so let's make the most of it. Fluttershy nodded and closed her eyes, sighing contentedly as she leaned against her stallion. The two of them stayed like that until the fire had burned down to embers. The following days seemed to idle their way past with an air of sleepy contentment. Don and Rainbow were no worse for wear when they woke up the morning after their cider binge. True to her word, Rainbow dashed back to Sweet Apple Acres at the first opportunity, while Don and the others decided to forego cider for the day. Instead, they spent the day paying visits to any of their friends who hadn't gone to get cider. The day after saw Don and Scootaloo returning to Sweet Apple Acres for more cider in the company of Rainbow Dash, whilst Fluttershy joined Rarity for a visit to the spa and Caramel went to work to help Bon Bon finish up the last of their orders for Nightmare Night candy. The day after that was the day of Nightmare Night. In her boutique, Rarity fretted to frantically finish the cornucopia of costumes commissioned by her customers. Fortunately, in spite of her having shifted her schedule to better accommodate Flaxseed's acclamation to Ponyville, she hadn't fallen behind and managed to finish every one of her orders, netting a hefty pile of bits to help sustain herself, Sweetie Belle, and their new guest through the winter. Rarity herself wasn't one to take part in the festivities so much. Some pony had to stay home to hoof out treats to the foals trick-or-treating after all. She also needed to keep Flaxseed company, as the jumpy stallion could hardly be expected to be out and about on a night when the rest of Ponyville was behaving so wildly. As usual, Pinkie Pie would be the one chaperoning the little ones as they went about their rounds, this time with the addition of Mayweather, who never seemed to stray very far from the pink mare anymore. Applejack was once again overseeing the festival games and activities set up around Town Hall, while Red River would run the Apple family stand, selling the last cider of the season. The others all had their own plans. The most shocking development was that Caramel and Don had managed to coax Fluttershy to come out for the evening. Normally, the canary-colored mare tightly locked her door and completely hid away for the duration of the evening, naturally terrified of a holiday that was about all things scary. Caramel had promised not to leave her side and that he would protect her from anything frightening, while Don joined the rest of the foals in trick-or-treating. What Don would do with the candy he acquired afterward was a question that remained unanswered for the time being. Now hold still, sweetie, cajoled Rarity, I'm nearly done. Ah, how much longer? Complained the white filly as she tried her best to keep from fidgeting. It was one thing to be fitted for a dress, like she had been for the Harvest Festival. But for a Nightmare Night costume, this seemed to be overkill. Don't be like that, said Rarity, pausing to look over her glasses at her younger sister. You are a princess after all. And princesses need to look their very best. I don't recall Princess Celestia or any of the other princesses wearing anything like this, mused Sweetie as she gave her costume a looking over. She was dressed in a flowing white gown with pink highlights. Once again, Rarity had found that genius balance between form and function, working a petticoat into the skirt which was mounted on Sweetie's haunches to keep the hem out from under the filly's hooves. Frills and ruffles abounded, while Sweetie's head was topped by a tall pink conical headdress worn just behind her horn and angled slightly backward, with silvery veils emerging from the very tip to drape back down over her shoulders. It's old unicornian style, said Rarity. I must say, it looks rather good on you. With some slight adjustments, that would make a most lovely formal gown for when you start taking your colt on more sophisticated dates. Rarity. Sweetie puffed up her blushing cheeks in frustration, which only made Rarity giggle at how cute Sweetie was being. Are you almost ready? Asked Rumble from the showroom, where he waited with his own costume. Pinkie Pie's gonna be here with the others soon. Just a minute, sang Rarity before finally pulling away from Sweetie. There, done. Now go and show Rumble your costume. Okay, shouted Sweetie, practically leaping down from her pedestal and bounding to the door. The filly opened it and walked in to join her colt friend. Rumble's costume could practically be called a work of art, which it certainly was by Rarity's standards. Foregoing the standard royal guard armor that young colt seemed to favor, so Rarity had helped Rumble to make his costume a match for Sweetie's unicornian princess garb by modeling his armor off of the Knight's Destrier, the armor of the Pegasus vassals that had served unicornian royalty in the era before Celestia. 1. Though plastic underneath, Rumble's armor had been painted with a silvery sheen, with royal blue and gold highlights as Rarity sought to recreate some of the beautiful inlays she'd found in the history book she'd borrowed from Twilight to help with the project. The armor was more all-encompassing than the standard guard armor. Rumble's face was covered by a champron, whilst the crinier and croupier were broader and covered more area. All 4 of his legs were also sheathed with greaves. All of this, combined with the athletic figure Rumble had been developing thanks to his training with Stormfront, made the colt cut quite the dashing figure. Wow, said Rumble as he laid eyes on Sweetie, you look lovely, milady. Sweetie let out a demure giggle as she fell into character as well. Why thank you, my dear knight. Shall we? We shall, said Rumble. Have fun, darlings, called Rarity, waving from the door to her workroom. She watched until the door closed behind them. A smile on her face, Rarity returned to her workroom and cleaned up the remains of her day's work. She looked forward to a quiet evening, albeit one that was destined to be interrupted several times by the arrival of enthusiastic foals looking for their candy. Still, it seemed the perfect opportunity. Thank goodness Scootaloo came by to pick up her costume earlier. It wasn't easy keeping it a secret from Sweetie. Now there was nothing left to worry about. Flaxseed had been in the kitchen, reading a book he'd gotten from the library. Rarity figured that they could spend the evening, relaxing with a bottle of port that she'd acquired earlier with some accompanying sweets of their own. Suppressing a giggle, Rarity couldn't help but shake her head. Even if she wasn't going out in costume to play games or go from house to house with the foals, she had every reason to believe it would be a marvelous evening. Don snapped the last piece of fake armor into place, feeling the slight tickle as its enchantment washed over him. From the side, Caramel blinked at the change that had gone over the colt. Whoa, breathed the stallion, I gotta admit that's a pretty cool costume. Makes me kinda wish I'd put more effort into mine. It was true that Caramel's costume was nothing special. To help keep Fluttershy from getting too nervous, he'd decided to avoid any ensembles that would obscure his appearance too much. As such, he'd donned a black suit, along with a black cape, a black sombrero cordobes, accompanied by a domino mask made from black cloth that had been wrapped around his head. It was fairly simple as costumes went, but something that would keep Fluttershy from feeling too nervous while she was out with him and actually made a rather handsome figure of the stallion. However, Caramel's costume was nothing compared to Fluttershy's when it came to sheer genericness. Colt and Stallion turned to look as a white figure slowly poked around the door leading to the entryway of the house. Slowly, Fluttershy shuffled out. Her entire body had been shrouded in a plain white bed sheet that had been draped over her entire form, covering even her wings. The only openings were a pair of holes through which her teal eyes barely visible. Boo, if that's all right with you. Caramel tried, he really did. However, the tan stallion in black clothes was unable to keep an undignified snort from forcing its way out his nose. Fluttershy shrank back a little bit. I'm sorry, was it too much? Caramel was vibrating in place in a desperate attempt to contain his mirth. Even Don was unable to contain the slight chuckles that escaped. Mom, he said, I'm sorry, but you're adorable like that. To their surprise, that actually seemed to make Fluttershy perk up slightly as she approached. Oh good, she said, I don't really like trying to be scary. You're too cute to be scary when you look like that, said Caramel as he beckoned the mare forward with a hoof so that she could press her side against his. Oh, thank you, said Fluttershy, glad that the sheet was covering up the pinkish tint of her cheeks. The group turned at the sound of rapid knocking at the door. Caramel opened it to reveal nothing. A sigh escaped the masked stallion's mouth. Aren't you supposed to ask for candy before you start pranking ponies? I'm up here. Scootaloo's voice drew Caramel's eyes upwards. They widened when he took in the filly and her ensemble. The stallion's jaw nearly dropped to the floor. Don't spoil it, admonished the filly before Caramel could find the facilities to speak. I want to show Don. Sure thing, said Caramel, stepping back. He looked over his shoulder at Don and jerked his head towards the door, instructing the colt to go out and see for himself. Don stepped out and looked upwards at the filly hovering above him. His eyes widened in awe at her costume. Scootaloo's costume was less a set of clothing and more a full makeup job. Her orange coat had been dyed a brilliant emerald green. The feathers of her wings had been dyed as well, each wing a mirror image as brilliant streaks of color ran across their width, much like the mane of a certain cerulean mare of their mutual acquaintance. Her mane was covered by a feathered shawl that showcased several plumes in a similar rainbow of color. More plumes had been woven into the hairs of her tail as well. Though they weren't near as long, the plumes reminded Don of the ones Spitfire wore when she merged with Uranus. It was a beautiful balance of color that amazed the colt at how Scootaloo could wear such an ensemble and yet not appear completely garish. You look amazing, he said, staring unabashedly at the filly. Scootaloo swooped down with a giggle and planted a quick peck on Don's lips. What are you dressed as? Asked Caramel, following Don out the door. Ooh, gasped Fluttershy as she joined the group, are you a Codal? Yeah, exclaimed Scootaloo. A what? Asked Caramel, looking at Fluttershy along with Don, the colt's expression indicating that he also wanted to know what Fluttershy was talking about. A Codal, said Fluttershy, they're beautiful feathered serpents that live in the southern jungles. They're actually distant relatives of dragons, but they're supposed to be very gentle and friendly. 2. I've always wanted to go and see them for myself someday. She heaved a disappointed sigh. But they live outside of equestrian borders and going to see them is expensive. Don quickly fluttered over to nuzzle his mother's cheek. We'll go down there someday, said the colt. If they're even half as beautiful as Scootaloo looks, then I'd love to see them too. Scootaloo counted herself lucky that her green makeup hid her blush. Come on, she said, rushing up to Don, less sap and more candy. Let's move. Before the colt could protest, Scootaloo was already hauling him down the street, leaving a giggling Fluttershy and a chuckling Caramel in their wake. It looks like Don's going to have a fine night, observed Caramel before offering a hoof to Fluttershy. Shall we? Suddenly remembering what they were going to be doing, Fluttershy's mirth fled. She nervously nodded to Caramel and took his hoof. Why yes. Don't worry, said Caramel, pulling her to his side, I'll be with you the whole time. If it gets too scary for you, let me know and we'll go home. Oh okay. The two of them, with no small amount of reluctance on Fluttershy's part, set off into the night. Nightmare night, what a fright, give us something sweet to bite. After listening to the foal's sing-song delivery of the classic line, the mare smiled obligingly as she hoofed over a few portions of candy into each of their bags. When exactly does Princess Luna arrive? Asked Don, glancing over at Apple Bloom as the group made their way to the next house. Bloom was outfitted in some bizarre combination of costume and contraption. Her entire body was encased in what appeared to be bronze and gold armor, though the seams of which could be seen a series of gears and shafts that turned in conjunction with her movements. Bloom had explained that she'd gotten the help of Time Turner, Pondale's primary mechanist, timekeeper, and clockmaker to create her costume. Well, let's see, said the clockwork filly. She usually shows up just after Mayor Mare kicks off the opening ceremonies at Town Hall. And she comes every year. That's right, added Spike from where he walked next to Bloom. His costume was somewhat similar to Caramel's, consisting of a black cloak and hood, while a white full-face mask covered his features. After the rocky start the first time she visited as Princess Luna really hit it off with everyone and loves Nightmare Night now. She's crazy good with the pranks, added Scootaloo, she'll scare the cutie mark right off of you. I'm sure, said Don, raising an eyebrow. He was certainly interested in meeting the Princess of the Moon, the pony who possessed the same condition as him in Flaxseed, and the mare for whom the condition had been named. But that's not for a while yet, exclaimed Sweetie, come on every pony. We have plenty of time to hit up some more houses before the ceremonies start. The group quickly made their way to the next house in line while Pinkie Pie and Mayweather trailed behind them, keeping an eye on the smaller foals that accompanied them. The party made their way from house to house, slowly moving towards the town center. When they arrived, they saw that the full festival had already been laid out. Just as with the Harvest Festival, there were games to be played and prizes to be won. But all that took a backseat to Mayor Mare and Zecora as they officially started the night, the zebra laying down the story behind the night in her typical rhyme whilst entertaining every pony with her magical powders, calling forth illusions that made the foals scream. When Zecora finished, there was a crack of thunder from overhead. Every pony tilted their heads upwards to see a chariot descending down from on high, pulled by ponies with the very same bat pony glamour that had been cast over Dawn. As the chariot came in for a landing, the midnight blue form of Princess Luna bounded off with another boom of thunder, spreading her wings wide as the shifting starscape of her mane and tail billowed out behind her. Her body was decked out in dark blue armor and turquoise eyes of her nightmare moon aspect. Greetings, my delicious little ponies. Your princess commands you to enjoy these festivities while you still can. For, if your offerings of sweets and treats do not bring me satisfaction, I have to devour you instead. Princess Luna's voice rippled through the air like a shockwave, making buildings shudder and windows rattle. Foals and adults alike scattered screaming, albeit with an undercurrent of laughter that indicated it was all in good fun. Princess Luna helped them along, her horn conjuring explosions of lights and noise just behind ponies as she flew back and forth along the width and breadth of the plaza. When she finished, Luna set herself back down on the ground, laughing merrily. It was only a few moments before ponies started streaming back into the plaza to return to their games and purchase various treats from vendors, many of them pausing to exchange cheerful greetings with the princess of the night. On the fringes of the party, Caramel turned to Fluttershy, who had tucked herself beneath his cape and was shuddering in terror as she huddled in his arms. Hey, he said, it's okay. The scary part's over now. Oh, squeaked Fluttershy, poking her covered head out from beneath the cape, is it really? Yeah, said Caramel, smiling as he gently coaxed her out of hiding. Come on, I'm sure the princess would love to say hello to you. That I would, said Princess Luna as she approached the pair, her illusory armor crumbling away and her eyes returning to normal. My apologies, fair Fluttershy. Had I known that you would be partaking in the festivities this year, I would have toned down my entrance. It's all right, said Fluttershy, still shaking from the residual shock. I wouldn't want every pony to miss out on my account. Caramel chuckled and planted a kiss on the sheet over her forehead. You don't have to worry about that, Fluttershy, he said. I don't think any pony would mind. Princess Luna blinked as she took in the sight of Caramel and Fluttershy together. Are you, by chance, special some ponies? Why yes we are, said Fluttershy, her voice barely above a whisper. Luna's eyes widened and her face broke into a happy smile. It pleases me to see that you've found a pony to spend your time with. I am sure he will make you quite happy indeed. He already does, breathed Fluttershy, leaning against her colt friend with a blissful expression. Wonderful, exclaimed Luna, clapping her hooves. Leaning in, she gave Caramel a sly look as she whispered into his ear. I pray you make her a very happy mare, for if I find that you have hurt her in any way, I will be more than happy to provide you with an all-expenses-paid excursion to the moon. Am I clear? Sea Crystal, whimpered Caramel. Fluttershy frowned, having heard Luna's words. Princess Luna, while I'm happy that you're looking out for me, I would prefer it if you didn't threaten my colt friend. Luna laughed as she pulled back. Sorry, but I couldn't resist. You and the others are all my precious friends. Fluttershy sighed at Luna's protectiveness before giving the alicorn an inquisitive look. By the way, have you met Don yet? You mean your son? Asked Luna. No, I haven't yet. Perhaps we should find him so that we can be introduced. I'm right here. Luna turned around to see the colt standing directly behind her. Don had removed the helm and crinier of his armor, breaking the enchantment so that the bat pony appearance faded. He stared up at Luna with the very same eyes she had descended into Ponyville with. Truly, said Luna with a sharp intake of breath, it is most off-putting to see my eyes on the face of another pony. You are Dawn Lightwing then? I am, said Dawn with a respectful bow. I'm pleased to finally meet you, princess. As am I, said Luna. Tia kept information concerning you, your condition and other things from me. I'm sure she was trying to spare my feelings, but I would prefer to be kept informed of such things. She tilted her head as she regarded the colt. Could we perhaps speak in private? Dawn nodded. Turning, he offered his bag of candy to Scootaloo, who took the bag before giving Dawn a questioning look. Should I come with you? She asked. Wouldn't you rather continue with the others? Asked Dawn, gesturing to the group of foals, who were being herded back together by Pinky and Mayweather after Luna's spectacular entrance had scattered them. I'd rather stay with you, as she sidled up against Dawn, tucking her body beneath his wing. It was a bit awkward, as his armor felt a bit uncomfortable when it was pressed up against her, but she was able to bear with it. If that's all right, said Dawn, looking up at Luna. Luna stared for a second. Oh my, I had no idea that you had found a special sumpony as well, Scootaloo. Yep, she said, grinning at the princess, and don't you even think about trying to threaten him. I'll kick your butt. Luna let out a booming laugh that rumbled across the town before she realized that she'd inadvertently switched back to the royal voice. Blushing, she covered her mouth with her hooves. My apologies. Let us adjourn elsewhere then. I think I know someplace we can go, volunteered Fluttershy. Let on then, said Luna, gesturing for the sheet-covered mare to take the front of the group. Fluttershy and Caramel walked in front of Luna, showing the way, while Dawn and Scootaloo walked alongside the princess, the group making their way away from Ponyville Center. Ironically, the spot that had come to Fluttershy's mind was the last place she really wanted to be on Nightmare Night. But the festivities had spread throughout the entire town, along with Ponyville's park. The undeveloped spaces between the town proper and her own cottage were open to the chill wind that continued to whistle through the trees, which would have made settling over there uncomfortable. As a result, Fluttershy decided that the best place to hold their discussion would be the place where Nightmare Night would come to an end. The statue of Nightmare Moon, which had been tucked carefully out of the way in an isolated grove of trees, was rarely visited, if at all, during the rest of the year. It saw only the most cursory of maintenance from the park's caretakers, who found the sculpture unsettling and resolved to spend as little time as possible with it. Only prior to Nightmare Night did they put forth a true effort to make Princess Luna's darker, more sinister aspect look her best. At the end of the night, the foals would be led to the statue, where they would leave the customary offering of candy to appease Nightmare Moon and keep her from gobbling them up. On most years, the candy offering was divvied up between the adults who had helped set up the festivities. However, ever since she had joined in, Princess Luna had also received a portion of the offerings, which seemed only fair, as the offerings were technically being made to her in the first place. The ponies and their princess had arrayed themselves in the space in front of the statue so that neither group was facing it. Rather, it was as though the statue was a silent third party to their conversation, looking on from the sidelines. The setup was out of consideration to Fluttershy, who was afraid to face the statue head-on but was also frightened of having the specter of Nightmare Moon lurking behind her while she tried to talk to Princess Luna. As it was just being in the presence of the statue was making her shiver with nervousness, which Dawn and Caramel helped alleviate by pressing up against her from either side. She didn't like this place, but it seemed like the best option as, until the very end of the night, no pony else would be there. Luna settled onto her haunches, surveying the ponies arrayed before her as she took a moment to sip the tankard of cider she had procured from the Apple family stall that Red River was currently running. In front of her, the others were also nursing their own large servings of the warm, spiced drink. Dawn had set his helm off to one side, while Fluttershy had pulled back the sheet over her head so that it was now bunched up over her shoulders, leaving her head free. Caramel had doffed his hat and pulled off his mask, setting them aside for the time being. Scootaloo hadn't removed any elements of her colorful costume, but sipped her cider very carefully to keep the drink from running across her face and making the makeup run. Setting her tankard down, Luna took a deep breath. Let me begin by apologizing, she said. I am deeply sorry, Dawn Lightwing, for all that you have had to endure thanks to the mistakes I made in my past. Dawn dipped his head in acknowledgement. I appreciate and accept your apology, he said, though I don't believe it is necessary. I can say that, with my appearance, some ponies were likely to judge me a freak anyway even if the cult Solar had not labeled you as the root of my condition. Luna sighed. That is likely true, she admitted, though my little ponies are supposed to best embody the concept of harmony, they have difficulty accepting that which strays away from what they have decided is normal. It is a great injustice but not one that is easy to address. I've managed, said Dawn. Right now, there is another stallion in town who shares my condition, albeit with the more typical form. Is that so? Asked Luna. Where is he? He's staying with Rarity, volunteered Fluttershy. After everything he's been though, he's very nervous. He's actually a lot like me. If you flipped out and tried to beat the stuffing out of the pony that startled you, muttered Caramel. He hadn't been on the receiving end of any of Flaxseed's outbursts but had seen a couple of the gold-colored stallion's lapses. Given what he'd heard about Flaxseed's past, Caramel couldn't exactly begrudge Flaxseed for being a paranoid mess. But that didn't make him any less of a danger to the ponies that Caramel cared about. Is that so? Mused Luna. Perhaps I should pay a visit to this stallion as well. She heaved a melancholy sigh. Though he may merely see me as the source of his misfortune. I don't really think he will, said Fluttershy, but I'm not sure how well he'd handle a princess coming to see him. You would have to ask Rarity, I think. That is probably wise, agreed Luna with a nod. The group took the moment of silence that followed to indulge their cider once more. It was a bit strange as Luna didn't seem to have any particular purpose for this conversation. After a moment, she began to ask Dawn questions regarding his life, what it was like before he had met Fluttershy, and what had occurred after Fluttershy had taken him in. They answered honestly, leaving out nothing. Luna listened with quiet fascination to the stories of Dawn's battles, from his duel with Stormfront and Red River to the pitched battle for control of Cloudsdale to the harrowing fight against Willow and his mission to rescue an innocent mare from the clutches of a cruel viscountess. Truly, said Luna as Dawn wrapped up his tale, you have been through a great deal for a colt your age. I can see why two of my sister's knights have taken such an interest in you. Something about Luna's words made Fluttershy's eyes widen. You said they were Princess Celestia's knights, she said softly. Are you worried that you don't have any of your own? Luna sighed. I might have been jealous. But Tia formed the Celestial Order of Knights out of necessity. When there were two of us to share the burden of rule, it was easy for one of us to see to outside problems while the other saw to internal affairs. However, with me gone, Tia felt the pressure from nations outside our borders, who saw that Equestria had been weakened by the loss of one of its princesses. But Tia has always been too kind for her own good. She desperately wished to spare as many of our ponies from the pain and bloodshed of war as possible. She also reasoned that raising an army, even for purely defensive purposes, would be seen as a provocation by our neighbors and might invite the very conflicts she sought to avoid. So she turned to investing in creating a group of very few ponies with great power, observed Dawn. Luna nodded. The other thing she desperately wanted was a check on her own power. Her head drooped. Thanks to me, Tia had seen firsthand that we alicorns are just as capable of going astray as any other pony. But because of our great power, only another alicorn could possibly be a check against us. But with Tia being the only alicorn left until Cadence appeared, there was no pony to check her power, and that troubled her greatly. The elements of harmony had been rendered inert in the process of banishing me, and it was many centuries before she worked out how to reactivate them, which eliminated that option for the time being as well. While no single knight may have been a match for my sister, as a group, they would be capable of bringing her down. It would be a bloody, costly battle, but definitely not beyond the realm of possibility. So she sought out ponies who possessed both power and wisdom, ponies who had great strength but the wisdom to not abuse that strength. Because of that, in spite of their name, the knights are sworn to serve Equestria and its ponies before anything else. When I returned, Tia made sure that the knights understood that they were not to hold either of us in any higher esteem than the other, that we were to be equals in their eyes. So, I do not truly need any knights of my own. So, now what? Asked Dawn, wondering where they could go from there. Luna shrugged. To be truly honest, I haven't given much thought to how this would play out. I can inform you on some developments in our ongoing investigation into the cult Solar. What about it? Asked Dawn, his ears perking up. When you left for your journey to Diamond Mountain, a group of cultists came with the intent of attacking you at your home, said Luna. If I recall, Red River and Stormfront captured them, said Dawn. Luna nodded. They were brought to Canterlot for questioning, where we learned something very interesting. Apparently this group of ponies was going against orders by trying to attack you. What? Gasped Fluttershy. From what we gathered from the prisoners, the Supreme Pontiff himself issued an order stating that there were to be no further attempts on your life, explained Luna. That sounds really unlikely, said Caramel. Why on earth would they do that? Luna frowned darkly. Apparently, he has already made his own arrangements for Dawn's demise. The ringleader of the group said that their mob had originally been part of a much larger group that had been gathering in Hoofington in preparation for leading an assault on Dawn en masse when the order came down from the cult's leadership. The Supreme Pontiff has designated a pony referred to as the Cardinal to be the one to come for Dawn. The Cardinal? Asked Dawn, tilting his head. It would seem that he is second only to the Supreme Pontiff himself, said Luna. His name is Terra Hart and he is apparently an Earth pony. However, aside from that, very little is known about him. Terra Hart, mused Dawn, getting an ominous sense from the name. If he was some pony chosen specifically for the purpose of killing me, then he might be very dangerous indeed. Excuse me. As one, the group turned their heads towards the source of the voice to see Arkenstone approaching them. The beige stallion wasn't wearing a costume, having apparently skipped out on the night's festivities. Oh hey, said Caramel, waving cheerfully at the other stallion, come to join us. Actually, I've come to warn you that you should probably think of moving elsewhere, said Arkenstone. It's nearly time for Zecora to lead the foals here for the offering. That would be my cue then, said Luna, getting to her hooves. She smiled down at Dawn, who was also standing upright. I hope that we have the chance to speak again in the future. As do I, said Dawn. Come on, shouted Scootaloo, hoofing Dawn his sack of candy back and pulling him back the way they came. We've got to join the others. You can't miss this. Fluttershy and Caramel watched the two of them go, along with Luna and Arkenstone. Caramel paused to gather up the abandoned tankards. We should probably go too, he said to Fluttershy. You probably don't want to watch this part. Oh okay, squeaked Fluttershy, pulling the sheet back up over her head again and adjusting it so she could still see out of the eye holes. Turning, she bowed slightly to Princess Luna. It was nice talking to you, Princess. And you as well, my friend, said Luna with a fond smile as she watched the couple trot off, leaving her alone with Arkenstone. How much did you hear? She asked the stallion. Enough, said Arkenstone glumly. Terra Hart. That is the name the prisoners gave to us, said Luna. Do you know him? Know him? No. Arkenstone shook his head, his expression grave. I know of him. However, there is one pony I know who knows him quite well. Is that so? Asked Luna. Arkenstone nodded. Yes, she does not like to speak of him and, to be honest, there is little to say. The stallion is a true practitioner of the mountain route, quite possibly a master of it by now. That is more than a little troubling, said Luna, if he comes to Ponyville. Arkenstone nodded. Neither Stormfront nor Red River have the strength to stand against him. Dawn is also not yet at a level where he could hope to triumph. But more importantly, he'll have to speak with the mayor. Why? Asked Luna. We'll need an evacuation plan, said Arkenstone, his tone darkening. If Terra Hart comes for Dawn, I will be the one who ultimately has to face him. If we do battle, then Ponyville might not survive. In spite of her troubled thoughts, Luna played her role most faithfully and spooked the foals as they came to leave the offering. She then stayed to see out the remainder of the festivities, doing her best to maintain her composure and not give her friends any cause to worry. It wasn't easy, but being amongst the foals who loved her so much went a long ways towards soothing her troubled thoughts. As she boarded her chariot and her guards began the flight back to Canterlot, Luna resolved to speak to her sister about the situation. There was a great deal to talk about. In the flurry of concerns raised by her conversation with Arkenstone, Luna had completely forgotten to pay a visit to Rarity and her charge. You know, you didn't have to leave all of your candy at the offering, groused Scootaloo as she and Dawn walked along, Fluttershy and Caramel trailing behind them. Dawn simply smirked. You're only saying that because you know I wouldn't be able to eat much of it and you'd have more for yourself. Hey. The quartet approached Scootaloo's home. Pausing at the doorstep, Scootaloo turned and planted a peck on Dawn's lips. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? It's going to snow, said Fluttershy from her place behind Dawn. Be careful when you come over. Okay, said Scootaloo before disappearing inside her home. Now that that's settled, said Caramel, let's call it a night. As the three of them made their way back to Caramel's house, the stars of night were slowly obscured by the arriving clouds. Just before they reached their doorstep, Fluttershy looked up and gasped to see the first few flakes of snow beginning to fall. Winter had arrived in Ponyville at last. Author's notes. 1. In the early era of unification between the three tribes that gave birth to the nation of Equestria, the Knights Destrier were Pegasus vassals who swore an oath of loyalty to unicorn nobles in a show of unity between the unicorn and Pegasus tribes. Some noble ponies developed very close relationships with their vassals, which eventually evolved to give rise to some of the first officially recognized and approved mixed marriages in Equestria's history. 2. The Codals, also known as the feathered or rainbow serpents, are formidable draconic creatures that lurk in the jungles of the lands south of Equestria's borders. Thought predatory and fiercely territorial, they are surprisingly gentle with regards to their behavior towards smaller sapient creatures, like ponies. Ponies, in turn, regard seeing or meeting a Codal to be a good omen and a sign of luck. There is a rather brisk trade in Codal feathers, which the serpents shed regularly. Fortunately, poaching is not an issue, as the formidable nature of the Codals, as well as other factors, mean that trying to forcefully kill them for their feathers is a severely unprofitable venture. Ends of Nightmare Night concludes and winter has come to Ponyville. Dawn's first meeting with Luna was rather low-key as these things go, but I didn't have anything in mind with regards to any kind of dramatic revelations. Scootaloo's costume wasn't meant to represent anything significant, with the hint regarding the existence of the Codals, which are essentially a dragon subtype, much as the lungs of Guoxia are. They might be something neat to bring up in the future, but their existence has no bearing on the plot as it stands. Now for some unfortunate news. There might not be an update tomorrow, depending on developing circumstances. You see, I am currently on vacation in Hawaii. The good part of this is that my sister has married, I have a spiffy new brother-in-law, and we've all been having a ton of fun out here. The bad news is that we are currently in the path of a tropical storm, hurricane that is slated to just barely pass by us, so there is a fair chance that we may have to evacuate our current place of residence, which is only a few yards away from the coast, and flee for higher ground. I wouldn't count on a hurricane shelter having much in the way of internet access, so if you don't hear from me tomorrow, that's probably what happened. Depending on how circumstances develop, it could nix my plans to update on Saturday and Sunday as well, so there is a chance you might not hear from me for a few days. Sorry in advance. Next chapter, Dawn and Scootaloo and others battle for dominance. White Wonders. Chapter 6, White Wonders. When Dawn awoke the day after Nightmare Night, he pulled back the curtains of his room to see that all of Ponyville had been blanketed in a beautiful sheet of white. Snow had fallen all through the night, covering everything. All the preparations Rainbow's team had made had paid off, and Ponyville's first snowfall of the season had gone off without a hitch. Normally, Dawn would already be going through his morning routine, brushing his teeth, combing his mane, preening his feathers. But just this once, he paused, simply spending several minutes staring out the window in quiet fascination as the snow continued to fall. It was a very different feeling from what he'd experienced last winter. Snow was cold, snow was wet, it was potentially deadly, something to be regarded with caution and a sign that the season was against him. When Dawn had seen snow in the Everfree Forest, his only thoughts had been about surviving it. But now, laying in a warm bedroom, with an even warmer blanket draped over him, he was able to stare out at the snow from within this sanctuary and see it with new eyes. The snow looked beautiful. The sight was so mesmerizing to the ebony colt that he completely lost track of time until the first thumps of Scootaloo's hoof against the front door echoed up the stairs. Wasting no time, Dawn rushed down to let the orange filly in, who blinked in surprise at the Dawn's state of disarray. You okay? She asked as she hung up her purple scarf and shrugged out of her heavy winter coat. It was uncharacteristic of Dawn to abandon his usual morning activities, and usually a sign of trouble, that something was seriously bothering him. It's nothing, said Dawn with a sheepish smile, I was watching the snow and I completely forgot about everything else. Scootaloo blinked and looked out one of the ground floor windows. Is it that big a deal? Dawn shrugged. I'm not certain, he replied, I was just enjoying watching it. If you say so, said Scootaloo, still watching out the window, trying to see what Dawn was finding so fascinating. Dawn quickly went upstairs to finish his morning routines. A few minutes later, he came back down to see Scootaloo was sitting quietly in the living room, her feathers fluffed out slightly. Though the room was warmer than the outside, there was still a bit of a chill that pervaded the early morning. Dawn carefully placed some logs in the fireplace. Extending a wing, he built up a charge in his feathers before sending a bolt into the pile of wood with a snap, immediately sparking a flame, which slowly caught and began to build in strength. Slowly the warmth from the fireplace began to seep out into the living room. Better? Asked Dawn. Scootaloo didn't answer until she'd sidled up next to him and tucked herself underneath his wing. Much better. The two of them spent a moment relaxing before they had to get up and move on to the next part of their routine. With the temperature outside dropping, it was no longer all that advisable to continue training out there. Unfortunately, inside Caramel's living room, there just wasn't enough space for the two of them to run through their forms. Dawn hoped to find some way to remedy this issue. When he'd lived in the Everfree, he'd spent much of the winter going through his forms over and over again. The main reason had been that the constant physical activity helped stave off the cold and keep him from freezing. But now that he had a warm home of his own, he wasn't sure what to do. He and Scootaloo could probably continue their practice in the afternoon, but flying all the way out to the quarry for intensive training and then flying back was ill-advised in this weather. Most likely, they would simply have to curtail their training for a little while until things began to warm up again. It would slow Scootaloo's progress, but it was better than risking her health. Perhaps Arkenstone might have an idea, thought Dawn as he and Scootaloo maintained their silent meditation. After a few moments, Dawn's ears picked up the low clopping sound of Caramel's hooves as the tan stallion wandered down the stairs. Morning you two, he said cheerfully, glad to see you made it here all right, Scootaloo. It was no problem, said Scootaloo as she relaxed her stance. She and Dawn climbed onto the couch and relaxed together. Thanks for lighting the fire, Caramel said, getting a nod from Dawn in response. What have you kids got planned for today? Well, we've got work at the tea house from the morning through the afternoon, said Scootaloo, then we were planning on doing something with the others. She grinned wolfishly. I'm thinking we should have a snowball fight. Just be careful, said Caramel as he headed towards the kitchen, we don't want any pony getting sick. We'll be fine, said Scootaloo with a dismissive wave. We've had huge snowball fights every year when the snow falls. If I recall, you came down with a cold twice afterwards, commented Fluttershy as she joined the group. Well, that was. Scootaloo blushed as Fluttershy giggled, accompanied by some chuckling from Caramel. She looked pointedly at Don who, while not showing any audible signs of mirth, was betrayed by the jerking motion of his chest, indicating barely restrained laughter. Scowling, Scootaloo jabbed the colt with her elbow, which only served to make Don cough out a couple of audible laughs. Fluttershy couldn't help but smile as she exchanged her morning nuzzle with Don before going to join Caramel in the kitchen, the two of them working to put breakfast together for the hungry foals. After they had finished the meal, Fluttershy saw her colt friend, along with Don and Scootaloo, to the door, watching the three of them as they headed off to their respective jobs. After she'd seen them off, Fluttershy hummed happily as she donned her own scarf and coat in order to head out to meet Rarity at the spa. Flaxseed awoke in his room in the Carousel Boutique. Lifting his head slowly, he tried to recall what had happened the previous night. He and Rarity had not drunk all that much of the port she had shared with him. However, Flaxseed had little practice in the art of drinking. It was difficult to find the time and money to spare for liquor. On top of that, the last thing the stallion typically wanted to do was imbibe something that could lower his inhibitions and render him vulnerable. It was for that reason that his alcohol tolerance was nothing worth writing home about. Fortunately, though he was groggy, Flaxseed was pleased to find that he'd been spared the hangover, which at least seemed to indicate he hadn't overindulged. Thinking back, he tried to recall the details of the evening he'd spent with Rarity. They'd spent their time conversing congenially over a few glasses of her port and some almond croissants. He'd learned a great deal about Rarity's dressmaking business, all the famous clients she'd acquired, and the many adventures she'd gone on to find particular materials. For his part, Flaxseed had found himself opening up more about his past experiences, regaling Rarity with his recollections of some of his more harrowing escapes, which the mare had listened to with a great deal of attention. In retrospect, that may have been her plan from the very beginning. The conversation had been interrupted several times over the course of the evening by the doorbell as small groups of foals came to the door to demand their nightmare night candy. All told, it hadn't been a bad way to spend an evening. After Rumble walked Sweetie Belle home from the festivities, they had all gone to bed and that had been that. After closing his eyes, Flaxseed's next conscious recollection was waking up in his room, safe and comfortable. Glancing at the door, Flaxseed was shocked to see that he'd completely forgotten to place his usual locking charm. His heart jumped in alarm. Though the door itself had been locked, Rarity could have easily opened it with her magic, or possibly a master key that she likely had. However, the door was undisturbed and there was no sign that any pony but Flaxseed had been in the room. The revelation amazed him. In the scant few days that he'd been in Ponyville, Flaxseed was shocked by how much he had lowered his guard. His heart had been warmed by Rarity's kind treatment, her willingness to open her home to him, her warm and caring friends. The whole time, she'd kept her distance, respected his privacy, and done everything in her power to make sure that he was comfortable. Never once had she betrayed or abused the trust that Flaxseed had placed in her. Still, he thought, it's too early to tell, much too early. Though he desperately wanted to believe that Rarity and her friends had his best interests at heart, though he wanted to believe that all of Ponyville wasn't some kind of fairy tale haze his addled mind was dreaming up, Flaxseed just couldn't bring himself to let go of the paranoia that had dogged him for so long. Undoubtedly, the lock charm would go back up on the door that night and it would be a while yet before he found himself willing to risk drinking anything alcoholic. Already, the realization of just how vulnerable he had been was leaving Flaxseed panting as he fought down a panic attack. It took a few moments for the gold-colored stallion to get his thoughts back under control. Once he'd succeeded, he managed to get back to his usual morning routine and was soon downstairs in the kitchen, where Rarity was already in the process of fixing him another late breakfast. Soon, Flaxseed found himself devouring a cheese and spinach omelet and washing it down with several glasses of apple juice. "And how are you feeling this morning?" asked Rarity with a smile as she placed a second omelet in front of the ravenous stallion. "I'm feeling all right," said Flaxseed, before tucking into the second omelet. "I was afraid I'd have a hangover this morning, but it looks like I got lucky." "Well, we didn't have very much after all," said Rarity with a chuckle as she sat herself at the table. "Port isn't meant to be consumed by the bottle anyway. Indeed, there was still at least half of a bottle left from the previous night. Perhaps we can finish it some other time." "Maybe," said Flaxseed dubiously. He still didn't plan on lowering his guard again anytime soon. "What's on your agenda for today?" "Oh, there isn't a whole lot," replied Rarity. "Now that Nightmare Night is past, the only outstanding orders that I have are the new costumes for Sapphire Shores and her ensemble. Between them and the fees I took in for costumes, there should be enough to last us through the season." "Even though I'm here?" asked Flaxseed. Rarity blinked. "Well, I must admit that having a third pony did throw my calculations off a little, but I still think we have enough." "Maybe I could check for you," offered Flaxseed. "I'm good with numbers." Rarity's eyes widened for a second before she began to smile eagerly. "Oh, you are you?" Flaxseed nodded. "Ever since I was little, math has been my favorite subject. I used to want to be an accountant when I grew up." "Used to?" inquired Rarity, raising an eyebrow. Flaxseed sighed. He glanced forlornly out the window. "Well, I ended up not being able to go to trade school for it." "Was it because of your eyes?" Rarity felt more than a little awkward to be bringing up the subject of Flaxseed's condition in this context. From the look on the stallion's face, it was clearly a painful memory for him. The previous night, he'd regaled her with some of his experiences, but ones that had been more exciting than distressing. They'd been tales of late-night escapes under the cover of darkness and harrowing chases. She suspected that, besides those tales, there lurked other stories that were the source of many of the scars on the stallion's heart, stories that he wasn't ready to part with just yet. Perhaps this was one of them. Flaxseed's shoulders rose and fell with his sigh. "Yeah," he admitted, "I just graduated from elementary and was sending out applications when I had my first episode. There was this pony that had been bullying me all through my school years. He was really getting on my nerves, harassing me every day. Finally, I just snapped, gave him a piece of my mind. When the damn brat ran off screaming, I thought I'd finally won and gotten him off my back." Flaxseed let out a cynical snort. "Course, I found out how wrong I was when a mob showed up at our house, complete with torches and pitchforks. Turns out the kid had told his dad, was overheard, and the next thing I knew, the Order of Celestial Light was at my family's house, insisting that I be hoofed over for extermination." That's awful, gasped Rarity. The gold-colored stallion nodded slowly. My parents managed to distract them long enough for me to sneak out and get away. I still don't know what happened to them. I haven't tried to find out. Why not? Asked Rarity. Too dangerous, replied Flaxseed with a shrug. Those bastards from the order were persistent as hay. They chased me through 3 different towns before I finally managed to make them lose my trail. I wasn't about to risk them finding it again by going back to the place where it all started. Going to the guard was a joke. I couldn't trust them. I couldn't trust anyone. The order seemed to have ponies everywhere, no matter where I went. If I slipped up even once, the next thing I could expect was some pony trying to lure me into an ambush. His head dropped and he held it in his forehooves. The things they said. Rarity stood up and slowly made her way around the table. Carefully, she placed a hoof on Flaxseed's shoulder. The stallion tensed at first but didn't jump. Deliberately, Rarity slid her free arm around his shoulders and pulled him against her. Flaxseed's body began to shake with barely suppressed sobs. It's all right, she cooed softly, let it all out. She held the stallion for a while longer until he managed to regain his composure. When Flaxseed finally pulled away, sniffling and wiping his eyes, she smiled at him. I would be ever so happy to have you go over my finances, she told him. No one should be denied from doing the things that they truly love. Haltingly, Flaxseed returned her smile. Thank you. Rarity gently patted him on the shoulder again. If it's all right with you, I would like to share this information with Twilight. Her brother is captain of the Royal Guard. It's highly possible that he can investigate what happened to your parents. Either we can find them and reunite you with them or, her breath hitched as she considered the other possibility. Quote. Or we can at least lay your past to rest. Flaxseed looked at her nervously. Are you sure it's safe? As safe as can be, replied Rarity. Keep in mind that every pony here is on your side and many of them are quite strong. No matter what might happen, they will see to your safety. Oh okay, said Flaxseed, still sounding uncertain, let me think on it. Of course, said Rarity, we wouldn't dream of doing anything without your permission. Don gave the bits in his pouch a bemused look. Scootaloo peeked over his shoulder. Wow, the loot's really piling up, she commented wryly. Well, it's not all that many bits, Rumble pointed out. The pouch was still rather small. After all, Don had only just gotten his earnings from his job. It had been empty before. Yeah, but he's been saving them up, replied Scootaloo, looking back at the gray colt. Don hasn't really splurged on anything aside from the harvest festival and the first day of cider season. She turned back to her colt friend. Didn't Fluttershy just open an account for you at the bank? She did, answered Don. I forget exactly how much I have in there at the moment though. Besides the pay for his work, there was also the money left over from the reward purse he'd been given by Mayor Mare for his role in ending the drought caused by the Cloudsdale tribalists. A lot, said Scootaloo, spreading her arms for emphasis. It's something like almost 1,000 bits now. Whoa, gasped the other foals in stunned surprise. 1,000 bits wasn't all that spectacular an amount. Don's mother had more in her own account. Diamond Tiara's father was likely to drop more on an impulse buy for his daughter, in the old days, at least. But for the average foal, it was a veritable fortune that could buy entire piles of sweets and treats, one of the reasons Don had been willing to spend so much money on cider earlier. What are y'all gonna do with it all? Asked Apple Bloom, leaning forward. Don shrugged. I haven't thought about it much, he said earnestly. At the very least, he figured it would serve him well to save up the money while he could. After all, Fluttershy saw to all his essentials presently, so he figured that saving his own money for the future was probably a wise move. The fact that he'd rarely found anything he felt he needed to spend his own money on kept Don from losing any significant amounts. Geez, griped Rumble, if you're not going to do anything with it, you could at least treat us to cupcakes more often. He yelped as Sweetie Belle elbowed him sharply. Turning, he gave the irate filly a sheepish grin as she fixed him with a reproachful glare. We're getting paid too, she reminded him. Arkenstone had been giving all of them a decent wage for their work at the tea house. Granted, with the exception of Don, the other foals were a bit more inclined to blow their pay on various indulgences, though their elder siblings had convinced them to set at least some of their earnings aside for a rainy day. Enough about money, exclaimed Scootaloo, it's time to let some snowballs fly. The others, save Don, shouted in enthusiastic agreement and rushed out to the wide-open expanses of Ponyville Park, where the snow had accumulated across the hills, leaving plenty for the construction of forts, as well as ammunition. They tried to divide into teams but found it a little difficult to keep things even with 5 ponies. Apple Bloom put the fight on hold and rushed back into town. A few minutes later, she was back, a puffing Spike bounding along in her wake. Now that they had even numbers, they once again started deciding on teams. For the first round, it was decided that it would be boys against girls. Spike, Don, and Rumble made up one team, while the 3 fillies of the original Cutie Mark Crusaders made up the other. Immediately, they set about making preparations, namely the construction of fortifications and ammunition. Don, a bit bemused by the whole affair, had to be directed through his tasks by Rumble, the 2 of them working to erect a walled enclosure that they could hide behind, while Spike set his dexterous hands to molding snowballs. Across the way, Bloom and Scootaloo were working on their own fort while Sweetie used her magic to carefully shape snowballs of their own. What are the rules of this game? Asked Don as he worked the snow beside Rumble, both of them packing it in and building up the wall, high enough to crouch behind, but not high enough that it would impede their own ability to pop up and lob snowballs at their opponents. Well, they're not so much rules as they are guidelines, explained Rumble. The basic idea is that you just try to hit the other side with as many snowballs as you can, while trying to get hit as little as possible. It's not like any pony's gonna try to keep count. After the fight, we'll probably spend a good 10 minutes arguing over who won. The only rules we really have are the kind to keep us from hurting each other, snowballs only, no ice chunks or anything with rocks or sticks in it, that sort of thing. Try not to hit any pony too hard. Okay, said Don, going back to work. Building the wall was at least somewhat familiar to him. During his time in the Everfree, he'd made snow shelters for himself during the winter. Once it was packed, snow actually made an excellent insulator and, combined with careful construction, could be used to build a shelter that was surprisingly warm inside, even when the temperatures outside were well into the negative numbers. Those memories came drifting back as he continued to work on the wall. Okay, said Spike, as he added one last snowball to the sizable pile behind him, I think we're about ready. Standing up, he raised his head above the wall to peer at the fillies. You ready, girls? The next sound out of the young dragon's mouth was a startled yelp as he ducked beneath the wall to avoid a snowball that had nearly burst against his face. It was the only warning the boys received as the trio of fillies fired off a furious salvo of packed snow in their direction. Dawn and Rumble both hurled themselves over the wall to avoid getting battered by the flying snow. Thanks for the warning, Rumble called out irritably in the direction of the girls. Ya snooze, ya lose, Apple Bloom taunted back. Real original, groused Spike. He looked over at Dawn and Rumble, ready to give the girls a taste of their own medicine. You bet, said Rumble with a ferocious grin, picking up a snowball with his feathers. Crouching, he jumped, bouncing up above the height of the wall. His eyes almost immediately zeroed in on the fillies, who were already taking aim at him. Smirking, Rumble sighted on Bloom and let fly, snapping his wing forward and launching the snowball using the same skills he'd honed while practicing with the meteor hammer. The snowball flew straight and true, bursting against Bloom's forehead, knocking the yellow filly back with a shriek, her own snowball dropping to the ground. Sweetie and Scootaloo retaliated with shots of their own, but Rumble swept his wings upwards, using the downforce to drive himself back down below the line of the wall before their snowballs could reach him. The two icy projectiles sailed harmlessly overhead. Ha! Shouted Spike, peeking over the wall. Good shot. From his position, he could see Bloom getting upright once again, flakes of white scattered in her hair and her bow knocked askew. However, Spike's jubilation was short-lived as he was knocked onto his back by a pair of snowballs launched by Sweetie and Scootaloo. Your turn, said Rumble, giving Dawn an imploring look. Frowning contemplatively, Dawn examined the pile of snowballs that Spike had assembled before smirking. The colt extracted a pair of white orbs from the pile, holding them in the feathers of either wing. With a flick of his wings, he hefted them upward before catching them on ascending air currents generated by his magic. Closing his eyes, Dawn let his awareness spread across the battlefield. The girls and their snow fort was well within his 20-meter radius. Dawn's wings flickered, appearing to double in number. The snowballs shot upwards. Both Spike and Rumble tracked their progress, watching in confusion as the balls flew in high arcs before descending out of sight. Less than a second later, the surprised shouts of Scootaloo and Sweetie echoed across from the other side. No fair using your wind sense. Scootaloo protested. You could do the same. Dawn shouted back, feeling quite amused. It's good training for you. He began to gather more snowballs to launch upwards, Spike and Rumble watching him with triumphant grins on their faces. On the other side of the battlefield, Scootaloo growled under her breath. Her wind sense had been getting better, but she only had a hazy idea of what lay on the other side of the battlefield. Dawn and the other boys were crouched in the lee of their own wall, which obscured them from her view. Even before he'd hit them with such pinpoint accuracy, Scootaloo had already figured that Dawn would know their exact locations. Do ya think ya can do it? Asked Bloom, giving Scootaloo a hopeful look. I'm not sure, replied Scootaloo. I mean, they're in a tricky position for me. Well, if you're gonna do something, I suggest you do it fast. Exclaimed Sweetie, looking up with wide eyes because we don't have much time. Scootaloo felt it in the wind even before she looked up. Her and Bloom's eyes widened as they saw the veritable hail of snowballs descending towards them. The three fillies shrieked and yelled as the snowballs rained down from above, pelting them. Buy me some time, shouted Scootaloo as she ducked her head beneath her forelegs to try and keep the snow off. Sweetie looked around frantically before lighting her horn. A few seconds later, a shimmering shield of green energy projected over them. It wasn't much, but it reduced the snowballs to harmless powder that then flowed off the sides. Dawn's attack quickly abated when he realized that the girls were successfully defending themselves against an attack from above. In the meantime, Apple Bloom leapt into the offensive, jumping up to the wall and hurling snowballs as fast as she possibly could at any hint of another pony or dragon showing over the wall on the other side. At one point, she spotted a lick of gray and black and shifted her aim upwards slightly. When Rumble bounced above the wall to try and hit her with another pinpoint attack, Bloom's snowball took him straight in the face. In the meantime, Scootaloo had closed her eyes and tried to let go of all the excitement that had been building in her over the snowball fight. She spread her wings and reached out through the wind, extending her awareness through it as it rolled over the snow, caressing the walls of the snow forts and the bodies of her friends. She felt their presence displacing the air as it flowed around them, turning the currents into small eddies and vortices. Dawn and the other boys were currently sheltered in the lee of their wall, the presence of which obscured Scootaloo's view of them as the disruptions of the wind currents the boys' bodies created blended with those that came from the wall itself. For winning, Scootaloo's face scrunched as she tried to discern the airflow displacement created by the boys from the flow of the wall itself. You're thinking about it too much. Dawn's carried over from the other side. Don't try to separate everything out but follow the flow and feel it change. To Scootaloo's surprise, she suddenly felt as though Dawn's presence was right beside her. She realized that he wasn't next to her, but she was feeling his magic as he blended it into the air along with hers. Her awareness automatically began to follow it as it flowed across the wall and down behind it. She felt the wind flowing, curling, and twisting in the wall's shadow, carrying around until it met with new objects that changed its flow further. She realized that Dawn was using his own magic to show her how to differentiate him and the other boys from the wall itself in her awareness. After a few moments of concentration, she began to be able to tell them apart and even note the details of their forms. Now Scootaloo knew exactly where her targets were. All that was left was to launch the attack. Being careful to not lose track of the boys, Scootaloo began to load snowballs onto her wings. She'd already figured how Dawn was launching his own attack. She wondered if she had the control to do the same. The answer for the first try was no. As soon as Scootaloo tried to use an updraft to lift the snowball up, it burst into powder, scattering across the girls and making them squeal as the cold flakes settled into their manes. Even when tightly packed, the snowballs weren't rocks and came apart much more easily than any stone that Scootaloo had worked with. Back to square one, she thought glumly as she picked up another snowball and got ready to practice levitating it. However, Dawn's words came back to her and she realized she was overthinking things again. It was simply a matter of feeling the snowball in the air and adjusting to its weight and heft while using a gentler touch to keep it from breaking apart. I can do this. She tried again, slowly raising the snowball in the air above her wing. Gathering the air beneath the snowball, she propelled it upwards into an arc. Her first shot was wide of the mark, landing well behind the boys and their own fortification. With a growl of frustration, Scootaloo loaded up another snowball and tried again. This time, the snowball dropped down in the open ground between the two walls. Okay, almost got it. However, it was apparent that Dawn was not going to simply let her find her range. Scootaloo felt him moving the air on his side of the field and, more importantly, felt the objects he was moving with that air. They were smaller in number, but larger in size, as though the boys had molded several snowballs together into much larger ones that Dawn was going to lob like boulders from a catapult. Hit the deck, screamed Scootaloo, dropping her own snowball and diving down to press up against the wall. Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle joined her just as a snowball the size of a small boulder smacked down where Scootaloo had been standing. It fragmented and sprayed all three of them with snow. "I don't think we're gonna win this one," said Bloom glumly as she shook her head to dislodge the snow. "Oh no we don't," exclaimed Scootaloo, standing upright and rushing to their pile to get some more ammunition. "I'm not about to go down without a fight. Cutie mark Crusaders, Snowball Warriors." "Yay," Sweetie and Bloom added out of reflex as they too dived for the pile of ammunition. On the other side, Spike and Rumble cringed at the echoing yells from the girls' side. "We're in trouble now," intoned Rumble. "Yup," agreed Spike, leading his two friends to surmise that he'd perhaps been spending too much time around Big Macintosh. "I'm not sure I follow," said Don. "We clearly have the advent." He ducked with a yelp before he could finish the sentence as a snowball wrapped in a glowing green aura nearly smacked into his head. Spike and Rumble weren't nearly as lucky, the dragon having been nailed right between the eyes while the Grey Colt received a shot to the side of his muzzle. Taking an opportunity to peek up over the wall, Dawn was surprised to see several more snowy orbs hovering over the girls' side of the battlefield. Sweetie launched them in a single barrage, clearly guiding their trajectories over the wall. "Perhaps I was wrong," said Dawn as he ducked down next to the others. "We are in trouble." "Yeah, Sweetie's gotten really good with her magic," commented Rumble as he dodged another shot. "Oh yeah," said Spike, "let's see how they work around this." He inhaled and reared up to his full height, rising above the top of the wall. Naturally, several more snowballs homed in on him now that he'd made himself such a visible target. However, the dragon simply unleashed a torrent of emerald flames that burnt the snowballs into steam before they could reach him. "Ha!" shouted Spike right before another snowball collided with his head and knocking him tail over teakettle, courtesy of Apple Bloom's rather impressive throwing arm. Dawn looked over at Rumble. "An opponent's time of greatest vulnerability is when he is assured of victory." "Duly noted," replied Rumble, before the two of them looked at Spike as he sat up. "Dang, Bloom's got a mean throw," grumbled the dragon. Now that Spike was down, a veritable hail of snowballs came hurtling over the walls, curving sharply downward as Sweetie Belle's magic altered their trajectories to home in on the boys. Dawn quickly deflected the first wave with a sharp blast of wind before asking Spike, "Can you use your flames to teleport the snowballs?" "I don't think so," replied Spike uncertainly. "At least, I don't think I can without melting them." "Probably best to avoid it then," said Dawn. While the snowball fight was all in good fun, dousing any pony with water in this weather would put them at serious risk. "Well, let's just soldier on then," declared Rumble, scooping up another snowball of his own before popping up and launching it straight for Sweetie, smacking the filly across the muzzle, causing her to drop the next wave of snowballs she'd been about to launch. However, Rumble was caught by another shot from Bloom before he could duck back down. Back and forth the battle went, both sides scoring hits and shifting tactics as they tried to get the upper hoof. After over an hour of prolonged battle, both groups finally ran out of snowballs. By that time, it was getting close to time for them to begin heading home for the day. The foals and dragon went their separate ways, agreeing to meet up again for more fun the next day. "That was the best snowball fight ever," exclaimed Scootaloo as she and Dawn slowly winged their way through the air. The two of them came in for a landing at the front yard of Scootaloo's house. She kissed Dawn on the cheek. "Thanks for helping me back there." Dawn smiled back. "You did pretty well with your wind sense. Actually, all of this gave me some ideas for training that we can do during the winter." "What ideas?" asked Scootaloo. "You'll see," explained Dawn. "When we get our next day off from work, I'll show you." "Okay," said Scootaloo as she headed for her door. "I'll see you tomorrow." Dawn nodded as Scootaloo shut the door behind her before he took off to begin his own flight home. Applejack tilted her Stetson back as she elevated her gaze upwards. "Well, I'll be darned," she said, staring in awe at the brand new orchards worth of trees that had sprung up from the frozen ground overnight. At Twilight's advisement, she'd planted the winter silk apple seeds the week before. Now, the day after Nightmare Night, she'd come to check and see if there was any progress, donning her heavy coat, scarf, and boots to make the trek through the newly laid blanket of snow to the most recently planted plot of land. As it turned out, Twilight's assessment of the winter silk trees' growth had been spot on. Where there had been nothing but dirt and faded, yellowed grass before now stood rows of pale gray trees, adorned with ice blue leaves. Above all else, they looked healthy and strong, having grown tall and thick with as much foliage as any of her other apple trees would sprout during the height of spring and summer. "Do you know when the apples are supposed to grow?" asked Red River. "Nope," said Applejack, "not even Twi's research could tell us that. We've just gotta keep an eye on 'em. I only hope they ain't as finicky as them Zap apples, otherwise we might just miss the signs and lose the whole crop." "Well, we are working with unfamiliar trees here," said Red, squinting up at the leaves, searching for any sign of buds. "It may very well take a year or two to get the harvest right. The farm still makes enough without their contribution, so anything we get out of them now would be pure profit." "I wish that were true," said Applejack. "We ain't gonna go in the red doings it, but I'm spending a little extra to make sure the weather team keeps things round this here orchard nice and cold, no matter what weather might be scheduled for the rest o' town. That ain't a tall order, but we are putting some money into raising these things right." "I'm sure it will be fine," said the stallion. "With your experience, we should be able to see things through. Do you have any idea what you want to do with the apples?" Applejack's brow furrowed. "Well, they're plenty good to sell as is. But I was thinking about what's going on in Canterlot." "You mean you plan on trying for the royal warrant?" asked Red. "Yep," agreed Applejack. "There's gonna be warrants offered fair all kinds o' categories. Depending on when they start selecting, we could probably win at fair our farm with our traditional apple goods, but..." She narrowed her eyes up at the trees. "I remember the taste of these here winter silks. Them's juicin' apples fair sure." "Say apple juice then?" asked Red. "As a start," said Applejack, "but I'm thinking further. I'm thinking these here apples might be good fair distillin'. They grow during winter and have so much sweet juice we could probably make a good hard cider, or even a mighty good batch o' Applejack from them apples. I'm sure it would be a hit." Certainly worth a try, agreed Red, but that can wait until we actually have apples to work with. In the meantime, we need to get back home. Granny Smith said dinner would be soon and she doesn't want you freezing out here. Applejack nodded and turned to follow her cold friend as he led the way back to the farmhouse. Behind them, the first buds began to emerge on the trees. Twilight couldn't stop herself from giggling at the sight of Spike as he trudged through the door. The little dragon was covered from head to toe with a light dusting of snow, making it look as though he'd just been coated with powdered sugar. She was glad that Pinkie Pie wasn't there, otherwise the eccentric baker might have been tempted to simply lick Spike clean. It looks like you had fun, observed the lavender mare as she set down her book and levitated a towel down from the bathroom. Spike took the cloth gratefully and began to wipe down his scales. Unlike his pony friends, Spike wore no jacket or scarf. As a dragon, the internal furnace that fueled his flame also kept his body at a consistent temperature, regardless of the outside temperature, which was what allowed him to take baths in molten lava without the slightest trouble. Being fire-based, Spike's inner flame dealt better with extremes on the hotter end of the spectrum than it did on the colder end. So, while he could walk outside on a brisk winter's day without so much as shivering, he could find himself in trouble if he suddenly found himself in a situation where the temperature dropped quickly and drastically, such as the time he'd fallen asleep on a chunk of melting ice during winter wrap-up. His drying finished, Spike stretched his body, sending numerous pops from his neck, all the way down to his tail, which was beginning to develop a diamond-shaped projection on the tip. According to Twilight's research, it would likely serve as a rudder when he was in the air, helping him maneuver more easily once he started flying. Twilight blinked when she heard the pops from Spike's neck and tail. How long has that been happening? She asked warily. Past couple of weeks or so, said Spike. I just start getting these cricks in my neck and the next thing I know. Pop. Twilight jumped at Spike's exclamation, getting a laugh from the dragon before she leveled a deadpan glare at him. I'm serious, Spike, she growled. What if something's wrong with you? Didn't we go through this before? Asked Spike. I mean, a few months ago, we were freaking out over lumps on my back and it turned out I was growing wings. What could cricks in my neck possibly mean? I don't know, said Twilight, her eyes narrowing, but I think we should find out. I mean, just think of the possibilities. Even if nothing is wrong with you, imagine the boon this could be to our understanding of dragon physiology and anatomy. A dragon's growth from infancy through adolescence to adulthood has never been fully documented. There's probably a good reason for that, muttered Spike. He could think of at least two off the top of his head. The first was that a dragon's lifespan tended to make it difficult for its growth to be effectively charted since the time spans involved could be measured in decades, if not centuries. Secondly, dragons weren't exactly amicable to being studied. I have an idea, said Twilight. I can run some tests on you in the basement. I even have an X-ray. What do you say? No way, exclaimed Spike. I know how you get with those tests of yours. You'll have me down there all night. I'm not doing it. He crossed his arms stubbornly. Can't it wait until morning? But we need to start charting the changes to your body now. Exclaimed Twilight. Please. Rolling her bottom lip, she gave the young dragon her best pleading pout. Not a chance, groused Spike, remaining unmoved. If you do, I promise not to tell Apple Bloom about the lock of Rarity's mane you used to keep under the cushion in your basket. Spike's cheeks flared bright red as he glared at Twilight. Do that and I'll tell Arkenstone about the pretty pony princess's incident. Now it was Twilight's turn to blush and glare as Spike huffed and turned away. Okay, so blackmail didn't work. How about bribery? She smirked. Would you do it for Star Sapphire? Spike's ear frill twitched, but he kept facing the other direction. Nope. How about 2 Star Sapphires? Asked Twilight, her smirk widening. Now Spike's wings twitched. I don't think so. Twilight took a mental tally of the gems she had on hoof in the library. How about 2 Star Sapphires and a ruby? Spike's stomach growled and the dragon finally sagged. Turning around, he looked back at Twilight. Fine. Wonderful, squealed Twilight. What have I gotten myself into? Wondered Spike as Twilight's magical field latched onto him and began to drag him down the stairs into the basement. Author's notes. In sans the epic Snowball War of Ponyville. It was swift and relentless. No prisoners were taken, many casualties were had. It's such a shame that all those safety concerns mean that kids can't have proper snowball fights at school anymore, at least, that's the way things were where I came from. I'm also aware that I might be stretching with Spike's thermal tolerances, seeing as he does end winter wrap up with a cold. But it is worth noting that he went through the whole thing beforehand without so much as a scarf and not expressing a lick of discomfort while every pony else was wearing vests and had the benefit of fur coats, so I figured he's at least substantially cold resistant on his own. I also regret to inform you that I will not be able to update tomorrow on account of the fact that I will be on an airplane back to the mainland. Sadly, my flight doesn't come with Wi-Fi, so we will return to our regularly scheduled updates come Sunday. Next chapter, some unexpected visitors arrive. Exchanging volleys. Chapter 7, Exchanging volleys. Scootaloo yelped sharply as another snowball smacked against her flank. Hey, I wasn't ready. Then practice your readiness, replied Dawn, his voice seeming to echo from all over the place. Scootaloo spun in place, shooting her glare in every direction, trying to get a fix on the ebony colt's position. Unfortunately for her, the forest was Dawn's playground. He moved amongst the trees like a shadow, always seeming to hover just outside the range of her peripheral vision. Even her wind sense wasn't much help, as Dawn kept the air around him moving smoothly and evenly, hiding the eddies that his body would normally generate. Her only warning would be from the very edges of her wind sense when the next projectile came streaking in. You're trying too hard to find me, said Dawn. Instead, focus on what you're here to practice. Scootaloo's brow furrowed as she recalled his instructions. She wasn't the move from her spot. When Dawn sent a snowball in her direction, she couldn't dodge it. Her only option was to defend. She could scatter the snowball with a burst of air from her wings. But the real task was to catch the snowball and send it flying back. When they'd started this morning, it had been in an open clearing, with Dawn simply standing across it from her and launching snowballs at will. Once Scootaloo had gotten used to catching them in her wind without breaking them, then throwing them back, something that was very tricky to do after having just caught it, Dawn had upped the difficulty, leading her into the trees of the Whitetail Woods. He'd hidden himself in their shadows and was now playing a game that was halfway between tag and hide and seek with her. Now the snowballs could come from any direction, at any interval, without any warning whatsoever. When she was taken by surprise, Scootaloo was rarely able to maintain her control well enough to actually catch the snowball. More often than not, she blew the incoming ball into powder. Twice, she overreacted and accidentally smashed the trunk of a tree, causing it to topple over. If you tense up, you restrain your own ability to act. Dawn coached from the shadows, you know the motions and you know how it feels. Let your body do what you trained it to do. The orange filly paused, thinking about what Dawn had said. She knew she could catch his shots. In their earlier practice, she'd even gotten to the point where she could do it without hardly thinking at all. It was just easier when she knew when and where those shots were coming from. Closing her eyes, Scootaloo took a deep breath and willed her body to relax, letting out all the tension and agitation she could feel in that breath. Her wings drooped slightly, but she kept them extended, allowing her awareness to fully expand out into the air around her. Almost immediately, her awareness registered the presence of the trees as the air flowed through and around them, curling about their trunks and branches. There was a strangely steady movement to the air in her immediate vicinity, and Scootaloo realized that it was because of Dawn. To keep the air from curling around his body, he had to smooth out the flow of air as it washed over him. The resulting current had set the air all around him into deliberate motion. Tracking the flow of air, Scootaloo found it the point where it changed paths, as though it were flowing around something. However, the motion was so smooth that she hardly even noticed it had been there at all. Her lips pulled back in a grin. I found you. True to her suspicions, she suddenly sensed a sharp change to the airflow around that spot. Some of the air flowing around the space seemed to suddenly converge onto a single point before bursting outward sharply, propelling another snowball in Scootaloo's direction. She hadn't even sensed it until Dawn had launched it. Now the feeling was more familiar. She'd sensed Dawn preparing to throw the snowball, she'd known which direction it was coming from. Already, Scootaloo's wings were in motion, her body moving without her even really needing to think about it as one wing began to gather the air around her, increasing its density. She felt the movement of the snowball through the air, feeling its mass, shape, and how tightly it had been packed, and was already adjusting the air cushion that she was preparing accordingly. The projectile hit the wave of air and slowed down, coming to a stop mere inches from Scootaloo's wing. Not waiting for it to fall to the ground, Scootaloo was already in motion, moving the air that was compressed between the snowball and the surface of her wing. Driving the limb forward, Scootaloo launched the snowball outward without breaking it apart. The snowball shot almost straight back the way it came. Scootaloo's grin became one of triumph as she felt Dawn suddenly leave his concealment, no longer bothering to keep the air flowing smoothly around him. Instead, the Colt enacted a near-perfect recreation of what Scootaloo had accomplished, catching the incoming snowball on a cushion of air and bringing it to a stop before his wing and then launching it back at her. Scootaloo grinned triumphantly. Dawn was on the move, refusing to just stay in one place after he'd volleyed her shot back at her. He was also trying to smooth out the air currents around him again, but she had his number now. Rather than try to fully stop the snowball as it hurtled towards her, she instead swept it up in a current of air that she created to alter its course and send it rushing towards Dawn's new location, where the Colt had stopped to make a new snowball for himself. Her ears twitched at the sound of Dawn's surprised yelp as the snowball burst across his blank flank. Ha, crowed Scootaloo as she quickly rushed towards Dawn's location. I got you that time. That you did, agreed Dawn with a smirk that made Scootaloo pause as a shiver of fear went down her spine. Oh. You seem to be getting the hang of it, Dawn continued with a sly look at her. He spread his wings and Scootaloo was horrified to see that, instead of only one or even two snowballs, 6 projectiles hovered in swirling patterns over his wings as his smirk became a grin. What say we take it up a notch? Scootaloo's shrill screams echoed through the forest throughout the afternoon. Okay, said Spike as he sat across the table from Twilight. What's the verdict, Doc? Well, said Twilight, looking over her notes, your body has been undergoing some major changes. Spike's growing wings spread and fluttered from his back. Yeah, duh, he rolled his eyes. I'm not just talking about your wings, growled Twilight. She held up an image, a picture from an X-ray. These are your previous X-rays from before when you really started growing. She held up a second picture, this one clearly showing Spike's more recent developments. The bones of his wings were plainly visible. The bones of his limbs were looking longer. However, the strangest developments showed in his spine. It was a bit hard to see, but Spike noticed that he had more backbone than he used to, literally. The number of vertebrae are increasing, said Twilight. You've actually doubled the number in your neck alone. You started with 7 and now you have 14. What does it mean? Asked Spike, twisting his neck experimentally. He was surprised to find that his head was able to turn much further than it had before. If I had to hazard a guess, it means you're elongating, said Twilight. A lot of the adult dragons we encountered in the past had proportionally longer necks and tails than you do. The thing is, if your vertebrae didn't increase in number and simply grew longer instead, your neck, tail, and back would be incredibly stiff and inflexible. I think this development is to allow you to grow into a longer, more serpentine form. It's amazing. Your body is actually producing new bones partway through your post-embryonic life cycle. And there's more. She held up a different picture. This one didn't show Spike's skeleton. Rather, it showed an outline of Spike with a web of lines threading through his body. At first, the dragon thought they were veins or arteries, but that didn't seem quite right. Those are your meridians, she said. Wait, I have meridians. Of course you do, scoffed Twilight. Practically nearly every living thing has meridians. Not all of them are like a pony's or a dragon's, but yours have the same function that mine do, channeling magical energy through your body. What about them then? Their activity has increased radically since you started changing, said Twilight as she set the picture down. I managed to actually record one of your new bones coming in. When that happened, your meridian activity shifted into overdrive. She frowned thoughtfully. It actually looked kind of familiar, sort of like. Like what? Asked Spike, sitting on the edge of his seat in spite of himself. It reminded me of Flaxseed's meridians when he made his eyes appear, explained Twilight. That's when I realized it. It's magic. Oh yeah, said Spike, a bit confused. Of course it's magic. That's not what I mean, said Twilight, a note of frustration creeping into her voice. What I meant is that it's a transformation effect, just like the way the magic flowing through the meridians of dawn and Flaxseed's eyes triggers their transformation into the eyes of nightmare. She leveled her gaze at Spike. It's not just any magic, it's transformational magic. You're not just growing, you're shapeshifting. What? Exclaimed Spike, staring at Twilight with wide eyes. This could explain so much, Twilight was saying, having seemingly become oblivious to the dragon sitting across the table from her. Stormfront and Red River mentioned it before. Dragons come in so many different shapes and sizes. This is why you're natural-born shapeshifters. It might be that your magic allows you to adapt your form for your environment by actively altering your form through your magic in order to optimize your ability to survive in any environment. Do you realize what this means? Maybe, said Spike, sounding rather uncertain. Think about it, exclaimed Twilight. We've talked about the things we could try to do when you grew too big to live in the library anymore. We've talked about a cave, or maybe building a giant house for you. But, if my theories are correct, then maybe we won't need to. Because growing too large would actually hinder me in my chosen environment, said Spike, the realization dawning upon him. His lips spread into a toothy grin. I wouldn't get any bigger because I don't need to be any bigger than a pony to live with you girls. That's right, agreed Twilight, nodding eagerly. Then I wouldn't ever have to leave Ponyville. I could stay here my whole life. And think of what it would mean for you and Apple Bloom, added Twilight. Spike nodded, tears forming in his eyes. Though they weren't completely certain of the results of Twilight's research, it was hopeful news indeed. Twilight quickly swept her faithful assistant up into a hug, which Spike enthusiastically returned. Rarity was amazed. No, amazed didn't quite cover it. She was overjoyed. Flaxseed had said that he was good with numbers, but she had never once realized that he was this good. She had done her own finances and budgets for as long as she could remember, ever since she'd opened her own store. It was the dirty, unpleasant side to running her own business. Sadly, Rarity couldn't spend all her time immersed in a world of fabulous artistry. Materials cost money. There were utility costs, the mortgage, and taxes. Oh yes, there probably wasn't a pony in all of Equestria who enjoyed taxes, even though they were a necessary evil. Every year, she had to give up hours, even days of her precious time to work an abacus, calculate percentages, figure out how much she owed and how much she had to work with afterwards. Sadly, Rarity's gift and enthusiasm for numbers both began and ended with physical measurements. But Flaxseed had barely taken a day to go over her books. In short order, he'd found and corrected several errors in her work, a few of which would actually make her eligible for a refund on her taxes this coming year. He'd looked over the payment plans for her materials, budgeted out her utility costs, and other sundry expenditures. After going through them, he'd recalculated and, so far, he'd managed to put nearly the 1,000 bits back into Rarity's figurative coffers. This is incredible, she gasped as she looked up from the papers that Flaxseed had set in front of her. I'm so grateful to you. It was the least I could do, said the gold-colored stallion with a shrug. There was no denying that he was a sight better than when Rarity had first seen him. His appearance had obviously improved after the first bath and, with regular hygiene, it was only getting better. His mane was still looking a bit ragged and uneven, but even though it made Rarity grit her teeth to see it, she wasn't about to suggest that the stallion put himself in the hooves of another pony wielding sharp objects, like a barber. That was a disaster waiting to happen. He looked healthier as well. Rarity remembered Fluttershy's stories about Dawn's dreadful, lean appearance when she'd first taken him in, fresh out of the Everfree forest. Flaxseed hadn't been as bad, but the shadows under his eyes from a lack of proper sleep and the slight jitter that came with a constant case of nerves were slowly beginning to fade away. And then there was his attitude. When he'd first come into the house, the stallion was incredibly cautious about everything he did. He always hesitated, peeking around a room before entering. He still visibly flinched whenever another pony tried to initiate physical contact with him, even Rarity herself. However, now Flaxseed entered and left rooms without pause. He moved with a great deal more confidence. On the other hoof, he rarely went out and, on the few occasions that he did, he never strayed far from the boutique, perhaps going as far as the library or the tea house next door, but never any farther, on his own at least. If Rarity or Sweetie Belle were willing to go with him, he would range wherever they were willing to escort him to. But he was always careful to try and not inconvenience his hosts. You shouldn't sell yourself short, darling, said Rarity, you truly have a gift for this sort of thing. She opened her mouth to lament the fact that he had never gone to trade school, but thought better of it when she remembered why he hadn't. I wish there was some way I could show my gratitude, she said. It's really okay, said Flaxseed, stepping back a little from Rarity's enthusiasm. You've already given me everything, a place to stay, food, any bits I need. Flaxseed felt particularly guilty about that last part. Having no gainful employment of his own meant that he was completely dependent on Rarity and her friends when it came to anything money-related. He would have looked for a job, but simply setting hoof outside of the boutique without Rarity or Sweetie Belle was a trial. It was an island of peace and stability in an otherwise chaotic and dangerous world for Flaxseed. Strangely, it had felt easier to venture out of his place of residence when he was less certain that he was truly safe there. The last part of his statement seemed to have clicked with Rarity though, as her eyes widened. That's it, she exclaimed, nearly making the jittery stallion fall over backwards. This is perfect. What is it? Asked Flaxseed. Rarity favored him with a positively radiant smile. You can work for me, she said. Based on the amount of money you've saved me, I've more than enough to pay you a wage, with an adjustment for room and board. She gave him a wink at the last part. It seems I could use an accountant if I'm having so much trouble managing my money. For a moment Flaxseed was silent, shocked by Rarity's willingness to employ him. Sure, he'd been staying in the Carousel boutique for the past couple of weeks. But he'd only really thought of it as a temporary thing before now. He'd offered to go over Rarity's books as a gesture of gratitude. But now she was offering him a place to work, even including the room he'd been staying in and the food he'd been eating as part of the compensation. In short, the temporary thing was becoming less temporary. Even though he'd never been one to turn down a job, Flaxseed hesitated. Rarity was slowly, gently cajoling him into letting down his guard, opening him up to the possibility of being hurt once more. All the good things that had been happening to him lately seemed by and large too good to be true. What if, he wondered, what if it ends up being like Camellia all over again? Flaxseed froze for a second before vigorously shaking his head. Stop that, don't think about her again. He looked at Rarity, who had been watching him patiently, waiting for his answer. His hesitation had been more than apparent to her, but still, she made no comment and waited silently for his response. She knew that this would be a difficult decision for the stallion to make. It meant investing more of his trust in her than before. Something was clearly bothering Flaxseed, but she knew better than to pry at the moment. Finally, Flaxseed made up his mind. Thank you. I'd like that, he said slowly. I'm glad to hear that, said Rarity. She slowly held up a hoof to the stallion. Welcome to your new job then. Flaxseed smiled back and reached up to take her hoof in his. Dawn and Scootaloo took a moment to shed their coats and scarves at the door and hang them up, shaking the remaining snow out of their manes and tails as they did so. Their breaths escaped in short pants as their previous exertions had caught up to them. They'd been playing hard through the afternoon, exchanging volleys of snow, practicing both offense and defense. It had been hard but fun. Naturally, Scootaloo had gotten the worst of it. Given Dawn's greater practice and experience, she'd been no real match for him, especially once he'd started launching multiple snowballs at her simultaneously. However, she hadn't gone down without a fight and had managed to land some good hits of her own. Still, by the end of it, both of them had had more than enough of the play as snow managed to get underneath their coats and up against their fur, where it melted and turned into chilly water. As the sun slowly began to dip towards the western horizon, Dawn and Scootaloo had returned to Caramel's house. After getting out of their wet winter wear, the two foals moved to the living room. Dawn stacked some logs in the fireplace and set it alight with a bolt of lightning. Once the fire was crackling merrily, he and Scootaloo got some cushions together and laid them out on the floor. Dawn then went to a closet and pulled out a throw blanket. The two of them laid together, side by side, and Dawn wrapped the blanket around them, carefully making sure that the edges were a safe distance from the flames. Beneath the blanket, Dawn extended his wing and wrapped it around Scootaloo, gently pulling her up against him so that the two were snuggled together, warming up with the combined heat of their own bodies as the warmth of the fire seeped in from outside. With a soft sigh, Scootaloo dropped her head onto the pillow. A few seconds later, Dawn's joining her so that they rested their cheeks together. Have fun? Asked the orange filly softly. Yes, replied Dawn, it's been a long time since I've been able to do that with some pony. Did you do it with your master? Not exactly, said Dawn, we never played with snowballs but we used to spar often. This was good training for you. You said that before, said Scootaloo, glancing sidelong at her colt friend. Because it is, said Dawn, each snowball is different from how it's packed to its shape and weight, all the little things that change how you have to use the wind on it if you want to throw it without blowing it to pieces. It's the kind of control you need to develop in order to avoid hurting others unnecessarily. We could easily spar for real now and you wouldn't have to worry about accidentally hurting me by using too much power. Not that you'd have to worry about that anyway. You really think so? Asked Scootaloo, feeling a little nervous, in spite of Dawn's assurances. Dawn nodded, a gesture that Scootaloo felt more than she saw. Soon, we'll do some measured sparring. What's that? I'll explain when we start, replied Dawn, just as it was with the rocks and the snowballs, the purpose is to learn how to moderate your power. It's actually one of the first things my master did with me when we moved into more advanced training. Cool, said Scootaloo, pausing as she yawned sleepily. The warmth and the feeling of Dawn lying up against her were lulling her into a doze. She didn't think she'd be feeling up to conversing for much longer. Dawn apparently felt the same, squirming to snuggle up a bit closer to her. Scootaloo moved her head to the side, levering Dawn's chin upwards so that she could rest her head across his forelegs. With a smile, Dawn rested his head atop hers and the two of them fell into a light doze in front of the crackling fire. Shortly thereafter, the door opened and Fluttershy stepped into the house. She was carrying saddlebags loaded down with groceries. On the way to the kitchen, she noticed the two foals asleep in front of the fireplace. The sight of them made the canary-colored Pegasus squeal happily. She quickly went to drop the groceries off in the kitchen before rushing upstairs to get something from the room she shared with Caramel. Coming down, Fluttershy quickly lifted the camera she brought, using her wings to steady her body so that she could aim the lens properly. With a soft click, the image was preserved forever. They look so cute together, thought Fluttershy happily as she went to put the camera back. Flitter hated working with snow clouds. Certainly, snow was pretty and the sight of Ponyville after a good, long snowstorm that she'd helped to shape was a rewarding one, but she still hated snow clouds. The insulated mitts over her forehooves offered only so much protection against the chilly masses of moisture. After hours spent hauling the clouds to their destination, setting them into position, and adjusting them so that the snowfall would last just the right amount of time, the cold slowly seeped in through the fabric of the mitts, gradually numbing her hooves. Over time, the chill traveled further up her forelegs. The work never seemed to end until right before she was on the verge of getting frostbite. To make matters worse, this was the kind of job Flitter was good at. The dragonflies on her flank marking her skill at fluttering about, moving with precision and care, setting up everything exactly where it needed to be. It was one of the reasons Rainbow Dash had always given her so much responsibility with storms like this one, where everything needed to be just right. And Flitter loved seeing the final product of her effort, watching the snow fall down outside the home she shared with her sister and Thunderlane, warming her hooves around a cup of hot chocolate or maybe a warm cider. But she still hated having to move the snow clouds. Her body was beginning to shiver as the cold built up. She was lucky her shift was nearly over. While she might have been tempted to break off her work and find a way to let the last few minutes trickle away, the grayish-purple mare was determined to put forth her best efforts. She had her pride as a key member of the Ponyville weather team. So she simply continued doing her job as the feeling in her hooves gradually faded away altogether. Setting yet another cloud into place, Flitter was almost feeling too cold to even notice the gentle tapping on her shoulder. Turning around, her eyes widened as she saw Stormfront, hovering there quietly. Our time's up, he said softly, let's go back. The dark cloud-colored stallion slowly led Flitter down out of the clouds and towards his house. Flitter had been spending a great deal of time there lately. Though he was quiet and not overly talkative, it was nice to simply relax with him, basking in a comfortable silence that neither of them felt the need to fill. It was a nice contrast to the somewhat noisy atmosphere of Flitter's home, where Cloud Chaser was constantly bantering with Thunderlane, always filling the background with noise. Perhaps that was why Flitter and Rumble got along so well. Thunderlane's little brother wasn't nearly as talkative or noisy as Thunderlane himself. It was one of the reasons Flitter never minded looking after him whenever Thunderlane and Cloud Chaser went out on one of their dates. Storm opened the door to his home to let them both in. Flitter went through the door first, diving out of the cold as the stallion closed the door behind them. Going through the house, he turned on the lights before turning his attention to the fireplace, where the embers of the fire he'd started earlier in the morning still glowed. A heavy mesh grate hung across the entrance, keeping sparks from escaping outwards. Pulling the grate aside, Stormfront laid down some fresh logs and carefully blew on the embers, rekindling the flames to start the fire anew. Meanwhile, Flitter stripped out of her coat and hung up her scarf. She took off her boots and mitts, letting them stand off to one side of the door, where no pony would trip over them. Her forehooves were so numb that it was difficult for her to keep her balance as she made her way into the living room. The interior of Stormfront's house was cool but not cold, as some of the residual heat from the fire Stormfront had lit in the morning still lingered. Flitter shivered as she settled herself down on some cushions set out near the fireplace. She held her forehooves up to the small flames licking up, trying her best to get warmed as the fire gathered momentum. Here, let me see. Stormfront settled next to her and gently turned Flitter to face him. He picked up a poker from the fireplace and began to feel around near the base of the flames. Using the poker, he levered a small, oval-shaped stone from the flames. What's that? Asked Flitter, gazing at the unassuming rock. Even though it had been pulled out from under the embers, it showed no signs of charring from the fire's heat. Without any hesitation whatsoever, Stormfront picked it up with his bare hooves, prompting a gasp from Flitter. However, there was no indication that Stormfront was being burned in the slightest. Instead, he gently pressed the stone up against one of her hooves. It was cool to the touch at first, but within a few seconds, it grew warm against Flitter's fur, the heat seeming to stream out of the stone and into the skin beneath it. It flowed into her, chasing the cold numbness out of her forehoof, slowly coaxing it back to life. Flitter let out a quivering sigh. Oh, that feels wonderful. Stormfront smiled and transferred the stone to Flitter's other hoof, warming it as well. Once Flitter's hooves were fully thawed and warmed, Stormfront once again placed the stone in the fireplace and used the poker to push it down underneath the logs and the still burning ashes. Where did you get that? Asked Flitter as she and the stallion cuddled up together. She tucked herself beneath his wing and nuzzled up against his shoulder. Twilight Sparkle made it for me, explained Storm. After the first snowfall, when I found out about how your hooves get cold easily, I asked her help. She's laid some spells into the stone. It stores heat from the fire and then releases it when it's pressed up against a pony's body. What's more, the inlaid spells direct the flow of the heat so that it can thoroughly warm the body more efficiently. That's amazing, said Flitter. You did that for me. Well, Twilight Sparkle did most of the work, said Storm, looking away, seeming a bit embarrassed. Flitter giggled lightly and nuzzled his mane. But you asked her because you were thinking about me. Thank you so much. Storm's lips curled up into a small, subtle smile. It was the least I could do. You accepted me, even though I lied to you about my reasons for being in Ponyville, even though I lied to you about what I am, even though you know what I am. Flitter sighed. Of course I accepted you, she said. I like you because I know what you are. Leaning over, she kissed Storm lightly on the cheek. You're a good pony. To me, it doesn't matter what job you have. You're a good pony who fights to make sure that every pony else is safe and happy. What's not to like? Storm chuckled. It was a rare sound coming from the normally taciturn stallion. I suppose, when you put it like that, I can't argue. The two ponies stepped off the train and onto the platform. Casting their eyes around, they surveyed the scenery of Ponyville in winter, taking in the sight of the snow covering the ground. Even now, the Pegasi were beginning to move the clouds into position for another storm, this one a bit lighter than the last one. Looking at one another, they nodded before taking to the air, their flight taking them up above the level of the clouds. The setting sun hadn't reached the horizon and still shined brightly across the assembled cloudscape, giving the impression that the two Pegasi were flying above a fluffy gray carpet. With the sun shining freely, the air above was considerably warmer than below. Of course, with the clouds serving as a barrier, it was almost impossible to navigate across Ponyville, since none of its landmarks were visible from this altitude. However, that was not an issue for these two Pegasi, as they knew exactly where they were heading without having to consult a map. It wasn't long before they dipped their flight, swooping down below the clouds. In the course of their soaring flight, they'd passed the limits of the town proper and were now over the outskirts. Their path took them down towards a small cottage standing a short distance away from one of Equestria's most dangerous forests. Their shadows crossed over the small bridge that ran over the brook that ran in front of the cottage, over the front yard, before they alit on the steps leading up to the front door. For a moment, they stood there, eyeing the cottage carefully. The building was dark and empty-looking, with no obvious signs of life. The mare took a step forward, eyeing the house a little nervously. Don't you think it's a little late to be coming here? If the lights are out, she must be in bed already. The stallion snorted softly. I doubt it. It's still early in the evening. She must be out with her friends. But what about him? The mare glanced nervously at the stallion. Do you think he's here? Let's find out, said the stallion before raising a hoof and rapping it against the door. They waited several minutes, but there was no response from within the silent cottage. Maybe they went out together, the mare suggested. Maybe, replied the stallion, continuing to survey the door. Come on, let's go check in at the inn, said the mare, slowly tugging the stallion away from the door. Who knows, we may see them in town. Maybe, said the stallion hesitantly. The two of them began to make their way down the path out of the yard. As they did, his eyes fell on the mailbox and he noticed something. Look. The red flag that normally indicated outgoing mail had been raised. However, a blue clip had been attached to it. It was an item used by ponies to provide an easy visual indicator that the mailbox's owner was going to be away for an extended period. She went on vacation, asked the mare. Maybe, said the stallion, moving to the mailbox. Since boxes so marked wouldn't hold any mail while the clip was attached to the flag, the owner could easily leave information pertaining to where she would be while she was away. The stallion opened the box and wasn't at all surprised to see a note containing an address. It says she's going to be staying there for the season, he said. Out of town. No, it's in town. She must be spending the season with one of her friends. I suppose that makes sense, said the mare as the stallion slid the note back into the box and closed it. Should we go and try to find it? Let's go to the inn first, said the stallion. We may have to look around a little and I want to make sure we have a room before anything else. The two of them took to the air and were soon winging their way swiftly back into town. Fluttershy set down the mug of warm cider she'd been drinking with a happy sigh as she lounged on the living room, snuggled up against Caramel, the two of them facing the crackling fire. From the kitchen came the sound of clinking plates and running water as Dawn and Scootaloo cleaned the dishes after dinner, the two of them having volunteered so that the adults could relax together. In the past, Fluttershy would have been extraordinarily worried about letting Scootaloo anywhere near anything breakable. The Cutie Mark Crusaders were notorious to the point that it was easier to ask what kind of object they hadn't broken yet. However, much like her other friends, Scootaloo's experience at the tea house had helped to teach her the dexterity and patience necessary to handle most crockery without breaking it. Fluttershy wouldn't be letting the filly touch Caramel's fine china anytime soon, but Scootaloo and Dawn could be trusted with their current task. Caramel had been reading. However, as the sound of dishes continued from the kitchen, he looked up at Fluttershy. So, he said, heartwarming is coming soon. Have you thought about what you want? Well, not really, admitted Fluttershy sheepishly. It was something that embarrassed her a little. She always tended to wait until the last minute to figure out what she wanted for heartwarming, frustrating her friends to no end when they rarely had any idea what to shop for. Granted, there were any number of items that they could probably pick out themselves, but that sometimes carried the risk of getting something that Fluttershy already had. She had the same problem with her birthdays as well. What about you? She asked, hoping to deflect the question for the time being. Same thing, said Caramel, his blush now mirroring Fluttershy's own. Besides, I got what I really wanted this season. He leaned in and gently kissed Fluttershy right behind the base of her ear, making her giggle. Oh you, she said, gently smacking the back of his head with her wing. If I was Rainbow Dash, I would have said that was very cheesy. Yeah, but you're not Rainbow, replied Caramel with a sly smile. No, I'm not, agreed Fluttershy, her smile matching his, which is why I think that's sweet. They leaned in and pressed their lips together into a kiss. Dishes are done, announced Scootaloo, trotting into the room as Caramel and Fluttershy pulled apart. Now what? She and Dawn could always join Caramel and Fluttershy lounging in front of the fire. But she'd had enough lounging for the day thanks to the nap she'd taken with Dawn earlier. Caramel tapped his chin for a moment before his face lit up. I've got it, he exclaimed. He got up and trotted out into the hall, opening the closet. He had to rear up onto his hind legs to reach the shelf at the top of the closet so that he could rummage around. A few minutes later, he returned with a stack of thin, broad boxes. How about we make it a family game night? Oh, that sounds like a wonderful idea, exclaimed Fluttershy as she got off the couch. She began sorting the cushions, making room for a board game to be set up between the four of them. What game should we play? Asked Scootaloo, eyeing the various games, her gaze glancing from one to another. Well, nothing too long, said Caramel, picking out a couple of the more complex games and setting them aside. It's going to start snowing soon and you still have to head home tonight. Should we let Dawn pick? He looked at the colt. Dawn blinked and stared at the games, almost uncomprehendingly. Since the bulk of his experiences with his friends had been outdoors, board games were practically a foreign concept to him. I'll choose, said Scootaloo, immediately noticing Dawn's dilemma. Though it was something she hadn't played in a while, she chose one of the simplest games from the pile. It was a rather simple game where the pieces moved forward according to the roll of the dice. The pieces traveled along a path of squares that led to the endpoint, the goal of the game. Some of the squares had instructions that could lead the pieces to either move forward or backwards. There wasn't too much to explain, so they managed to get playing right away and Dawn was able to learn the rules rather easily. It was then that they discovered one of Dawn's weaknesses. He apparently had horrid luck when it came to games of chance. The colt looked on with consternation as he always rolled low numbers with the dice, only managing to inch his piece forward a few squares at a time and always seeming to land on the penalty squares that sent his piece backwards. Still, he seemed to be having fun overall, even if he was losing as Scootaloo, Caramel, and Fluttershy pulled ahead of him. As they played, the group chatted, especially about the approaching holiday. Have you decided what you want for heartwarming? Asked Fluttershy, looking at her son. Want? Asked Dawn, I'm not sure what you mean. For a present, said Scootaloo, every pony gets presents on heartwarming. They do. Dawn sat there blinking for a moment. Caramel rolled the dice and moved his game piece. Didn't your master teach you about heartwarming? He did, said Dawn. I mean, he used to tell me the story behind it and how it was important. But he never mentioned anything like presents. Didn't you celebrate it? Asked Fluttershy, her eyes wide. Not really, said Dawn. I remember decorations for it, but we rarely ended up staying in one place long enough to actually do anything like that for ourselves. What did your master teach you about heartwarming? Wondered Caramel. Well, said Dawn, thinking back. Is it really so important? Asked Dawn as he and his master walked down the street, their eyes taking in the colorful garlands and ornaments hanging from nearly every wall and lamppost. It is the holiday that celebrates the founding of Equestria, replied his master coolly. As Pegasi went, he was something of an oddity. His pale cream coat and grayish-white mane were fairly unassuming. However, both of them contrasted sharply against his wings, which were a dark gray with flecks of pitch black. It was rare for a Pegasus to be born with wings of a different color than their coat. Is that why it's so important? Wondered Dawn. Yes and no, replied Darkwing, looking down at his pupil. Technically, Equestria's founding was more of an afterthought to the true significance of the holiday. For, if we had learned the lessons that truly lay at the heart of this celebration, then we ponies would have never needed to come to this land to begin with. Because of the Wendigos. Darkwing sighed. Because of their own foolishness. Given what you've learned about the Gale King from me, it's obvious what question must be asked. Dawn thought it over for a moment. If the masters of the three pillars were so powerful, shouldn't they have been able to drive the Wendigos back? Exactly, said Darkwing. This holiday's significance varies from pony to pony. But for ponies like us, those who follow the martial path, it serves as a reminder that force and violence are almost never the best solution to any problem. In fact, there are some problems that simply can't be solved with force. The Wendigos are a perfect example of this. They feed upon anger and strife. They are spiritual entities. Even if a true master can void her heart and deal harm to that which has no body, the Wendigos would simply be rejuvenated by the continued animosity between the three tribes. In the end, what saved us ponies from the Wendigos was not our magic, nor any form of martial skill. It was us overcoming the divides we had placed between one another, finding peace with each other and building a nation on the basis of union, rather than division. So that is the fire of friendship every pony is always singing about, said Dawn. More or less, agreed his master. The stallion looked around. Come, we need to find shelter for the evening. Your lessons will continue in the morning. Huh, that's Scootaloo wasn't sure she knew what to say as Dawn finished his retelling. It's profound, I suppose, said Caramel. There was something about Don's story that made him uneasy, though he couldn't put his hoof on it. So, was that it? Asked Fluttershy. You didn't do anything to really celebrate heartwarming, did you? I suppose not, said Don. Fluttershy frowned pensively, not entirely liking it. Don had always given very little in the way of details when it came to how he'd interacted with the pony who had essentially raised him. He'd never shared any specific anecdotes before. If this was how Darkwing treated such a special occasion as heartwarming, then maybe there wasn't all that much to tell. Heartwarming was a time for celebration, to enjoy the winter season in the company of other ponies and freely share affection with one another. While Don's eyes could be attributed to the fact that few other ponies had wanted his company over the holiday, he should have at least been able to enjoy it with the one pony who actually cared about him. Instead, it seemed that Don's only pertinent memories of the day were probably like those of any other day, another lesson to be learned, nothing special at all. The more she learned of Don's master, the sadder she felt. It seemed that Darkwing's relationship with Don was one of cool aloofness, devoid of almost any real expression of affection and care, a relationship between teacher and pupil, rather than something closer to father and son. In many ways, the flat, bland stoicism that Don had exhibited when she had first met him made more sense now than ever. In her heart, Fluttershy resolved to find a way to make Don's first heartwarming with her as special as she possibly could. The conversation had to be shelved though, as it and the game were interrupted by a knocking at the door. I'll get it, said Caramel, getting up and stretching his legs. He opened the door and peered out at the two ponies waiting at the step. Can I help you too? The mare and the stallion at the door shared a confused glance before turning back to look at the tan stallion. I'm sorry, said the mare, we must have the wrong address. We're looking for Fluttershy. Oh, said Caramel, no, you have the right address. He blinked and took a closer look at the couple. The mare's coat was a familiar pale yellow in her mane, that same light pink color. The stallion's coat was an icy gray with a light blue mane. His dark green eyes met Caramel's and narrowed with suspicion. Backing away from the intensity of the stallion's stare, Caramel looked over his shoulder. Shy, I think it's for you. Oh, Fluttershy got up and made her way to the door. As she stepped around Caramel, her eyes widened when she saw the two ponies waiting outside for her. Mom, Dad. Author's notes. It's the moment quite a few of you have been asking about next time. Today was something else, particularly since it's actually been one long day since yesterday. We got up yesterday morning, gathered up our luggage, checked out, spent the whole day wandering around the big island, visiting all sorts of fun spots in the midst of a near continuous downpour, thank you Hurricane Anna. Still, a Hawaiian rainstorm isn't as bad as some rainstorms, especially when it's not full-blown monsoon-level rain. It felt kinda nice. But all good things must come to an end, so we boarded our flight to the mainland at 10 o'clock in the evening, flew across the Pacific to Phoenix before catching our connecting flight back to Denver, during which I didn't sleep a single wink. I don't know how some people can doze or even sleep on those flying sardine cans. I certainly can't. As a consequence, I've been up for over 24 hours with only a light nap to sustain me when I got back home. Fortunately, I think I can get back into the groove of things pretty quickly, so there shouldn't be any further delays and updates until the next thing comes along, whatever it may be. Next chapter, which is more terrifying, Don meeting his grandparents, or Caramel meeting the ponies who might become his in-laws someday.